Imagine the world freezing to death, but you're living like a king with an infinite food supply. After being betrayed and killed, Zhang regresses back in time to build an invincible fortress and take his revenge. Watch how he turns the apocalypse into his personal playground. The story begins with our sorrowful protagonist having his limbs severed by a brutal mob, who were cheering and shouting that they finally found something to eat. Naturally, he ended up in this miserable state because he followed the ham bully, a manipulative figure in his life, and let the man control his mind. This becomes painfully clear when we see a girl demanding an extra share of him, since she was the one who managed to trick him into opening the door. At that moment, our hero burst into tears while watching his own flesh being handed out. He swore that if he ever got another chance, he would take revenge on all of them. It wouldn't be an ordinary revenge, either. He would pay them back 100 times the pain he was feeling at that moment. However, time blurs and our hero suddenly opens his eyes to find himself in a state of sheer disbelief. He was certain that the neighbors had just broken in and killed him moments ago, so how was he able to move normally again? To figure out what was happening, he checked his phone. To his absolute shock, the date was November 12th, a full month before the global freezing catastrophe. He rushed to the balcony, and seeing the world unchanged, he realized he had been reborn. Then our protagonist, Zhang, starts recounting exactly what happened. In December 2050, a massive meteorite struck the planet, plunging the world into an ice age. Ever since that moment, the temperature in Tianhai City, where he lives, dropped to a permanent -70°C, accompanied by blizzards that lasted for a whole month and claimed countless lives. He continues by explaining how, in his past life, he relied on his connection with a convenience store owner to buy a huge amount of supplies and store them in his house. But in the end, like a fool, he allowed a group of thieves into his home. They took all his supplies and even chopped him up to eat him. Because of this, he realized he had to focus entirely on gathering a massive stockpile of resources and getting his revenge. Naturally, this stockpile had to include entertainment, food, and various weapons strong enough to blow those son-of-a-bitch thieves away. Like any protagonist in a manhua, he discovered he had a unique ability, a massive, boundless storage space where he could put whatever he liked. A brilliant idea hit him: to buy out everything in the massive hypermarket and put it inside his storage space. But before doing all that, he went to a restaurant and ordered every kind of food, having survived for years on instant noodles that no one else could even find. After finishing his meal, he received a VIP customer card from the restaurant because he spent over 50,000 yuan. Right at that moment, the treacherous girl Yu and her friend overheard that he was rich. The friend told her that the guy she used to crush on was actually wealthy and that she needed to get close to him. Yu was caught off guard, recalling how he used to pretend to be poor in the past. With no warning, she approached him and said, "What a pleasant surprise." Of course, Zhang had learned his lesson after what happened in his past life. He pulled out his credit card and said he was heading to the supermarket to buy some things, thinking to himself that he would let them help carry his stuff to his house, and in the end, he wouldn't give them anything. True to form, the toxic friends said they were also going shopping and were happy to help carry things to his house since they were neighbors. When they arrived at the store, seeing the sheer volume of his purchases, the girls were stunned, thinking he was throwing a party or going on a trip. Zheng replied with utter sarcasm, telling them he was just building up a stockpile in case a disaster hit soon. You thought he was just messing with them and told him it was better not to lie, but she insisted he treat them to lunch soon, since he had essentially become their employer. Zheng replied that he was busy during this period but would treat them next month. At that moment, her friend Kai snapped at him, telling him to stop acting like a cheapskate. However, Yu stepped in, pulled her back, and apologized to Zheng. She explained that her silly friend didn't mean it, and Kai quickly backed down, apologizing as well, given her lack of morals and principles. Meanwhile, Yu was secretly confident that Zheng wouldn't let them down. True to form, Zheng answered them, saying he would keep his word and treat them to ice and 3 blizzards, sarcastic slang for the upcoming apocalypse, a month from now. After finishing shopping and carrying the goods, he was just approaching his house while still having the toxic girls employed as his helpers. An old neighbor noticed that he was buying so much stuff and assumed the supermarket was having a big sale, so she came over and asked why they were buying so much. They told her it was all Zheng's and they were just helping him out. The old lady immediately turned to Zheng and said, "Hey kid, give me some of that," while her spoiled, ill-mannered little kid helped himself to Zheng's chocolate. This instantly triggered Zheng, who snatched his stuff back and told them he needed all of the supplies. The little brat threw a tantrum, yelling, "Give me the chocolate, you stupid piece of trash." Zheng lost his temper and snapped, warning the kid that if he opened his mouth again, he'd beat him right in front of his mother. The kid burst into tears, which annoyed the old lady, who told Zheng not to make a big deal out of it since it was just a piece of chocolate. She added that she would buy it from him and pay him back later. But our protagonist replied with pure coldness, telling her to pay up right now or go buy her own stuff, then walked away and left her standing there, fuming and shouting various elderly insults. When they finally reached his house, Yu reminded Zheng not to forget to treat them to a nice meal next time. Zheng promised he would and slammed the door right in her face because he was sick of looking at them. Once he was done with all that, he started putting all the supplies into his storage space. He wanted to double-check if the food would spoil or stay fresh inside. He then looked at his list of essential items, noting that medicine would be easy to acquire. The top priority now was getting a good heating system for the house. After that, it would be time to figure out the weapons. Getting basic tools like knives, axes, and crossbows would be easy, but the real problem was figuring out how to acquire real firepower, like pistols, assault rifles, and maybe even bazookas. Suddenly an idea struck him. He needed to sell all his assets and raise as much cash as possible, as buying weapons would become much easier later on. The next morning, he took out the products he'd bought to inspect them. To his amazement, the food remained completely fresh. While the living creatures, like the fish, had died, they hadn't rotted at all. Now completely confident that he could keep his food perfectly fresh, Zheng called the biggest and best restaurant, telling them he was hosting a massive, 3-day feast and needed meals to cover 500 tables. The restaurant replied that this would cost around 1 million yuan and required a 200,000 yuan upfront deposit to get started. Right after, our protagonist went to the bank and took out a loan using his house as collateral. Combining the loan amount with his personal savings, he now had a total of 6 million yuan. Even so, he knew this money wouldn't be enough for everything he wanted to buy. As he stood there lost in thought, a bleach blonde guy approached him and asked if he needed a loan, noting that getting bank loans could be a bit tricky with all the strict requirements. Our protagonist, his face lighting up with joy, replied that he would need about 5 million yuan and asked if his company could provide it, assuring him that he could pay it all back in just 3 months. They proceeded. The bleach blonde guy brought Zheng to his company and introduced him to the boss, Big Boss Chu. He told the boss that Zheng wanted to take out a loan. Big Boss Chu spun around in his chair in a cinematic motion, asking about the loan amount and the time frame Zheng needed to pay it back. He also warned our protagonist that their interest rates were extremely high, pointing out that to borrow 5 million, he would have to pay back 7 million, an increase of nearly 40%. To Chu's surprise, our protagonist readily agreed and even thanked him for his help. As he was signing the contract, Chu explained that Zheng needed to put up some collateral to secure the loan. Zheng chuckled to himself and offered his house, even though he had already mortgaged it to the bank. He claimed the house was worth about 5 million and that his Mercedes was worth around 300,000. Unfortunately, the manager pointed out that in their view, his house was only worth about 4.5 million, meaning they would take a loss. Well, then just lend me 4 million, you giant Chu, and I'll still pay you back 7 million, our protagonist countered. Seeing the paperwork and verifying the house was indeed under Zheng's name, Chu agreed. After Zheng left, the cunning blonde guy remarked that the kid really seemed to need the money, since he agreed to an interest rate of nearly 100%. Chu agreed, noting that they had already hit their target for the month and wouldn't need to work hard until the next one. Meanwhile, on the other side of the door, our sly protagonist muttered, "What a joke, these guys are practically handing me free money." After paying for the restaurant order, he had exactly 9 million yuan left. He headed straight to the headquarters of the Dragon Security Company, the largest home fortification firm in all of China. Zheng recalled hearing in his past life that they had built a multi-million-dollar fortified safe house for one of China's richest men, a place no one was ever able to breach. A man named Warren interrupted his thoughts, introducing himself as the business manager. Zheng quickly stepped up and said he wanted to fortify his house to the point where it could withstand even an apocalyptic catastrophe. Warren responded professionally and handed him a price list. Zheng didn't know much about this kind of hardware, so he decided not to overthink it and just let the expert handle the choices. All he needed was for his apartment to become an impenetrable fortress. Once the order was placed, Warren reassured him. He noted that even though Zheng's apartment was on the 24th floor and measured less than 120 square meters, the planned upgrades and defensive features would turn it into an absolute castle. Zheng asked if the guy actually knew anything about building castles, or if he was just blowing smoke. Warren replied that he had previously worked with mercenary armies around the globe, so he was dead certain about what he was saying. Hearing this, Zheng immediately asked if Warren knew a way to acquire actual firearms. Warren explained that these items were illegal to carry without government permission, and asked if Zheng was in danger. Zheng candidly explained that there really were some bastards who would literally eat him if they caught him, and therefore, it made no sense to spend the full 8 million yuan turning his home into a fortress, only to die a pathetic, comical death. Warren stood up, promising they would complete the fortification within half a month and that, during that time, he would look into getting Zheng the gun he was asking for. After that, Zheng went to an international shooting range to purchase a set of crossbows. When he was done, he got into his car feeling completely relaxed, as his hunting license legally allowed him to carry crossbows and hunting knives. When he returned to his apartment building, he found the restaurant staff arriving with all the food, but the building's security guard had blocked them from entering without Zhang's permission. Zhang walked over, greeted him as uncle, and told him to let the delivery staff in, confirming he was the one who ordered the food. The security guard and the rest of the neighbors were stunned, whispering and asking each other if Zhang was throwing a feast. Standing right in the middle of that crowd of onlookers was Yu. The toxic girl was convinced that he was truly wealthy, so she decided to try and make him fall in love with her, to flirt with him, and even get him to propose and marry her. Once Zhang explained the situation to the security guard, Uncle Lao, the man finally allowed the delivery vehicles to bring the food into the storage area. Meanwhile, Yu was trying to seduce Zhang, while he kept telling himself that he would never forget what she had done to him, and that he would exact the most gruesome revenge imaginable. Afterward, he went to the storage facility to look at the massive amount of food he had purchased, which was more than enough to feed 500 tables of people and then some. Within moments, he was beaming with joy as he began transferring all of it into his storage space. The best part was that all these meals were already prepared, requiring zero effort on his part when he wanted to eat later on. Things kept going this way, with Zhang bringing in more supplies every single day. On top of that, the construction crew was busy turning his apartment into an absolute fortress. This whole spectacle left the other residents completely bewildered. They gossiped about how he was doing crazy action movie stuff every day. One old man even turned to his friend, saying he felt like Zhang was preparing for the end of the world. Later on, Zhang received a message from Warren, who told him he had finally found the weapon Zhang was looking for, though it was going to be quite expensive. Zhang replied that quality was the only thing that mattered, and that he was willing to pay whatever it cost. Zhang handed the apartment keys over to the workers and told them he'd be staying at a hotel until they finished. As he walked away, people stared at him as if he were crazy, which made Zhang think to himself, they'll find out who the real madman is when they see what happens in a month. After that, Zhang went to the manager of the convenience store where he used to work and asked him to help source a large batch of medicine. The manager's brother-in-law happened to be the vice president of one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the city. Zhang offered to pay double the market price for the medication. The manager agreed to the deal and also approved the 20-day leave Zhang had previously requested. The next day, Zhang went to the warehouse to check on the supplies, remarking that it was enough to feed thousands of people. He made a mental note that he would have to completely rob and empty out this warehouse exactly 1 week before the apocalypse began, just in case anything went wrong. When he got home, he started receiving messages from Yu asking about his weird behavior lately. Zhang began to wonder if she was genuinely starting to suspect something. Right after that, she sent another message claiming she felt lonely and just wanted to chat for a bit. Since Zhang completely ignored her, she grew furious, wondering why he had changed so much toward her. Her friend Kai agreed, pointing out that Zhang had been buying massive amounts of things over the past few weeks, as if they were running out of time. Yu started to worry and asked if Kai thought Zhang had inside information about an upcoming disaster, which was why he was preparing. Kai burst into laughter, telling her that if there were any real news like that, they definitely would have heard about it. A week later, our protagonist was holding the firearm he finally received from Warren. He remarked that he was almost done with everything. All he had to do was wait for the fortification of his safe house to be completed. A little while later, our protagonist went to inspect his fortified apartment and thanked Warren for all his hard work. Warren accepted the first installment of the payment and reminded Zhang not to forget to pay the remaining balance within 3 months. As Warren walked away, Zhang chuckled to himself, knowing full well that he wouldn't be paying a single cent more since the apocalypse was about to hit anyway. While he was lost in thought, the delivery crew showed up with the water supply, snapping him back to reality. Zhang noted that everything was finally set up. The only thing remaining was clearing out the warehouse. When he went downstairs to accept the water delivery, he ran into Uncle Lao, who greeted him and curiously asked about all the water. Zhang thought to himself that Lao was a good man. He was a good guy, and having treated him very well in his past life, Zhang decided to give him a gentle warning. He mentioned that he had heard this winter would be brutally cold and that prices were about to skyrocket, advising Lao to start stockpiling food and water just like he was to avoid being taken advantage of by price gougers. Lao hesitated for a moment and asked if the information was reliable. Zhang told him that if he wasn't sure, he wouldn't be filling his own house with all these supplies. However, their conversation was interrupted by one of their neighbors who told Lao not to believe the nonsense, claiming our protagonist was just trying to trick him into buying some of the supplies he'd hoarded at a higher price. Lao tried to tell the neighbor that Zhang wasn't a liar, but the neighbor just grabbed Lao by the collar and dragged him away. Meanwhile, Zhang thought to himself that he had already done his part. The rest was up to Lao. Over the next few days, Zhang threw all his energy into gathering resources. He also kept visiting the international shooting range to sharpen his archery and shooting skills. 3 days before the catastrophe struck, Zhang put a sleeping pill in the water cooler used by his coworkers at the supermarket warehouse. He went over and told them he had brought them some warm water in case they wanted to have a drink during their break. They eagerly drank, complaining that the weather was excessively cold and that they really needed the warm water. Within half an hour, the sleeping pills took effect, and everyone was sound asleep. Once Zhang was sure that not a single person was awake, he turned off the security cameras and headed to the warehouse. Without wasting a second, he began transferring all the inventory into his storage space. As he was packing everything away, he realized that even if he wanted to store the entire country's supply in his space, there would still be plenty of room to spare. Just as he finished the job and was about to catch his breath, he noticed a massive, luxurious crate standing against the wall. He went over to inspect it and found a collection of heavy-duty coats designed with 2050 technology, capable of withstanding temperatures as low as -100 degrees Celsius, meaning no ice storm could break through them. After packing those boxes into his storage space as well, he had checked off every single item on his to-do list. To make the scene look completely realistic, Zhang went back and took a sip of the water laced with the sleeping pill himself. Even though it was basically impossible for anyone to suspect that a single person could have robbed the entire warehouse, it was better to be safe than sorry. A while later, a panicked coworker woke him up. The guy called him manager, waking Zhang from his slumber. Our protagonist opened his eyes and calmly asked, "What are you freaking out about, man?" The coworker stammered that someone had completely robbed the warehouse, leaving not even a single box behind. Zhang immediately snapped into the act he had been rehearsing for the past week, putting on a terrified face and rushed straight to the warehouse. He shouted in disbelief, asking how on earth everything could have been stolen so quickly. His act was interrupted by a phone call from the branch manager. When Zhang answered, the manager exploded, demanding an immediate explanation regarding the theft. Zhang calmly explained that they had only taken a 2-hour break, and when they returned, everything was completely gone. Naturally, the manager screamed at him over the phone, accusing him of being an inside man and stealing the supplies himself. Zhang chuckled and replied that even if he were a spy, there was no logical way he could have emptied an entire warehouse in just 2 hours. He added that the most important thing right now was to report this to upper management before they ended up taking the blame themselves. The manager started sweating and panicked, admitting that Zhang was right and saying he would report it immediately. After hanging up, Zhang turned to the other workers and explained that an investigation team would be coming to look into the situation, telling them they must. They had to cooperate with them, and soon the police arrived. After the investigation, the authorities couldn't find anything to pin on Zhang. However, the detective advised him not to leave the city for the time being, just in case they needed to ask him any follow-up questions. Zhang replied that he wasn't planning on going anywhere or even leaving his house for the next couple of days. Checking his phone, Zhang noticed that there were exactly 2 days left until the global freezing catastrophe. He began to see that the world outside was suddenly snowing, a clear sign that the event was truly near. He quickened his pace on his way home, muttering that the world would completely change in less than 48 hours. 2 days later, at exactly 2:00 a.m., the disaster began. News broke that a meteorite had collided with the Earth, and the aftermath caused the temperature to drop down to -100 degrees. Naturally, the only person who wasn't worried and was actually thrilled was the fearless Zhang. He sat comfortably, drinking a hot cup of coffee as he watched the news and social media comments. Since it was just the beginning and the temperature had only dropped to -10 degrees so far, people were actually happy because they thought they would get some time off work. But Zhang knew the harsh reality, noting that this was merely the start. The temperature would continue to drop gradually over the next 3 months, and everyone would see hell with their own eyes. Meanwhile, he could see you, her friend, and everyone else celebrating the snow and taking selfies using the #IceSelfie hashtag. That illusion was shattered the very next morning. A woman tried to open the building's front door but ran into massive difficulties. Even after managing to push it open, she was met with a massive wall of snow piled up right in front of her home. At the same time, our protagonist woke up to his ringing phone. Annoyed because it was still very early, he looked at the screen to see it was none other than you, who looked like she was ready to bother him again. He answered, asking, "What do you want so early in the morning, woman?" She told him it was freezing outside and asked if he had known about it in advance, and if that was the reason he bought all those supplies. Our cool protagonist replied with pure indifference, saying that a friend had mentioned it to him, though even he hadn't expected the weather to get this cold. You started calling him Zhang, my dear, asking why he hadn't told her so she could prepare like he did. But the new Zhang wasn't a simp anymore. Even her sweet, pleading tone had zero effect on her target. He told her to stop bothering him and hung up in her face. Naturally, this crushed her non-existent pride. She realized she had to find another way to get close to him. Looking at our protagonist, he was furious at the annoying girl, thinking he never could have imagined she would have the nerve to blame him for not telling her. Deciding to calm his nerves, he took a hot shower and sat down to have breakfast. While eating, he watched the news. The terrified anchor was reporting that the meteorological agency was advising everyone to stay indoors until they figured out the cause of the unexplainable freeze. His peaceful moment was interrupted by a message from the shameless Yu, who asked if he could share some food since it was too cold to go outside. Zheng knew the real reason behind her request. Prices had skyrocketed as people desperately tried to buy and store whatever provisions they could find, making food demand extremely high. Deciding to mess with her, Zheng sent her a photo of the food and alcohol sitting right in front of him to show off how well he was living. The sight made her mouth water, as those items alone cost about 3,000 yuan. It made her try to flirt with him, saying she had wanted to try that same food and drink too. But our bold protagonist replied with cold indifference, telling her that if she wanted anything, she could go buy it at the supermarket herself, and even though his words. Although the words made her want to explode with rage, she kept her temper in check because she knew she would be the one to lose out if Zheng cut her off. Meanwhile, our protagonist set his phone aside before his mood could be ruined, then glanced at the building's entrance camera to see what was going on. He saw that the old busybody Lin was standing there trying to stop the residents from leaving the building. She was telling them there was no need to hoard supplies, claiming the snow would only last a couple of days at most. The residents were furious, shouting back that if they hesitated now, prices would go even higher later, and they wouldn't be able to afford anything at all. Lin stood her ground, warning them that buying large quantities of provisions was exactly what would make prices skyrocket. She threatened to report them to the authorities if they caused a severe shortage of resources. Just as they were about to back down under her threats, they were surprised to hear Zheng's voice addressing Lin. He told her to step aside and let people leave as they pleased, pointing out that this blizzard might last much longer, and before long, no one would be able to go outside at all. His remark agitated the crowd even more. They started shouting, asking who would take responsibility if the blizzards actually persisted. Lin answered them by stating that the neighborhood committee, which she headed, would take full responsibility. Meanwhile, she was thinking to herself that if she ever got her hands on Zheng, she would tear him in half for trying to prove her wrong in front of everyone. Turning to him, she snapped that his incitement was a crime and that she could report him. Zheng casually dismissed her, telling her not to give him a headache with her nonsense, and walked away. Before leaving, he made it clear to everyone that from now on, he wouldn't leave his apartment for any reason. A week passed in the blink of an eye. Just as expected, the blizzards were getting worse every day rather than letting up. While Zheng was relaxing inside, playing video games and thinking that this was the life, forgetting about people and relationships, he was surprised to receive a message. He checked the neighborhood group chat and saw that old lady Lin was demanding that he go out and clear the snow blocking the first floor. Our protagonist knew she was trying to get back at him, but he didn't expect her to act this quickly. He replied, stating that it was freezing outside and that he wasn't stepping a foot out of his apartment until the blizzard was over. The residents started to side with him, pointing out that the temperature was dangerously low and that it was unreasonable to ask him to go out in such conditions. Irritated, Lin wrote back that they should be supporting her because she was trying to help them clear the snow. She insisted that young, healthy men like Zheng were the best fit for the job due to their physical strength. Speaking in her capacity as the head of the neighborhood committee, she ordered Zheng to do it, warning that if he refused, she would punish him once the storm passed. Zheng, being as bold as ever and fearing no one, decided to put her in her place in front of the whole chat. He picked up his phone and wrote that the neighborhood committee was supposed to handle such tasks, not the ordinary residents, and that they wouldn't let her bully them. He added that there were young men his age or even stronger living in the building. However, he pointed out that she was too cowardly to ask them for help because they came from wealthy, influential families. His words rallied the rest of the neighborhood. They agreed that Zheng was absolutely right and pointed out that she never asked anything of the wealthy residents, such as Chen or Xiao Hao. Chen was the boss of a construction company with over 100 roughnecks working under him, and he lived on the 6th floor. Meanwhile, Xiao Hao on the right lived on a higher floor and was the son of a billionaire with powerful connections to top-tier people in the city. Xiao Hao lived on the 8th floor, so Zheng tried to corner her by pointing this out, suggesting she ask them to clear the snow too. Zheng thought to himself that he was doing this because Chen was the first person who tried to break into his apartment with an axe in his past life, and Xiao Hao was the first to start carving him up while he was still alive. On top of that, he had seen most of his neighbors taking parts of his body, save for a very small few. After our hero's bold remarks, the residents all began to side with him, agreeing that she was clearly terrified of the wealthy residents and only targeted them because they were just ordinary folks. This reaction truly infuriated her and put her in a tight spot, but to avoid losing the little trust people had left in her, she had no choice but to send messages to Chen and Xiao Hao, asking them to help clear the snow. At that exact moment, Chen the thug was still awake, checking his phone. He noticed that Lin had tagged both him and Xiao Hao in the group chat, asking for help with the snow removal. Enraged, he snapped and sent an aggressive voice note, screaming at her and threatening to end her if she ever asked him to do something like that again. Just as the old lady was recovering from that shock, another message arrived from Xiao Hao. The guy told her that he was extremely wealthy and had absolutely no intention of leaving his apartment, as he had everything he could possibly need right inside. He added that if anyone wanted to go out, they could go and shovel the snow themselves, and even attached a picture with his girlfriend lounging around. He captioned it in the neighborhood group chat, saying that while they were relaxing, it was only the poor people who had to work and run outside to shovel snow before getting fired. This response absolutely burned Lin up, making her even more furious. Meanwhile, Zheng didn't care at all. He was busy preparing his next meal since he had just finished his previous one. Having nothing better to do than mess with his life, Lin sent Zheng a private message, warning him that if he didn't go down immediately to shovel the snow, no one would be able to get to work because of him. Zheng fired back, putting her firmly in her place. He told her he knew exactly what had happened. She was taking her frustration out on him because the others had yelled at her, mistaking him for an easy target. Showing a completely different cold side of himself, he warned her that if she kept bothering him and barking like a stray dog, he wouldn't hesitate to take her out just to get some peace. Lin felt utterly defeated on the spot, sitting down and vowing to make him pay dearly very soon. A few moments later, our protagonist heard a loud, violent pounding on his door, with a man shouting for him to come out. It was Chen, who had noticed that Zheng was the very first person to bring up his name in the building's chat group. He was yelling that he had come over today specifically to kill him, and that if Zheng didn't open the door, he would smash it over his head. Our protagonist stood up, grabbed his crossbow, and got ready to strike. Although he initially thought about taking him out on the spot, he changed his mind, deciding he wanted to humiliate the guy a bit first to get revenge for what happened in his past life. He aimed at Chen's leg, deciding it would be a suitable first target. For those wondering how our protagonist was aiming from inside the apartment, it was through the small squares on the peephole security flap on the reinforced door, which could only be opened and closed from inside the house. Zheng didn't waste a second and shot an arrow right into Chen's leg. Chen collapsed to the ground, screaming in agony. Looking down at him, Zheng thought to himself that in the sub-zero temperatures, that kind of injury could cost Chen his leg if it wasn't treated immediately, not to mention the risk of infection. Chen, realizing the same thing, knew he had to find help quickly, or his leg would be dead in less than half an hour. But in this kind of weather, when he tried calling emergency services, the line was dead. Driven by desperation, Chen decided to perform the surgery and stitch up the wound himself. He started by snapping the shaft of the arrow. Chen managed to pull the arrow out of his leg, noting that his leg was numb from the cold, which meant he wouldn't even need anesthesia. Once he was done, he grabbed his phone and started typing in the neighborhood group chat, vowing that he would kill Zheng even if it was the last thing he ever did. But our ruthless protagonist replied coldly, telling him that if he ever came near his apartment again, he'd make sure to take out his other leg too. The neighbors who saw what Zheng had done were completely stunned. At the same time, Chen started calling all his thugs, ordering them to come over immediately and help him kill Zheng. Since the snow blocking the building's entrance only stopped vehicles but not pedestrians, his goons all managed to make it to Chen's apartment. "What are your orders, boss?" they asked. Chen explained what had happened, how Zheng had almost cost him his leg, and pointed out that the guy lived on the 24th floor. He warned them to watch out for the crossbow, instructing them simply to bash down the door and take Zheng out. The thugs didn't waste any time and headed up to Zheng's place, ordering him to open the door unless he wanted them to force their way in. A bald thug started smashing the door with a cleaver, shouting angrily that they had been forced to walk all the way there through the blizzard and wouldn't leave until they chopped Zheng in half. But because the door was heavily reinforced, the cleaver simply snapped in half and the blade flew, grazing the head of one of the thugs. As the bald guy realized that the door was made of solid metal and that they needed a new plan to break in, our protagonist was watching them, completely annoyed. He hadn't expected them to come back this quickly. Deciding to mess with them, Zheng taunted the group, asking if they were hungry or something, since that might help them figure out how to break down the door. The bald guy snapped back, telling Zheng to stop hiding like a little kid and come out if he had the guts. Hearing this, Zheng decided to pause his video game and play with them instead. He hooked a hose up to the faucet and called out, "Give me a second, I'll be right out." When he poked the hose through one of the small openings in the reinforced door, the brown-haired thug was holding a metal tray, thinking Zheng wouldn't be able to shoot arrows at them anymore. But to his shock, Zheng unleashed a freezing blast of water. He started spraying them in a spiderweb-like pattern, clearly having a lot of fun. By the time he was done, most of the thieves were either passed out or crying for their moms from the freezing cold. When the thugs returned to Chen's apartment, shivering in their soaked clothes, Chen was bewildered and asked where the hell Zheng was. Seeing that they were too cold to even speak, he threw some blankets over them and demanded an explanation. The bald guy stammered out that Zheng's door was incredibly tough. They had tried to break it for half an hour without leaving a single dent. On top of that, Zheng had blasted them with freezing water until some of them literally pissed themselves from the cold. Hearing this, Chen realized just how tough Zheng was, recalling the pressure he had felt when he tried to bully the guy earlier. He came up with a new plan, ordering his men to keep an eye on Zheng's apartment around the clock. He figured Zheng would eventually have to step outside, and when he did, they would turn him into roasted sweet potatoes. Meanwhile, Uncle Lao and a few other residents were trying to shovel a path through the snow to reach the supermarket. But after a while, they lost hope and decided to head back to their homes, as the snow was falling much faster than they could possibly clear it. Back inside, Zheng was watching the news. The anchor was reporting that global governments were making a final joint effort to counter the freezing catastrophe, which had already claimed tens of millions of lives. Zheng chuckled, knowing that this was only the beginning. He remembered that in his past life, over 90% of all living creatures died. Checking his phone again, he saw that old lady Lin was frantically sending messages in the group chat, trying to reassure the residents that the government would save them. She kept insisting the government would handle it, but moments later, Zheng got a private DM from Yu. She acted like she was just checking in on him. Zheng knew better. He knew she wasn't hitting him up out of the kindness of her heart. Sure enough, Yu revealed her true colors, whining that she had run out of food and wanted to borrow some, promising to treat him to lunch once the blizzard stopped. Zheng didn't miss a beat. He did what he does best. He snapped a photo of his gourmet meal and sent it to her, casually mentioning that he couldn't do lunch because he was already stuffed. Yu lost it. She fumed, telling herself she'd had enough of his attitude and wouldn't speak to him again. Immediately after, Kai jumped in, messaging Zheng from her own phone. She told him his words really hurt Yu's feelings and that Yu was planning to ghost him for good. Zheng, cold as ice, replied, "What is this, a good cop, bad cop routine?" Kai tried to play it off, claiming she only had his best interests at heart. She told him that if he just shared a couple of meals, he'd finally win the heart of the girl he'd been crushing on forever. Zheng decided to troll her even harder. He replied with something completely nonsensical. "Sorry, I left my pants on the stove." When Kai saw that level of blatant disrespect, she was ready to blow a fuse. She ran to her partner in crime, Yu, telling her that Zheng was ignoring her too. Yu snapped back, saying she didn't even know who Zheng was anymore and never wanted to hear his name again. Desperate, Yu asked Kai if she knew any other simps they could exploit. Within seconds, Yu was on the phone with a guy named Bing, ordering him to bring food to her place immediately. Less than an hour later, this ultimate simp showed up at her door, panting because he'd run through the snow just to make sure she didn't get mad. He proudly presented the last of his food, which he'd snagged on sale. Yu's face did a complete 180. She gave him a fake smile and said, "Thanks, Bing Kun." But before the poor guy could even get a word out, Kai slammed the door in his face so he wouldn't hang around and annoy them. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. Zheng was living his best life, eating well without gaining a pound, noting that the game was about to enter level 2. Right on cue, the power cut out across the entire building. Panic hit the residents instantly. People poured into the hallways, frantically asking if anyone had a generator. One woman cried out that the real disaster was the lack of hot water. She couldn't even make formula for her baby. Another guy complained that the cold was becoming unbearable now that the heaters were dead. The fear was real. They started shouting, "Where's the government?" and "We're all gonna freeze," as the temperature inside dropped to -30. The only person not sweating it was Zheng. He had planned for every single detail. He fired up one of his high-end generators, muttering, "Nothing beats a warm house." In the pitch-black building, his apartment was the only one glowing with light. Meanwhile, that old hag Lin and her spoiled grandson were in shock. She couldn't believe it, especially after the government's reassuring messages the day before. At the same time, the neighborhood group chat was blowing up. Committee members were debating whether they had actually entered a new ice age like the one millions of years ago. They started suggesting that everyone needed to scavenge for resources immediately. Finally, the reality started to sink in for Lin. This wasn't going away anytime soon. Under pressure from her grandson, who kept asking where his parents were and when he could eat, she decided to hatch a desperate, reckless plan to protect her precious brat. She sent a message to the entire neighborhood group chat, telling them not to panic and that the crisis was only temporary. She claimed that the authorities had already informed her that crews were working on restoring the water and power. Furthermore, she announced an official decree stating that all resources in the building now belonged to the head of the committee, her. Therefore, all residents had to hand over their supplies immediately so she could properly organize, divide, and distribute them fairly among everyone. She ended her message by warning that anyone who refused would be violating state law and arrested on the spot. Everyone who read the message, including Xiao Hao, was caught off guard, unable to argue against what seemed like a state order. Even Chen and his thugs remained completely silent, because no matter how much of a gangster he was, he certainly wasn't going to go to war with the police. As his thugs whined that they had caught a cold and desperately needed medicine, our protagonist was just chilling, enjoying his comfortable life and playing video games. His relaxed moment was suddenly interrupted by a private message from old lady Lin, in which she stated that she would begin collecting supplies from every home in the building to redistribute them evenly. Zheng let out a bitter laugh, realizing this was the exact same move that old hag had pulled in his previous life. What annoyed him most was that back then, he had handed over a massive portion of his resources generously. But in the end, she betrayed him and told the neighbors that he was hoarding food, making his apartment their primary target. Lin sent him a direct message, pointing out that she knew he worked at the warehouse, meaning he must have stored food somewhere. She added that she had also seen the numerous delivery trucks bringing groceries to his place a while ago. Zheng replied with absolute coldness, telling her that all his supplies were gone, and that he was actually looking forward to getting a share of the supplies she was about to collect. When Lin read his reply, she was furious, thinking he was playing dumb and that it was impossible for him to have gone through all those groceries that quickly. However, she forced herself to calm down and decided to try and play nice with him, as she desperately needed those resources for her and her spoiled grandson. She sent another message, stating that everyone knew he was a manager at a mega warehouse, which surely allowed him to get provisions at a heavy discount. She added that if he helped out now, the neighborhood committee and the residents wouldn't forget his kindness. Zheng simply replied that he wasn't lying and that he had eaten absolutely everything. Then, he cheekily asked her to spare him a few packs of instant noodles because he was still hungry. Lin completely lost her temper, shouting at him through the screen. She threatened that if he didn't hand over every last supply he had, he would be disobeying the committee and the authorities, and would be arrested as soon as the blizzard passed. Zheng responded with his usual cold, mocking tone, telling her to stop playing cop when she wasn't even a government employee. He added that she could fool herself and pretend she still had any real authority, but he wasn't going to play her game, and she could go bang her head against the wall for all he cared. Furious, Lin threw her phone against the wall. She decided to forget about Zheng for the moment and focus on the rest of the residents. Shortly after, our protagonist watched as the other residents handed over their supplies. He noted to himself that the amount collected from each household was barely enough to feed a small family for 3 days. He was baffled by their sheer stupidity, but he decided to let them burn through their own resources and deal with the consequences. A few days later, a resident sent a message in the chat stating that her family had run out of food and demanded that Lin begin the redistribution. As usual, the rest of the residents backed her up in the chat. But behind closed doors, Lin was sitting in her room, using her indestructible Nokia phone, eating the private stockpile with her grandson. She chuckled to herself, thinking how naive they were for trusting her, but her twisted little daydream was interrupted when her phone rang. She assumed they had finally realized they'd been scammed. To her absolute horror and dread, the caller ID showed Chen himself. When she answered, Chen wasted no time, telling her he didn't know she was a thief just like him. She tried to squirm out of the conversation, claiming she only gathered the supplies so she could redistribute them equally. Chen snapped back that if that was the case, he was there to collect his share. Trying to act clever, she told him she was waiting for everyone else to hand in their shares before she started distributing anything. Chen dropped the polite act entirely and showed his true, intimidating colors. In plain terms, he told her he wanted every single supply she had collected. He warned her that if she didn't hand them over willingly, he and his men would take them by force. Chen didn't waste a second and headed straight to her apartment with his thugs. Lin started screaming, threatening to call the police, knowing full well the line was dead and no one was coming. Chen shut her up by slapping her across the face, telling her he was there to get revenge for the people she had tricked and robbed. Meanwhile, Zheng was sitting comfortably with a bowl of popcorn, thoroughly enjoying the show. He got a brilliant idea. He recorded the whole scene on his phone and sent the video straight to the neighborhood group chat. Back in Lin's apartment, Chen threw the old woman to the floor and ordered his men to gather all the resources belonging to the poor residents. At that moment, Lin grabbed onto his leg, begging him not to take everything, especially since her own private stash was mixed in with the pile. She pleaded that if he took it, she and her grandson would starve. Chen told her that wasn't his problem and that she should have thought twice before scamming people. But when he found her still clinging to his leg, he got annoyed and kicked her away. Seeing his grandmother get struck right in front of him triggered whatever tiny bit of courage the spoiled brat had in him. He grabbed a knife, screaming at the thugs to get out immediately, and unexpectedly lunged forward, stabbing one of the thugs right in the stomach. The thug looked down, stunned, and said, "You really just stabbed me in the gut at my age, you little punk." That was the last word the kid ever heard. The thug retaliated by kicking the boy across the room, mimicking a Cristiano Ronaldo overhead kick. The kid flew and crashed onto the sofa. The other thugs couldn't help but joke, telling their buddy they didn't know he was such a skilled soccer player. Within seconds, Lin rushed over to check on her precious grandson. By the time the thugs finished collecting all the supplies, Chen looked down at her and told her she got exactly what she deserved after trying to swindle her own neighbors. The residents, having watched the entire ordeal thanks to the video Zheng sent to the chat, were all laughing and saying she got what was coming to her. But Zheng was laughing for a completely different reason. He thought to himself that they were all a bunch of fools. After all, if Chen could break into Lin's apartment this easily, what was stopping him from doing the exact same thing to their homes next and stealing everything they owned? Shaking his head, he decided it was none of his business, especially since no one could ever break into his apartment. However, his thoughts were interrupted by a message from Lin in the group chat, pleading for medicine because her grandson was dying, and mentioning that the neighborhood doctor, Ju, needed supplies to operate on him. Zhang was taken aback, recalling the doctor from his past life. He remembered her as a genuinely good person who had saved countless lives. A moment later, Ju confirmed that she had given the boy first aid, but needed specific medications to complete the surgery. Lin began begging everyone in the group chat, offering to get down on her knees and apologize if they would just help. The residents simply mocked her, asking exactly how she planned to get down on her knees through a text message, knowing no one would help. They used the laughing emoji in the group chat, telling her that no one should help her after what she had pulled, and that they weren't doctors like Ju to forgive and help her out. When Zheng saw this, he agreed with their point. He knew that even if they managed to save the brat's life right now, he was bound to die eventually from the freezing conditions anyway. Time passed, and the residents finally started to notice that the snow had completely buried the first floor, which sent them into an even deeper panic. To make things worse, the news announced that they had officially entered an ice age, an event that hadn't occurred for millions of years. A week passed by in a flash. Word on the news was that temperatures in cities across the northern region had dropped to -100°C. Other cities were completely buried under the snow, and anyone who failed to escape on time died on the road. Back in the neighborhood group chat, Lin was spamming messages for the 1000th time, demanding that everyone hand over their supplies or else she would report them to the police once the blizzard ended. But when she finally realized it wasn't working, she resorted to begging them to save her grandson, even offering to buy food at a premium price. One of the residents replied, saying she had plenty of instant noodles and was willing to sell a single pack for 1,000 yuan. It turned into a bidding war. Another resident stepped in and offered 2,000 yuan for a pack. Seeing those crazy prices, some residents were mesmerized, convincing themselves that this blizzard couldn't possibly last that long. It was revealed that the guy offering 2,000 yuan was the wealthy Xiao Hao. He sent a message to the group offering to buy up any and all resources people wanted to sell at the highest possible price. He thought to himself that the blizzards were going to last a long time, and cash would be entirely worthless soon. He needed to take advantage of the poor residents and strip them of all their resources before they figured out the truth. However, a frustrated resident replied to Xiao Hao, complaining that she hadn't eaten in days and that his bidding war was just making it impossible for ordinary folks to buy anything. He replied with cold indifference, pointing out that he hadn't taken anything from her and that he was simply offering top dollar because his mother had plenty of money. The woman was named Kai and she had a young daughter. Kai began to plead with people in the group, begging for help because she couldn't find food for her or her 9-month-old baby. Zheng smiled to himself, knowing that anyone who actually helped her would be an idiot. He remembered from his past life that Kai had managed to survive for a long time, meaning she was far from helpless. 10 days flew by in the blink of an eye. While Zheng was in the middle of a workout, his phone rang. He looked at the caller ID and saw that the toxic duo was calling. He figured they must have run out of their supplies and were about to starve. He answered with his usual cold demeanor, asking why they were video calling, and sarcastically asking if they were just doing it to show off how much weight they had lost. When they saw the food and the warm heater glowing in the background, Kai was dumbfounded, asking how Zheng still had food left. Yu was just as baffled, wondering how Zheng could be sweating in the middle of all this snow. Zheng told them that the food behind him was just leftovers because he was too lazy to cook. He added that he was sitting right next to the heater, so it was actually uncomfortably hot in his place. Hearing this, Yu immediately put on her best acting voice, asking if he could let her into his apartment, even just to look. She kept flirting with him, saying, "I missed you, Zheng-kun." But Zheng had learned his lesson. He told her to stay inside and not go out in the cold. He thought to himself that her personality was disgusting and wondered how on earth his simp self had ever been blinded to the point of liking her. They used the laughing emoji in the group chat, telling her that no one should help her after what she had pulled, and that they weren't doctors like Ju to forgive and help her out. When Zheng saw this, he agreed with their point. He knew that even if they managed to save the brat's life right now, he was bound to die eventually from the freezing conditions anyway. Time passed and the residents finally started to notice that the snow had completely buried the first floor, which sent them into an even deeper panic. To make things worse, the news announced that they had officially entered an ice age, an event that hadn't occurred for millions of years. A week passed by in a flash. Word on the news was that temperatures in cities across the northern region had dropped to -100°C. Other cities were completely buried under the snow, and anyone who failed to escape on time died on the road. At the same time, Lin was still deeply worried about her grandson, whose condition was only getting worse. Elsewhere, we see Dr. Ju treating Chen's leg, with Chen promising to give her resources in return. Then there was Xiao Hao, who was busy buying up resources from the residents at inflated prices. But leaving them all aside, we have to check back in on the toxic duo. Kai was still reprimanding Yu, asking who they were going to rely on now that they had driven Zheng away. Yu replied that all they had to do was kill Zheng and take everything he owned. She pulled out her phone and called Bing, telling her friend that they would need some muscle to help take him down. When the simp Bing arrived, he found Yu crying, claiming she had just spoken to Zhang, and he refused to give her any supplies unless she let him humiliate her. Bing snapped with rage, declaring that he would tear Zhang in half when he saw him, and wouldn't let him get away with what he'd done. Yu seized the moment, adding that she wanted to take over Zhang's apartment and live there together with Bing. Hearing that, the simp's blood boiled, and he agreed, telling her they needed to prepare properly and bring weapons before heading over. They gathered baseball bats and knives and marched over to Zhang's apartment. Bing began pounding on the door, telling the two toxic girls to stand back. When Zhang glanced at the camera, which no one knew the location of, he only saw Bing, who was actually his co-worker from the warehouse. But the two girls were impatient and moving around, unable to stand still in the cold. When Zhang saw them, he nearly exploded with rage upon seeing his own co-worker joining them. He thought to himself that if they wanted to kill him, they should have brought a lot more people. He went over to prepare his trusty hose. Bing spoke up, saying that he had run out of all his food and came to ask Zhang for some provisions, especially since they used to be co-workers. Zhang replied that he should just wait a second and that he was coming right out to give him all the food he could possibly want, saying this while staring directly at his trash can. Zhang didn't waste any time and grabbing. Zhang grabbed the hose, went to the reinforced door, and poked it through the small opening as usual. While the thieves were waiting eagerly for the door to open, weapons in hand, they were shocked to see Zhang unleash a blast of leftover food and pickled eggplants. Repulsed and screaming in disgust, they yelled, "What the hell is this stuff?" Zhang replied calmly, telling them these were simply his kitchen leftovers and that they should be thanking him instead of getting upset. Hearing this, Bing's blood boiled. He yelled that he would kill Zhang today and tried to break through the door by stabbing it with his knife. But the moment the knife made contact, the blade snapped in half, and the sheer recoil injured Bing's own hand. While Bing writhed on the floor in agony, Zhang just laughed at him. He then returned to his favorite chair, declaring that he would never step outside his apartment, and yet he would outlive all of them during this ice age. The next morning, Zhang woke up with a start to the sound of gunfire. Feeling anxious, he grabbed his laptop to check the surveillance cameras and figure out who in the building had guns. Just as he expected, he spotted Chen. He was surprised to see that Chen was not only still alive, but that he and his gang were carrying boxes of supplies out of various apartments. After noticing where they were getting their water, he finally understood how they were surviving. Once the city's tap water shut down, some residents had gathered snow from outside and boiled it to drink. Chen and his thugs had taken this opportunity to raid their apartments, looting all their resources and even taking lives along the way. Zhang knew that once those residents returned, they wouldn't stand a chance and would simply freeze or starve to death. At this moment, Zhang was specifically referring to the residents of the third floor, which was the exact floor Chen and his crew were currently looting. After securing the supplies from the lower floors, Chen sent a message to the main neighborhood group chat to terrify everyone. He stated that from this point forward until the end of the blizzards, he was the boss of this building, and anyone who disobeyed his orders would end up like the people in the photos he attached. When Zhang saw this, he was actually impressed by Chen's cunning. He knew for a fact that Chen didn't possess enough ammunition or thugs to actually subjugate the entire building, so he was using intimidation tactics to prevent a rebellion. His train of thought was interrupted when he noticed he had been added to a secret chat group with other residents of the building. In this group, people were discussing Chen's brutality and the crimes he'd committed against the residents so far. One resident proposed that everyone should unite to stand up against Chen and his thugs, pointing out that even if Chen had a gun, if they all swarmed him from every angle, there was nothing he could do. Many people agreed and asked the courageous guy who came up with the idea when they should start. But when the time came, the instigator and a few other cowards started making excuses, claiming they needed to plan it out properly first. Zhang burst out laughing, noting that the guy who proposed the plan backed down the moment things got serious. But amidst the widespread fear and hesitation, Uncle Lao spoke up. He warned them that if they stayed silent, they would all die. Even if Chen didn't shoot them and just took their supplies, they would still die of starvation and thirst anyway. Lao added that he was willing to lead the attack, but he needed everyone to join him. Suddenly, one of the cowards spoke up, saying he supported and encouraged the idea and offered to donate his kitchen knives. All the other replies were just as useless, with no one actually willing to step up. Lao told them that their moral support wouldn't do anything, and that he needed at least a dozen young men to join him in order to ensure victory over Chen. One woman replied, saying they couldn't trust anyone after what had happened. They brought up Lin, explaining that everyone was terrified to send their young men with him because he might turn out to be a traitor, just like the old woman, and hand them over to Chen. Naturally, if that happened, the only people with any fighting capability would be wiped out, leaving nothing but women, children, and the elderly. When the residents saw how logical this argument was, a fresh, heated argument broke out in the chat, splitting them into two opposing factions, supporters and opponents. Looking back at our protagonist, Zhang, we find him remarking that the very people who tried to incite a rebellion and then back down when things got serious, deserved what was coming to them. Meanwhile, Chen ordered his thugs to gather the bodies of the dead so they could eat them later. One of his thugs tried to object, urging him to abandon the idea of cannibalism and pointing out that there were certainly still people in the building with hidden supplies. But Chen lost his temper and snapped, warning the guy that if he kept running his mouth, he'd be the next meal on the menu. The guy quickly backed down and continued the job, agreeing that everything Boss Chen said was correct. But Chen knew full well that none of his men would have listened to him or eaten human flesh if he hadn't had the gun. Even so, he was confident that once they ate the meat, they would have no choice but to follow him and never object again. Back in his apartment, Zhang was watching the whole thing unfold on his laptop. He knew exactly what Chen was up to, killing the residents and hoarding their bodies to eat later. Because of this, Zhang made up his mind that the moment Chen even tried to get near his apartment, he would take him down. The very next morning, Yu, the loudmouth who led the opposition, started screaming in the group chat, saying that Chen's men were trying to break into her apartment and begging Uncle Lao to come to her rescue since he used to be in the military. This was despite the fact that she had been one of the first people to oppose the idea of rebelling against Chen in the first place. But moments later, her door gave out and one of the thugs successfully broke in. She began screaming, begging him to leave her alone and offering to hand over every single resource in her home. Instead, he dragged her across the floor, telling her he was going to take the supplies and her as well. Meanwhile, the supporters faction mocked her in the chat, writing that she got what she deserved, and that at least her death would buy the rest of them a little time. Over on the other side, we see the two toxic girls trembling in fear, assuming Chen was targeting the girls specifically to humiliate them, completely unaware that he planned to eat them. Terrified, they realized they had to act fast since they were girls too, and their turn would come soon. This led Yu to come up with a desperate plan. She decided to leak the rumor that Zhang had a massive amount of supplies, hoping to convince the residents to break into his place and use it as a sanctuary. Within seconds, Zhang found himself added to a secret group chat called The Alliance. Before he even understood what was going on, he received a message from Yu, claiming that they had formed a team and needed a place to stay. She wrote that his apartment was the perfect spot because it was heavily fortified, had a large balcony that collected a massive amount of snow, ensuring a steady supply of drinking water. When Zhang saw her message, he couldn't help but laugh out loud, realizing it was the exact same trick she'd pulled in his previous life when he was still an idiot. He replied, making it clear that he preferred living alone and having his own space. The members of the Alliance started to pressure him, claiming that if they united, Chen wouldn't be able to hurt them. Yu even told him that they were neighbors and old friends, and that if he refused to help, he would be indirectly sacrificing the lives of 8 people. Zheng responded with absolute coldness, telling them that in this ice age, everyone was responsible for their own survival, and he wouldn't do a single thing without getting paid first. Right after that, he left the group chat, leaving them talking to themselves. Naturally, Yu put on a fake shocked act, claiming that he had abandoned them even though they were old friends from way back. Hearing this, the guy with the glasses agreed, saying that someone as greedy as Zheng didn't deserve to be treated with respect, and that they had no choice but to break into his house by force. The man in yellow backed up the others, insisting that people like Zhang didn't deserve to live in a secured home like this. He added that he used to work at a shut-down manufacturing company, so he knew exactly how to pick any lock. At that moment, Yu jumped into the conversation and said that once they opened the lock for him, they would all storm inside and beat him up badly. They didn't waste any time and headed straight there. The man in yellow started working on the lock while the others stood behind holding umbrellas. Yu suggested they could just spray him with water to stop him from doing anything. Meanwhile, Zhang was inside watching everything through the window, laughing. He said his door had 5 layers of defense, making it as hard to breach as a bank vault. Still, he decided to play along and activated the high-voltage electric defense system. Immediately, the man in yellow was shocked violently and forced to step back from the door. Within seconds, he collapsed to the ground, stunned and barely conscious. The man with glasses snapped in anger, yelling at Zhang to come out if he was brave enough. The girl with them insisted they had only come to talk peacefully, but after Zhang killed their yellow-clothed companion, he needed to come out and explain himself. Zhang just laughed. He said he was only doing to them what they had planned to do to him. He knew that if they had managed to break in, they would have killed or kicked him out. Then he picked up his bow and said he would punish them for trying to invade his home. Without hesitation, he fired an arrow through a narrow opening, hitting the man with glasses in the shoulder. Shocked, the group panicked and tried to flee. Zhang didn't stop. He fired again, hitting the man in yellow in the arm and another person in the back within seconds. The remaining 2, one man on the left and a girl named Wang, ran away as fast as they could. When they finally got back, Wang checked the others' injuries and realized Zhang had used real, lethal arrows. The man with glasses admitted he never expected Zhang to actually try to kill them. The man in yellow added that without quick antibiotics, and with the current conditions, they might die. Amid the panic, one of the girls blamed herself, saying it was her fault. When she first asked for help breaking into Zhang's house, she only mentioned that the door had a certain number of locks without explaining anything else. Wang felt she already knew more than she had said, which is why she and her friend stayed back. Yu quickly defended herself, saying that the last 2 times they went there, Zhang only had a simple water hose. The injured man struggled to his feet and reassured Wang that Yu would never intentionally deceive them. The man with glasses also said this was not the time for arguments. They needed to treat the injuries first. Wang, still frustrated, told the others to stay with the injured while she figured out a solution. She then called Dr. Zhou for help. After a while, Dr. Zhou arrived and examined the injured man. She was surprised and asked if people were really using arrows these days. Wang explained the situation and asked if she had seen similar injuries before. Dr. Zhou said she was referring to a patient she had treated at the hospital. She then explained that the wounds were deep and the chances of a successful surgery without proper medical equipment were very low. The only possible solution would be to remove the arrows from their bodies, but doing that safely would require antibiotics and proper medical support. They would also need other medicines, otherwise the infection would spread through their bodies and they would die. Wang panicked and said Zhang was a monster, insisting that even if they had managed to take over his house, they never intended to kill him. When Zhou heard the name Zhang, she looked confused. She said she had only seen that person in the building once or twice, to the point she thought he was just visiting someone briefly and leaving. Pulling herself back to reality, she told them clearly that without proper medication, she couldn't help them. At that moment, Yu stepped in and said she was sure Zhang had a lot of medicine. She claimed she had seen him receiving a large medical shipment right before the disaster. Then she started thinking out loud, connecting all his strange behavior before everything happened. She concluded that he probably knew the disaster was coming and prepared for it, including stocking up on medicine. Zhou replied that antibiotics are essential drugs. If he really knew about the disaster and stocked up, then he would definitely have large quantities. The man with glasses, still barely thinking clearly, said they should send someone to Zhang and force him to take responsibility for treating them, since he was the one who injured them. Wang, however, stayed grounded in reality and said Zhang had tried to kill them, so there was no way he would willingly help. Yu tried to convince her, saying they hadn't actually tried to hurt him, and even if they had broken in, they wouldn't have killed him. Wang responded coldly, "If that's what you think, then you're the one who should go and get the medicine from him." Under pressure from the man with glasses, who was desperately calling out in pain, and Bei, who warned that if they died she and her friend would become easy targets for Chen, Yu finally agreed. She would try to get the medicine from Zhang. She then called him. Meanwhile, Zhou was carefully removing the arrows from the injured people, explaining again that without antibiotics, the situation would become extremely dangerous. When Zhang answered the phone, Yu started crying dramatically, blaming him for the condition of the injured men. She said his actions would lead to Bei and the others dying. Zhang responded coldly, saying they were all going to die anyway because of the coming blizzards. In his mind, he believed no one would survive the disaster, so it didn't matter whether they died from cold, hunger, or anything else. Yu interrupted his thoughts and calmly said she knew he was angry with them, but right now she needed his help to save lives. She repeated that they urgently needed antibiotics. Before she could continue, Wang snatched the phone from her, shouting at Zhang, insisting they should all stand together against Chen. She added that he would feel guilty if her friends died because of him. Zhang replied that if he cared about guilt, he wouldn't have shot them in the first place. He said he had done it because he wanted them to die slowly and painfully. He added that the body of the man in yellow was still lying in front of his house, and he was sure their hatred would only grow. Even if he helped them, they would eventually try to take revenge. Wang tried to argue that they were not people who seek revenge, but Zhang refused to trust human nature. He wouldn't give them anything. Then he asked to speak to Yu again, saying he was considering letting her enter his house alone. At that moment, Yu took the phone back from Wang and said she had been waiting to hear that. She even said she was already on her way to him. Wang tried to stop her, asking what she would do alone, but Zhang interrupted and said he only wanted her to come, no one else. Yu's expression changed in front of everyone. She calmly said she had no problem with that and would go alone. She immediately ran off, excited. Wang tried to grab her, but Yu shoved her away and said she was sick of her. They were living in chaos. At that moment, Wang completely lost her temper. She slapped Yu across the face and shouted at her, asking how she could leave after destroying everyone's lives. Fabing was in shock as well. He asked her how she could do this after telling him she loved him and hated Zhang. Yu replied coldly and shamelessly that she just wanted to be happy. She said that if she stayed with Fabing after all the resources were gone, she would end up suffering. She grabbed his hand and told him he was a good person, and that if he truly cared about her happiness, he should let her live the life she wanted. She thanked him for everything he had done for her before, but made it clear that right now he couldn't give her what Zhang could offer. While Wang was trying to comfort the injured Bei, Kai ran after Yu, screaming why she was the one who deserved a happy life. In rage, Kai tackled her and held her down, stopping her from leaving the house. Wang also joined in and said they would not allow you to leave from now on. At that moment, Dr. Zhou didn't want to get involved anymore. She decided to leave, saying that without medicine, there was a very high chance they would all die. After she left, the man with glasses suddenly said he had a new plan to deal with Zhang. He explained that he had seen pictures of Zhang's supplies, heating equipment, and large amounts of food. Because of that, they could post the images in the building's group chat and expose how much he was hoarding. Then everyone in the building, including Chen and his group, would turn against him. Once that happened, they could divide the resources together. You got furious again and said they should not try to destroy Zhang's life, because that would also destroy hers. Wang snapped back, almost hitting her, and told her to shut up. Bei defended you, saying he loved her and believed she would eventually change her mind. Wang insulted him, calling him naive, and said Yu was only using him and had been ready to leave him moments ago for Zhang. She left in anger, calling him a fool. Then the man with glasses uploaded Zhang's food photos to the building group chat, exposing him. He told everyone that while they were starving, one man was living with excessive supplies. When Chen saw the post along with his men, they were furious. They were already in a terrible state, even resorting to cannibalism out of desperation. Chen also remembered what Zhang had done to him before and swore he would find a way to break into his house and take revenge. Messages flooded the group chat. Everyone demanded that Zhang share his food. Even Xiao Hao offered him 1 billion yuan if he would let them stay with him. Zhang, as usual, replied coldly that he didn't know any of them and had no reason to help. In his mind, he still remembered them as monsters who had torn him apart in his past life. Seeing his refusal, the group started calling him inhuman. Xiao Hao swore revenge once the storms ended. Others also flooded him with anger, accusing him of knowing about the disaster in advance and hoarding supplies in secret. Zhang got irritated. He cursed under his breath, drank a bit of alcohol, and left them to argue among themselves in the chat. He then said the house was getting boring, and he wanted to go outside soon. He remembered he had snow vehicles capable of moving through the frozen landscape. Even though he knew he couldn't leave anytime soon, it comforted him to know he could move freely once the building became safer. But his thoughts were suddenly interrupted. A message then arrived on Zhang's phone from Dr. Zhou. When he opened it, he saw that she was telling him her supplies had run out, and she was asking for his help. For a moment he remembered her from his past life. She had once been a kind person, so kind that she sacrificed herself, giving her last food to Chen and his young daughter. Zhang knew she was genuinely a good and beautiful person. In another situation, he wouldn't have minded spending the rest of his life with her, but his mindset was different. He believed that the more beautiful and intelligent a woman was, the higher the chance of betrayal. Because he feared death and betrayal, he decided to proceed carefully. He wanted to build trust first before allowing her into his home. He replied that if she wanted resources, she needed to offer something in return. She answered that he could consider it as a future medical fee, since he would likely need her help as a doctor later anyway. She felt embarrassed while saying it, because she had never begged anyone in her life. Zhang then sent another message saying he agreed, but he needed a service in return. When she asked what it was, he explained that all she had to do was observe the people in the building and report any movements or plans to attack him. He told her she now had only 2 choices: betray the others and work with him, or stay with the herd of sheep and die with them. With no real option left, Dr. Zhou agreed to join him. Zhang told her he would wait for useful information, and only then would he give her the resources she needed. Right after finishing the conversation, he received another message, this time from the man with glasses. It was a threat. He said this was Zhang's last chance to hand over his supplies peacefully. Zhang replied coldly that he would rather burn everything he had than give it to them. When the man with glasses read that, he burned with rage and told him to enjoy the little time he had left before dying. After that, the residents of the building created a group chat to coordinate their attack against Zhang. Chen sent a message saying they should focus only on eliminating Zhang first. He promised not to attack anyone else until that was done, but in return, he would take half of all the resources inside the house. Without hesitation, the man with glasses agreed and said Chen's plan was correct. Wang saw the messages and panicked, realizing things were escalating quickly. She wanted to warn Zhang immediately. But Dr. Zhou sent him another message first, telling him that the crowd was already moving toward his house. Zhang, however, was already watching everything through his cameras. He stood ready with his weapon prepared. Zhou then told him to be careful. The group heading toward him included almost everyone from the building. Zhang calmly told her not to worry about him, and warned her not to come near the house or she might get killed by accident. Meanwhile, the residents arrived at his building, fully armed. One of them tried to break the door using a hammer after their other weapons failed. Zhang laughed when he saw them, mocking Chen for being so afraid that he had to send someone to force entry like that. He activated the high-voltage electric defense system again, the same one that had killed the man in yellow earlier. In seconds, the man with the hammer was electrocuted and burned alive. The people beside him were also shocked and died instantly. Panic spread among the attackers. They began to retreat, shouting that the door was electrified and they didn't want to die. But Chen didn't care. He stopped one of them at gunpoint and said no one was leaving. Then he reminded everyone that the electric system would likely need time to recharge after the attack. Once again, Chen insisted that they had to take advantage of the situation and break the door quickly while the opportunity was still there. Without wasting time, the crowd brought a small tree trunk and started smashing Zhang's door with it. The noise inside became unbearable. Zhang, feeling irritated and disgusted, decided to turn on loud music at maximum volume to drown out the chaos. Time passed as they kept hitting the door and insulting him, but eventually they grew exhausted and couldn't continue due to fatigue. Their frustration also grew when they realized the constant attacks had only left minor surface scratches. One of them stepped forward to inspect the material of the door and discovered it was made from the same metal used in bank vaults. He worked in banking and recognized it immediately. The others were shocked and asked if there was any possible way to break in. The worker told them bluntly that this door couldn't be destroyed, even with explosives. The only way to open it was with the key. At that moment, Zhang reached the narrow firing slot at the door. He had grown bored from waiting and without hesitation, shot the talkative worker in the throat, silencing him instantly. When the crowd saw what happened, panic spread. They realized he had more weapons and they began running in terror, pushing each other in chaos. Zhang enjoyed it. He calmly picked them off one by one with his arrows. Even though he eliminated many of the intruders in a short time, he deliberately left the man with glasses alive. The man kept insulting him, but Zhang refused to kill him quickly. He wanted him to suffer slowly from his injuries. Meanwhile, the man with glasses suddenly had an idea. He suggested they try breaking through the walls instead of the door. Without hesitation, the remaining survivors started attacking the walls with hammers. After several strikes, cracks began to appear and they almost celebrated. But suddenly one of them struck harder and immediately recoiled in pain. It felt like he had hit solid steel and his hand was nearly broken. When the man with glasses checked carefully, he discovered something terrifying. The walls were made from the same reinforced metal as the door. Despair spread among them. They realized there was no way into the house at all. From inside, Zhang calmly commented that everything they were doing was useless. Even artillery wouldn't be able to break through. Hearing this, the man with glasses became furious. He concluded that Zhang must have known about the blizzard disaster in advance and deliberately turned his house into a fortress to keep everyone out. The crowd erupted in anger, shouting at him and asking how he could sleep peacefully while they were dying outside. At that moment, Chen stepped in again. He told them not to lose hope so easily. He suggested that the roof and floor might not be made of the same metal. He then divided the group into two teams, one to attack the roof, the other to attack the ground. With renewed energy, they began their assault again. But Zhang had already heard everything. He stood inside calmly, saying he wasn't stupid enough to overlook something like that. Back outside, their enthusiasm quickly turned into despair once again, when they realized even the roof and floor were reinforced with the same metal. All their efforts had been pointless. Exhausted, starving, and freezing, their mental state began to collapse. One of them stared at his companion and started imagining him as nothing more than a piece of meat. The same hallucination spread among others. Slowly, they began seeing each other not as humans, but as food. Even the man with glasses broke down in tears, realizing that every minute passing brought them closer to death. Zhang had barely finished eating when the situation outside escalated again. At that moment, another man wearing glasses stepped forward and tried to calm the group down. He told them not to cry and said, "We're all men with glasses here, calm down." Then he and his wife began explaining a new idea to everyone. They could try entering Zhang's house through the balcony. They insisted it was probably not as well protected, and they were sure they had seen it before made of glass. The idea immediately convinced the desperate crowd. They said they finally had a way to break into Zhang's fortress. Without hesitation, they moved to the opposite apartment, placed a wooden plank between the buildings, and carefully crossed over to Zhang's balcony. When they arrived, they saw him sitting calmly, relaxed, drinking coffee like nothing was happening. This sight enraged them even more. They started smashing the balcony glass, convinced their goal was just behind it. But the glass didn't break. Inside, Zhang slowly walked to the kitchen, muttering that they were about to pay for all the noise they had caused. He began preparing Molotov cocktails. Without wasting time, he threw one through a narrow opening that connected to the balcony ceiling. At first, the attackers didn't understand what was happening, but within seconds, one of the bottles fell on a man and ignited him instantly. In unbearable pain, the burning man jumped off the balcony. Before the others could react, Zhang started throwing more Molotov cocktails, one after another, saying he had enough for all of them. The burning survivors tried to run toward the rest of the building for help, but chaos broke out. The man with glasses attacked one of them and beat him to death before he could escape. Some others lost balance and fell from the wooden plank in panic. Soon, the remaining residents stood around the burning corpse of one of their own, realizing how far things had escalated. But even after that, they didn't stop. Driven by hunger, despair, and madness, they climbed the balcony again, but this time not to fight but to beg. They looked at Zhang with hollow, broken expressions, practically begging him for food. Zhang smiled coldly. He told them to leave because looking at them made him lose his appetite. Then he deliberately ate in front of them. The sight drove them insane with hunger. Seeing their reaction, Zhang realized something and took advantage of it. He told them he had a deal. Whoever brought him Chen's head would get enough instant noodles for a whole week. Without hesitation, the group instantly agreed and began turning on each other in desperation. Chen, confused, couldn't understand what was happening, but when he checked his phone, he found Zhang had already sent a message offering food to anyone who killed him. Realizing the situation had turned against him, Chen panicked and ran away with his men, planning another way to attack Zhang later. Meanwhile, on the balcony, two of the men, Abu Lebni and Abu Azrak, were arguing. Abu Lebni asked if he really planned to kill Chen. Abu Azrak replied that they were going to die of hunger anyway, so they might as well die trying. At that moment, Chen appeared, yelling at his followers to move quickly or they would end up eating human flesh, or even snow. In the same instant, Abu Azrak saw his chance. He and his partner suddenly rushed toward Chen in an attempt to take him down. But Chen's men immediately noticed them and warned him just in time. They tried to jump him right then and there, but within seconds, Chen flipped behind them and took both of them out just to show them how much of a badass he is. After that, he ordered his guys to take the bodies to the storage room to eat them later. Meanwhile, one of Chen's guys came over and told him that his back was absolutely torn to shreds. Sure enough, Chen noticed that the pain was unreal, which seemed to happen right after his adrenaline rush wore off. Obviously, Chen called Dr. Zhou, telling her he needed surgery immediately. She went right over and took care of it, but she made it clear that there would be a price to pay for her treating him. Chen replied that all the food they had was human flesh and that he was willing to give her as much as she wanted. Naturally, Zhou changed her mind and said she didn't want any. Chen understood but told her she needed to stay and take care of him until he healed. He added that if she joined his crew, she'd be the absolute last person he'd kill. Zhou pushed his hand away and rejected his twisted offer. But when she tried to leave, she was caught off guard by Chen's men blocking the exit. Chen stepped in, clarifying that he wouldn't hurt her, but she wasn't leaving until he got better. Later, Chen sat down with his guys to talk about Zhang's place, realizing they couldn't break through no matter what they tried. Because of this, Chen doubled down on his initial plan, telling them they had to keep the place under 24/7 surveillance since the only way to take Zhang down is when he steps outside to do something. Zhou was sitting there listening to the whole thing and realized this might be useful information for Zhang. So she got up and told Chen she was going to the restroom. Once inside, she pulled out her phone and texted Zhang, letting him know that Chen and his crew were moving into the apartment next door so they could keep tabs on him constantly. Shortly after, we see Chen going over to the neighbor's apartment, which belonged to the other guy with glasses. From now on, let's call this guy Haney until we learn his mother's name. Haney and his wife let the gang into their place, saying they were about to leave immediately, but the gang threatened them, saying they wanted all their resources or they'd eat them. Haney agreed to all their demands and was just relieved they let him live. But of course, a gang isn't a gang without a little betrayal. They ended up blindsiding him and his wife, cutting them in half as they were leaving. At that moment, the look of terror washed over Zhou's face as she was terrified of being next in line, but Chen reassured her, saying they were just running low on food and needed meat to eat. If we go back to the original guy with glasses, Allah, and his infected friends, we see him sitting around looking anxious, saying his arm suddenly started itching. When he looked at it, he was shocked to realize that the infection had already started spreading through his body. He started crying, saying he was too young and didn't want to die so early. His friends noticed and checked themselves too, confirming right then and there that their time was running out as well. They quickly rushed and begged Wang to go ask Zhang for the cure, but she refused, saying she had already given up on that whole situation. A few days later, we see Zhang sitting around watching the latest news on his device. He watches Chen point his weapon at the rest of the residents, telling them they have to work together to survive this disaster. But in reality, Zhang knows Chen is only doing this because he's running low on bullets, and he's terrified that the people and his own men might turn against him. Unfortunately, our hero's good time was interrupted by a phone call right after he grabbed some popcorn. The call was, of course, from Zhou, who was terrified, telling him that Chen had started aggressively breaking into people's homes and killing them. She added that she hadn't eaten a thing in 2 days because she refused to eat human flesh, and begged him to come rescue her before she couldn't take it anymore. Zhang said he couldn't let the doctor die because she would come in handy later. He found the situation ridiculous given the disaster they were in, which is why he decided to give her one final test, after which he would finally let her live with him. When he hung up, he was surprised to hear Ping knocking on his door, telling him to stop hiding in his apartment and to come out and face him like a man. Zhang replied very calmly and sarcastically, saying it looked like Ping was really enjoying the infection spreading. Zhang kept talking, explaining exactly how Ping was going to die and the amount of pain he would feel. At that point, Ping completely lost his temper and told Zhang that if he got his hands on him, he'd kill him. But Zhang pointed out that he couldn't do that because he was in the advanced stages of the infection, making it impossible to be cured. Because of this, Zhang advised him to figure out what he wanted to do with the last days of his life. That was when Ping actually gave up, bought into what Zhang was saying, and lost all hope in life. This made him go back to his place, call out to Yo, and tell her he needed to talk to her immediately. But as he got closer to her, the sight of his decaying body freaked her out, and she told him to back away. He ignored her, grabbed her hand, and asked her to marry him. Naturally, Yo immediately refused and tried to get him away from her because he reeked. She pushed him back, saying he smelled awful and that she would go to Zhang anyway once Ping died. At that exact moment, Ping lost his mind, choked her, and told her he wasn't going to die alone and was taking her with him. Yo tried to fight back with the last of her strength and pushed his hand away, but he grabbed her again in a death grip, saying he'd put up with her running her mouth for too long. Let's leave him to finish her off and check back in with Dr. Zhou. There we see her saying that she has to follow Zhang's orders, even though what he's asking this time is really difficult. She started talking to Chen, telling him that she wanted to help them cook the human flesh, but he would have to give her a share of it in return. Chen agreed right away and let her do it since she had helped him out so much. The cook told her just to chop the wood and hand it over, and he'd handle the rest. Once they were done talking, he put the food on the stove and told Zhou to keep an eye on it. When he left, she was thrilled and said she had to take this chance. She pulled out the sleeping pills she had, dropped them into their pot of food, and stirred it in quickly before anyone could see her or catch on. After she finished, she served the food to everyone and took her own share, but she told them she wanted to eat alone so no one would see her in that state. After a while, she went back to check on them and noticed that the sleeping pill had already kicked in and everyone was asleep. She quickly pulled out her phone, told Zhang that she had put them to sleep just like he asked, and asked what she should do next. Zhang told her she needed to drag all of them over to the balcony. With a lot of effort and sweat, Zhou finally managed to drag the whole gang out to the balcony. Zhang came out onto his own balcony just across from them and told her to get out of the way so she wouldn't get hurt. But she asked him a rather silly question. Are you planning on killing them or what? Zhang replied that they were going to die, but the one doing the killing would be her, not him. He tossed her a rope, telling her to tie them all up with it and hand over the gun she'd find in Chen's pocket. Zhou followed his orders to the letter, completely surrendering to his commands. Despite this, as soon as she picked up the gun, Zhang raised his weapon at her, telling her to remove the ammo before she blew his brains out. At that point, Zhou started to worry and asked what guarantee she had that he wouldn't double-cross her after all this. He explained that he had no guarantees, but she really had no other choice but to trust him. Without thinking twice, Zhou removed the ammo and threw the gun over to Zhang to prove her loyalty. As soon as Zhang received the weapon, he started inspecting it to see if it was the same gun Chen had last time or a different one. Once he was sure, he brought over a garden hose and started spraying water all over the gang. When that happened, Chen woke up in a panic from the freezing water, and he and his guys were left wondering. How exactly did they end up there? Right then and there, Chen noticed Zhang on the balcony next door, yelled out, and asked him what the heck he was doing. Our hero replied, making it clear that he was sick of Chen's constant troublemaking and decided to end things for good. He turned the hose back on and started soaking the whole gang in water. Within seconds, the water began to freeze due to the freezing weather. And just like that, Zhang finally succeeded in getting rid of Chen and his crew. With Zhou's final mission completed, Zhang told her she could finally come over and live with him. She ran over without wasting a single second and told him she was standing right in front of the door. At that moment, Zhang was checking the camera and noticed she wasn't carrying any weapons, so he used the remote control to open the door, telling her she could come in whenever she wanted. As soon as she walked inside, and for the first time in months feeling warmth, she dropped to her knees to soak it in and was over the moon with joy. But Zhang held a gun to her back, saying he still wasn't sure she was completely unarmed. Naturally, she had to get up and prove it to him in a way that had nothing to do with him. Since she didn't fight back and did as she was told, he quickly decided to reward her, gave her some clothes, and told her she could take a hot shower if she wanted. The girl couldn't believe her luck, rushed to do exactly that, and came out wearing the new outfit. Zhang told her to sit down with him for a bit because he wanted to lay down the house rules. He started explaining that any order he gave her from now on was non-negotiable, and that if he even felt like she was going to betray him at any point, he would eliminate her without a second thought. The first rule was that she wasn't allowed to leave her room except at specific times he would set, and he made it clear that all the doors were made of the same metal as the front door, and that every corner of the apartment had cameras. Joe replied that she had absolutely no objections to any of this. Zhang was pleased with her response and told her to pay close attention because he was about to tell her a massive secret. He explained that the meteor crash caused massive amounts of gamma radiation to enter the Earth's surface. As a result, not only did the world freeze, but some people like him gained superpowers. He added that his superpower is based on a vast, endless storage space. Then he got to the most important part, which included a serious warning for her. The amount of resources he has inside this dimension is about 1,000 times more than what's visible in the apartment. However, the moment he dies, everything goes with him and she would starve to death. By doing this, he eliminated any possibility of Joe betraying him. After Joe successfully stuffed her face following a long period of hunger, our hero made it clear that from now on, she would be responsible for cooking and cleaning. In simple terms, she was going to be his maid, but he added that it's a maid with benefits, not just an ordinary one. Hey, gotta stay safe so we don't all go down, right? Anyway, after they finished eating together and had some ginger tea, they started digging into more food to make up for all the energy they spent. When they were done, they put on their outdoor gear, and Zhang told her to get ready because they had a lot of work to do today. When she asked what they were going to do on the balcony in this kind of weather, he replied that they were going to smash the gang's frozen statues. Joe was surprised and said it wasn't necessary since they were already dead. Zhang replied with a sly smirk that they had to make an example out of the gang for everyone else, so no one would dare pull the same stunt in the future. He also made it clear that she would be the one smashing the statues. Naturally, Joe didn't object and crossed over to the other balcony on the wooden plank. When she got there, she started smashing them to pieces without a second thought. Zhang even started filming her, and she looked like she was actually enjoying it. Zhang told her that he was going to send this video to the building's group chat to boost their reputation and dominance in front of all the residents. And right after that, he sent the video in the group chat so everyone could see it. People were over the moon when they found out the tyrant Chen was dead, but Zhang didn't wait around. Right after that, he sent them a message stating that the apartment building was under his control from now on. While everyone was hyping him up and begging him for food, he was surprised to receive a phone call from Yo. He thought she was dead, but when he answered, she asked him if he was hanging out with Joe right now. Before he could even answer, she hit him with another question, explaining that the 3 guys were already dead and that she wanted to come and live in his apartment. Zhang replied, saying he was surprised she was still alive. Obviously, Yo was totally delusional and started spinning everything her own way, which made her say that he must have replaced her with Joe just because he thought she was dead, and that she was sure he would never cheat on her if he knew she was still alive. While she was going on with this romantic, poetic speech, Kai and Injayu were standing right behind her, about to choke her. Sure enough, our hero started hearing sounds of a fight and scuffles coming from Yo's side, with her friends telling her she wasn't going anywhere and that she had to die with them. At that point, Zhang decided to mess with her head even more and sent her a picture of himself with Joe. Within seconds, the photo went through right in the middle of her brawl with her friends. When she looked at the message, she freaked out because he had captioned the picture saying that she was too late and that he was already in love with Joe. Yo completely lost her mind and yelled that Joe was just using him to get him killed, and that he needed to give her a chance to show him how much she loved his money. I mean, how much she loved him. But Zhang decided to drop the hammer and finish her off with a brutal truth bomb. He told her not to call him again, because after meeting someone like Joe, he could never look at someone beneath her level. Yo broke down, saying she couldn't believe his words. After all, how could he just dump her like a stray dog after chasing her for 2 full years while she ignored him? While she was screaming and wailing on the floor, her friends were just standing there, gloating and telling her that she was going to die with them anyway. On the other end of the line, Zhang ended the call, feeling completely satisfied now that he had gotten his revenge on Yo. Once that was done, he found Joe talking to him, saying she had made lunch, but due to his severe trust issues, he told her to eat from it first right in front of him. While he was waiting for her to eat, he noticed the messages from Lin in the group chat, who was apparently still alive. She was the head of the neighborhood committee, and she was going around telling everyone to hand over all their resources. Zhang was confused when he saw this and wondered how Lin was still alive, considering she was the first person Chen took resources from. Joe stepped in and explained that she had given Lin some resources a while ago because she felt sorry for her. Zhang told her that no matter what resources she gave her, it definitely wouldn't have kept her alive all this time, which is why he couldn't figure out who was helping her right now. Joe then remembered something important and reminded Zhang that Lin's grandson died 10 days ago, and that she was probably feeding on him right now. After Zhang's curiosity was finally satisfied, we see someone throwing themselves off a balcony in the adjacent building. It looks like the people there are losing their minds and acting like they're on a playground slide. While Joe was telling him she hoped this storm would end as soon as possible, Zhang is surprised by a phone call from Uncle Lao. When our hero answered, he sounded like he wanted to ask for a favor but was too embarrassed to say it. This prompted Zhang to tell him to ask for whatever he wanted and not to hold back, assuring him that he'd help out as much as he could. Zhang thought to himself that Uncle Lao wasn't just a stand-up guy, but also a former army officer, and that he could definitely make great use of his strength in the future. After that, Uncle Lao started explaining his situation, saying that Chi's daughter had a fever and they needed some medicine because it could get worse. Zhang was surprised, thinking to himself that he had no idea Uncle Lao was still in the game, because there was no reason. The second reason that made him accept taking anything from him, my friend. Despite this, he decided not to pry or ask him about the Chi situation, and just told him to come pick up the medicine whenever he wanted. Uncle Lao replied that he had already done him 2 favors, and that he would definitely return these good deeds in the future. For those who don't remember the first time, it was when Zhang warned him about the cold weather, and told him to stockpile as many resources as he could. After hanging up with him, Joe started asking him if his relationship with the old man was good or what. Zhang replied that he was an alright guy and all, but that he wasn't helping him out of the goodness of his heart. The real reason was that Lao would be very useful to him in the future. A short while into their conversation, our hero heard Uncle Lao arrive and knock on his door. But when he looked at the tablet, he was surprised because Chi had come with him. Since he suspected that the scheming woman was there to ask for more than just medicine, he just dropped the medicine through the small opening to Uncle Lao. Although Lao was incredibly grateful and thanked him for his help, the manipulative woman who was with him began to play the victim. She begged Zhang to take her daughter in, and added that she wanted him to do this because she knew he had a heater, which would help her daughter recover much faster. But Zhang knew very well that if he agreed to take her daughter in now, she would come back later and ask him to let her live there too. Because of this, he explained that he wouldn't let anyone into his house during the disaster. He played it off, telling her that the gas was going to run out anyway, and that the generators would shut down soon. At that point, Lao stepped in and told Chi to stop what she was doing, considering Zhang had been nice enough to give them the medicine for free under these harsh conditions. But Chi was stubborn and kept crying and begging Zhang to take her daughter in. That was when Zhang started spelling out the situation for her, explaining that he couldn't open the door because he was terrified. He added that the whole building wanted to kill him and take his stuff, and if it weren't for that, he would have taken her daughter in without a second thought. When Lao heard this, he snapped at Chi and told her to stop annoying a good guy like Zhang. He said this kind of attitude would make Zhang regret helping them in the first place. But the scheming woman didn't stop and asked why he had Zhou staying with him then. Of course, Zhang didn't want to completely roast her and say that Zhou was beautiful and she wasn't, so he told her that Zhou was a special case because she was his fiancée. As soon as he said that, Zhou turned bright red and was over the moon. On the other side, Chi finally shut up, said goodbye to Lao and Zhang, and thanked them for their help. When Lao got back home with her, he started scolding her, saying that this wasn't what they had agreed on at all. She replied that she was only doing all this for her daughter, and that if her daughter died, she would die right after her. Lao explained that while he understood her love for her daughter and everything, if it weren't for Zhang, he wouldn't have what he had and they'd be dead by now. But the scheming Chi wouldn't drop it. She said that he was too kind and thought Zhang was a good guy, when in reality Zhang saw them as a threat. That was why he refused to open the door and just dropped the medicine through the small slot. At that point, Lao was absolutely fed up with her and told her to watch her mouth after all Zhang had done for them. But she kept talking, claiming that Zhang only helped Lao out to turn him into a thug working for him later on. While she kept babbling, Lao hit his breaking point, yelled at her, and said that was more than enough. He made it clear that he had spent most of his life on the streets and knew exactly how to read people. He warned her that if she mentioned anything like this again, he'd split her in half. He walked away, saying he was going to sleep in the living room tonight to clear his head. Once he left, the woman started talking to herself, saying that she absolutely had to find a way to get into Zhang's apartment so she and her daughter could live comfortably. Shortly after that, on the following morning, the snow blocking the building's entrance suddenly breaks. A group of people we've never seen before walk in through the snow. Without any warning, their leader tells them to head straight upstairs. On their way up, they run into one of the building's residents, who freaks out when he sees them and tries to run away, but they chase him down. He's pretty slow, so the new gang catches up and takes him out. When it's done, their leader tells them to leave the body where it is, and that they can grab it on their way out when they're done with their mission. We soon find out that their mission is to break into Zhang's apartment when the leader calls out to a guy named Don, telling him to blow the door up. Don wastes no time and starts following the orders of the boss, H-Wang. He places the bomb, lights the fuse, and runs away to get out of the blast radius. Naturally, with how loud the explosion is, it wakes Zhang up in a panic. He grabs his gun and checks the cameras on his tablet. He's completely caught off guard to see a group of attackers he's never seen before, but when he looks closely at the tools they're carrying, he realizes they're all construction tools. It hits him that this must be the group of construction workers who rent a place in the adjacent building. At that point, he starts getting anxious because he knows the residents of the neighboring buildings have figured out he has resources, a heater, and electricity. After all, his apartment is the only one with the lights on in the entire building, my friend. Outside Zhang's place, the leader is annoyed and tells Don that his bomb is garbage because it only scratched the door. Don fires back, insisting his bombs are solid, but suggests the freezing temperature must have affected the efficiency and lowered the explosive power. While he is slyly suggesting to his buddy that they could try breaking the door down with sledgehammers, Zhang shows up on the balcony. He tells them they need to remember that they were the ones who started this, and immediately throws white phosphorus and Molotov cocktails at them. The gang members were standing way too close to the door when this went down, so the blast hits a whole bunch of them and chars them to a crisp. Among them is Old Man Don, who starts calling out to his buddy for help, but everyone is stunned when a bullet pierces his head and takes him out for good. These, of course, are Zhang's bullets, as he keeps firing at anyone he can reach in a fit of rage. Once the shooting spree is over, Zhang realizes he took down a huge number of the workers, and tells himself that it's a good thing he didn't use an automatic rifle, or he would have emptied all his ammo because he totally lost his cool. Speaking of automatic rifles and heavy weapons, Zhang knows he's definitely going to need them in the future because the enemies are going to be much stronger. The cold killed off most of the weak people, and now only the strong ones are left. After that, Zhang isn't willing to forgive them, wanting to kill them all and get revenge. He walks into the room to grab his phone, but is surprised to find our shady doctor, Jo, hiding in fear from the thieves. When she sees him, she quickly gets up so she doesn't lose her image in front of him, and tells him she was just hiding because she thought it was an earthquake. Zhang replies that they live on the 24th floor, and if an earthquake had been that strong, she would have been dead anyway. When he tells her what actually went down, she's completely shocked and asks why he thinks this gang is more dangerous than Chen. Zhang explains that Chen was just an everyday thug with a gun, whereas these guys are construction workers with strong, sturdy bodies, which is reason enough to make even crude, basic weapons in their hands terrifying. He adds that he's lucky he managed to take out their explosives expert, because he wouldn't have been able to sleep well if he stayed alive. After that, Zhang grabbed his phone and told her that he needed to find people to help him, because he didn't want to carry out the revenge on his own right away. Before we see him send a message in the building's group chat, he tells the residents that the noise they heard was from the residents of Building 26 breaking into their building. He adds that they had already killed one of the 10th floor residents on their way up, but that he managed to take out a huge number of them. Naturally, the people in the building started hyping him up and thanking him for what he did, but Zhang replied that he had run out of ammo and that from now on, everyone had to fend for themselves. Right after he finished typing that message, he was surprised by a phone call from Uncle Lao, who wanted to check on him. Lao asked if he needed any help, adding that he knew these guys because he used to sit and drink with them at the local bar for hours, and that their leader's name was H. Wang. Zhang replied, making it clear that he wasn't planning on taking his revenge on them right away. However, since Lao was basically their friend and hung out with them, Zhang wanted him to provide all the details and info he knew about them. Uncle Lao said he was on it and started breaking it down for him. He explained that this group of workers was part of the Tian gang, and that the gang consisted of 20 people, all under the command of H. Wang. At that point, a brainwave hit our hero, and he told Lao that they could join forces with the rest of the building's residents and form their own crew. He said that this would make it a lot harder for the Tian gang to take them down. Lao actually loved the idea and told Zhang he was going to send a message to the group chat right away to ask everyone to unite under his leadership. But Zhang told him that the residents had serious trust issues and would definitely refuse. Zhang explained that all they needed to do right now was wait for H. Wang and his guys to attack the rest of the residents. He said that only then would the people get scared, get desperate, and come begging them for help. When that happened, Zhang would dictate his terms for the alliance and they would be forced to agree or die trying. Uncle Lao was convinced, and they ended the call on that note. After that, Zhang looked right at Jo and told her he needed a favor. He explained that he knew the residents were just hyping him up, but that deep down, they actually hated him. Because of this, it would be extremely difficult for him to gather any information from them, and he wanted her to handle it instead. Jo agreed right away. 2 days passed, and Jo came back to tell him she had gathered enough information and could now summarize everything she'd learned. She explained that there were 2 gangs in their neighborhood posing a serious threat. The Tian gang, as we mentioned, they have strong bodies and crude, basic weapons, and they are residents of Building 26. The Rabid Wolves gang, located in Building 21 and led by Wang and Xiu. Zhang understood the situation. When he stepped close to her, her face turned bright red again. He told her that these were the only groups that posed a real danger to them, as he was sure most of the regular people were either dead or had committed suicide. Because of this, he now wanted her to gather more information to see if there were any other gangs, and to find out if any of these gangs were carrying firearms. If we go back to the Tian gang, we see H. Wang looking thrilled as he keeps killing the rest of the residents in Zhang's building. He orders his men to keep slaughtering them, and to let everyone know that the killings won't stop until Zhang surrenders to them. Under this intense pressure, the residents started blowing up the group chat with endless messages, all telling Zhang to turn himself in since he was the reason the gang was killing them. But Zhang grabbed his phone, proving he could type faster than them, and told them that the gang was the one who attacked him first, and that he actually did them all a favor by taking out a huge number of them. They replied very coldly, telling him that he was the gang's real target and that they didn't want to die because of his personal drama. At that point, Zhang's blood. Zhang completely lost his cool and couldn't contain his temper. He remembered all the trash talk he'd learned from online gaming, and told them that he didn't give a single cent whether they lived, died, or went to hell. He made it clear that he would never forget that most of them tried to break into his place to kill him. He added that if they got on his nerves any more than this, he might end up taking them out himself instead of Huang. Naturally, when the residents heard this, they started freaking out and completely lost their minds. They had thought their lives would get better once Chen was dead, but now an even more dangerous gang had shown up, not to mention the blizzard showing no signs of stopping and looking like it was going to last forever. After that went down, our hero called Uncle Lao and told him that the time had come. Lao told him to leave everything from that point on to him and that he would sort everything out. Right after hanging up, Lao sent a message in the building's group chat telling everyone not to panic. He explained that the gang only had 20 people, which meant that if they united, they would definitely be able to stand their ground. The residents replied, telling him they thought he was dead and that they were actually on board with his suggestion, asking what their next move was. Lao explained that his own resources had run out a while ago and that he couldn't find anything to eat. Because of this, the best solution was for everyone to work under Zhang's command, since Zhang would agree to give them food and provide the weapons needed to defeat the gang. He added that he would help convince Zhang to accept their cooperation, since Zhang was an old friend of his. When Lao finished the conversation, he texted Zhang to let him know he had successfully finished his first task. Zhang told him to just focus on the group chat messages and try to back him up as much as possible. Zhang then hopped onto the group chat and told everyone he was ready to help, but only for Uncle Lao's sake. On the flip side, they had to follow all his orders to the letter, starting today. The residents replied immediately, saying they would follow all his orders unless he asked them to do something that would get them killed. Zhang made it clear that he was ready to supply them all with enough weapons, but that they would have to fight Huang's gang themselves. As expected, everyone went completely silent at once. This made Zhang snap at them, calling them idiots for thinking he would help them out without them lifting a finger. He told them he was hanging up now so he wouldn't waste any more time, and told them they'd better wash their faces and get ready to be slaughtered by Huang and his men. At that point, it was Uncle Lao's turn to step in. He spoke up, saying they were ready to accept Zhang's offer. He explained that he was going to die either way and felt it was better to die fighting to protect himself. Zhang said that as long as they were on board, he was calling the shots from that day forward, but he added that once the defense against the gang was over, they would take out anyone who didn't join them. After Zhang hung up, people started tagging each other in the group chat. Even the ones who were scared changed their minds because they were afraid Zhang would actually come and wipe them out later. When our hero saw that everyone was getting hyped about his leadership, he told them that everyone who joined him would live a good life and that he would personally go out to get them resources. At the same time, he was thinking to himself that he really needed to go out anyway to get firearms or other weapons for the rest of the residents. He would do this using the snowmobiles he had stored in his storage dimension. The residents were amazed by his words and asked if he could really go out in this kind of weather without freezing to death. Zhang replied with all the bravado he could muster, telling them he had to do it to protect them since they were now under his wing. He added that he used to be a manager for the biggest warehouses, so he knew exactly where the supply caches were, making him the perfect person to go out and do the resource collection operation. Right then and there, everyone started getting emotional and thanking Zhang for his bold sacrifice. Zhou tried to tell him that the people were now ready to crown him as their king out of how much they loved him, but he replied that he didn't actually consider them his followers and that he was just going to use them as human shields. He went over, grabbed his bulletproof vest, and reassured Zhou that he would leave her enough resources to last before he took off, explaining that he needed to go down there anyway to grab a few things. Of course, like a madly in love girl, Zhou begged him to take her with him, but he told her that he trusted her now and didn't want to exhaust her. The girl got a little shy and started daydreaming about the wedding venue and how many kids they were going to have. But Zhang played her and took most of the resources with him as he left. Because the snow had piled up so high, reaching all the way to the 4th floor, Zhang decided to open a window on that floor and use it to climb out into the streets. Once he was outside and realized walking on the snow would be tough, he decided to bust out his snowmobile. Before he took off, he made sure no one was watching. But the second he finally pulled it out of his storage dimension and took off, we see the shadow of someone watching from the window of one of the nearby buildings. Meanwhile, Zhang was on his way, thoroughly enjoying the ride, noting that it was the first time he'd been out in the streets without all the traffic and nonsense. Within moments, he finally arrived at the Tian City police station. He shattered the glass of one of the windows and climbed right in without hesitation. Once inside, he saw a large, frozen group of police officers and said he was sure these were the heroes who had been working the night shift. He pulled a blanket out of his storage and covered them up because he respected guys like them. Then he noticed the keys sitting next to one of the officers and was thrilled. That had to be the keys to the armory he was looking for. Wasting no time, he headed straight for it and found all the weapons he'd been dreaming of. He grabbed a sniper rifle, imagined he was playing PUBG, and said his aiming had gotten a lot sharper lately, especially since when he was firing at H-Wang's men, he managed to hit every one of them. He immediately started stuffing the weapons into his storage space, saying that this way he'd be able to build the strongest gang in the universe. Once he was done with the weapons, he started thinking about food. It seemed he didn't want to give anyone the stuff he'd spent all his money on. Knowing that the malls closest to the city center had probably been completely looted, he decided to head out to the more remote malls in hopes of finding some supplies. When he finally arrived at a large supermarket inside one of the malls, he noticed that all the food was in terrible shape. He said he wouldn't eat it even if you paid him, but he still threw it all into his bags anyway since it wasn't for him. After that, he hit the road and headed back to his building, which is Building 25. Meanwhile, H-Wang and one of his guys are watching him after returning to Building 26, saying they need to catch Zhang and take that electric snowmobile of his. Not to mention that a large number of the residents had seen the snowmobile, which is why Zhang knew he'd have more enemies to deal with from now on. When he climbed back in through the window, Uncle Lao was right there waiting for him, drum ready, and told Zhang he couldn't believe he was such a badass and managed to get that much food all at once. Zhang replied that he was badder than a badass and that his power came from beyond space and time. He added that he had checked a lot of stores, but that this was all the food he could find. He then started talking to the crowd that had gathered, telling them he'd worked his butt off to get them all these resources, which got the residents cheering for him and chanting, "Hero," under Uncle Lao's lead. Zhang seized the moment and explained to everyone that the food would be distributed equally. However, anyone who wanted to eat had to take up weapons and defend the building against the enemies. Even before he could finish his sentence, 10 guys from H-Wang's gang showed up, shouting and demanding that he hand over the food, but Zhang decided to test the residents' loyalty. He ordered them to take the gang out, promising that anyone who managed to kill one of these guys would get enough food to feed 5 people. Naturally, when the residents realized how small the gang's numbers were compared to them, they grabbed their bats and crude weapons and charged at them, all shouting and hungry for food. The sheer size difference in the numbers against them freaked the gang members out. That was when Uncle Lao yelled at the crowd, telling them to use their numbers to their advantage in the fight. Within seconds of the battle starting, which was a total blowout, the gang members were dropping like flies right in front of everyone. Seeing this, the remaining gang members panicked and bolted to avoid getting killed. Once they were gone, the residents were over the moon because they had managed to protect their homes, take out 2 gang members, and earn some food from Zhang. Zhang started hyping them up for their courage and the effort they put in. He told them they needed to learn an important lesson today. Their strength would always be in their unity. He then pointed to the 2 guys he saw taking down the gang members and told them to step up to get their reward. The 2 guys were moved and promised that from now on, they would follow his orders no matter what. On the flip side, this scene turned out to be the ultimate motivation for the rest of the residents. People started saying that if they had just moved a little faster, all that food would have been theirs. When our hero saw that look in their eyes, he knew it was exactly the feeling he wanted them to have. After that, he started calling people up to distribute the food he had brought. He was giving each person their share based on the effort they had put in, thinking to himself that this would drill the idea into their heads: work more, eat more. That was until it was the turn of Shaw, who looked like he was about to drop dead from hunger. Zhang gave him a look of pure disgust and tossed him a single piece of toffee on the floor, not even able to stand looking at his face. Shaw wanted to argue, saying he couldn't survive on just that, but Zhang told him not to raise his voice at him after what he'd pulled. Zhang had seen him hiding behind the crowd during the last fight, not doing a single thing. The rest of the residents chimed in, making fun of him and saying that he hadn't even laid a finger on the gang members and that even the piece of toffee was too generous for him. Shaw got mad and argued back, pointing out that the gang members who showed up were fewer than 10 people while the residents heavily outnumbered them, and that he didn't even get a chance to jump in. Zhang replied very coldly, "Not my problem, buddy." At that point, Shaw hit his breaking point, stood up, and accused Zhang of targeting him personally. Zhang signaled to his guys, letting them know that someone wasn't happy with his distribution system. Under Zhang's orders, his men grabbed and pinned Shaw down. Zhang spoke to the crowd, making it clear that anyone who defied his orders from now on would end up just like Shaw. Sure enough, his guys immediately started stomping and kicking the guy around in the hallway until Zhang told them to back off, figuring Shaw had learned his lesson. But it turned out Shaw hadn't learned a thing and mouthed off, saying Zhang was going way too far with the beating. Zhang got fed up with his face and stepped down hard on Shaw's hand, to the point that the toffee dropped out of his grasp. Zhang dropped the truth bomb on him. That stunt just cost him his toffee, and he wouldn't be getting anything at all. Zhang turned back to the rest of the group and made it clear that there was no room for dead weight in his crew, and that everyone had to earn their keep. He told everyone that the food distribution for the day was over, but Zhang then heard voices from the crowd calling out to him by name. It was none other than the two toxic people who just wouldn't die. They started begging him for food, saying he forgot their share. Zhang fired back, making it clear that he could never forget them and that he remembered them perfectly well. But the problem was that they hadn't done a single thing, which meant they didn't deserve any food to begin with. Yo squeezed out some crocodile tears and tried to hold his hand, reminding him that he'd told her before that he loved her. But Zhang pushed her away hard, telling her he was just sweet-talking her and had no idea she would take his words that seriously. He added that he now had Joe and didn't want anyone else. At that point, Joe stepped closer, poking and provoking Yo, which made her completely lose her temper. Yo burst into tears and asked why he had changed his mind after telling her he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. He replied that she was just an arrogant person who used her looks to manipulate young guys before the apocalypse. After the disaster hit, she found out her looks couldn't even buy her 2 packs of instant noodles. Shaw chimed in, saying Zhang was 100% right, and that Yo used to try and trap him in a relationship because he was rich, but he was way too smart to be played. The rest of the residents started chiming in too, saying they had no idea there was such a toxic person in the building, especially since a lot of them used to have a crush on her. All this happened while Yo was screaming at everyone to shut up. When she ran off crying because she couldn't stand the laughter, our hero decided to give Shaw Yo's share of the food since he had taken his side earlier. He then turned to the crowd and told them to pay close attention because they needed to discuss how to fortify the building. He explained that they had 47 adults capable of fighting, not counting Zhang, Joe, and Qi. He broke those 47 people into 6 squads of 7 to 8 members each. These people would take turns doing shifts on watch. If an attack happened, the guards would immediately alert the rest of the crew. He added that the reward for taking out an enemy would always be enough food for 5 people, while anyone who slacked off would only get the scraps. After that, Zhang looked at Uncle Lao and left the squad assignments to him, since he was an ex-army officer and understood that stuff better than he did. Time passed, and we see Joe asking Zhang about what he saw when he went outside. He told her the snow was covering everything so much that he couldn't see a thing. He explained that even if the blizzard stopped, it would take a whole half-month for all that snow to melt. Joe got worried and said they were just at the beginning of winter, which meant the temperature was going to keep dropping. But Zhang stood up and said the blizzard season shouldn't worry them, especially after he managed to get all those weapons and ammo on his last trip outside. He started explaining to her that the biggest threat they faced now was people, not the blizzards. With these weapons in hand, nothing was a threat anymore. When he stepped out onto the balcony to test out his new sniper rifle, he noticed someone running toward his garage. Zhang figured this guy was definitely looking for his electric snowmobile, but he wasn't worried because he had only made it look like he parked it in the garage, when in reality, he'd already put it back in his storage dimension. His thoughts were interrupted by a phone call from Uncle Lao, who called just to thank him for the instant noodles he'd sent him. Time flew by, and on the following morning, a group of thieves from H. Wang's gang made their way into Building 25. But as soon as they got close enough to the stairwell, the group leader was caught off guard and a brick was thrown directly at his head at lightning speed. Even though he managed to dodge it in the last split second, he was caught off guard by the sound of people shouting that the Tian gang was attacking. Naturally, he told his guys that these people were just bugs and couldn't actually hurt him, which is why he ordered them to take out the guy who just threw the stone. But out of nowhere, the gang realized that the building's residents were fighting back with everything they had. In fact, H. Wang saw his guys taking hits and falling down the stairs one by one. At that point, he screamed at his gang to fall back and get out of there. The residents decided to let them retreat once they were out of the building, knowing that pushing too far outside could be dangerous. Zhang was standing on the balcony, taking his sniper rifle out of his storage dimension, and started aiming at the thieves to practice his shooting. Looking through the high-powered scope, he realized he wouldn't even need to break a sweat, and that it would be incredibly easy to take them down. Within seconds, he landed a perfect headshot on the first guy. The guy dropped dead, sending the rest of the gang into a panic. They heard the gunfire, but had no idea where the shots were coming from. Their confusion was cut short as Zhang kept firing, picking them off one by one. Our hero kept shooting until he took them all down. By the end of it, Zhang was over the moon. He realized he could now wipe out his enemies while kicking back and relaxing right in his own home. The building's residents were watching from their windows and saw exactly what went down. They agreed that they had to follow Zhang's orders from now on, since he was a badass sniper and a powerful leader. On the following morning, we see Joe trying to make some homemade instant noodles. Zhang started explaining to her that he used his sniper rifle yesterday and took out 7 guys, and was surprised that she didn't even ask about the sound of the gunfire or why he killed them. She replied that she trusted him blindly, and that she was sure everything he did was to keep them safe. Over in Building 26, H. Wang is staring at the bodies of the men Zhang took out, absolutely furious. He asks one of his guys what they are supposed to do now after losing more than half their squad. An angry H-Wang insists they still have weapons and need to drop the idea of going after Zhang. One of his guys pushes back, explaining that they have no resources left, and that if they don't steal the electric snowmobile and Zhang's resources, they're going to starve to death soon. But H-Wang shuts him down, saying that won't happen. Instead, they're going to wait until nightfall to go down and collect the bodies Zhang took out so they can eat them. If we check back in with our hero, we see him leaving his apartment now that everyone respects him, before putting in his earpiece to contact Uncle Lao. He thanks him for tipping him off about the nearby military base. Meanwhile, the Rabid Wolves gang from Building 21 is watching Zhang. They are totally confused because they had sent people to search Zhang's garage earlier and found absolutely nothing. Even so, the gang is determined to steal that vehicle at any cost so they can get around easily and recruit more members to their crew. That's the only way they'll be able to build the biggest gang in all of Tian and be total badasses even during the apocalypse. Let's let them dream for a minute and get back to Zhang. Because the snow had piled up so high, he unfortunately couldn't get into anything except the massive stores. But at that moment, he remembered there was a huge warehouse nearby in the south of the city. Even though he had already cleaned out the biggest warehouse in southern China, there were still other relatively large ones. When he finally got there, he saw a massive warehouse almost completely buried beneath the snow. That's when he says that he needed to search it right away because if the resources inside were still there, they would be enough to feed thousands of people. But unfortunately, when he broke the glass on the roof of the warehouse and went in, he discovered that all the food and drinks had already been taken. Still, his hard work didn't go to waste. He found a massive fleet of vehicles and trucks. Even though he knew he couldn't do anything with them right now, he told himself he might need them later. When he came back up, he decided to go look for gas since he was using his electric snowmobile so much. He said he needed to find the nearest gas station as fast as possible. But when he got there, he was shocked and realized it was going to be impossible. All he could see was the gas station sign poking through the snow. That meant most of the gas stations were buried way too deep under the snow to reach. Zhang threw himself onto the snow, frustrated, saying it was impossible for humans to dig that deep without heavy-duty machinery. That's when it clicked and he remembered the massive drilling machine he had just taken from the warehouse. Since the snow hadn't turned into solid ice blocks yet, digging it out with the machine would be a breeze. So he pulled the bulldozer out of his storage dimension, filled it up with gas, and made sure everything was perfectly set. Once he was sitting inside the bulldozer, he mentioned he was used to driving this type of heavy machinery because he used to operate one back when he was a warehouse manager. After a long session of plowing through the snow and breaking a sweat, Zhang finally reached the entrance of the gas station. He went right inside and headed straight to the storage room to grab everything he could find. He found 3 large cans of gasoline and 1 of diesel, and said he definitely wouldn't be needing gas again for a very long time. Then a crazy, brilliant idea hit him while he was putting the gas in storage. He realized he could reach all the resources that had been buried under the snow using this exact same method. That meant all these resources basically belonged to him, since no one else in the world could reach them anyway. Since he was completely exhausted and it was already nighttime, Zhang decided to catch some sleep right there inside the gas station before heading to the military base. Back at Building 25, we see Dr. Zhou examining a sick child with a fever. Unfortunately, she can't do anything to help because Zhang only left her food and took all the medical supplies with him. But out of nowhere, Uncle Lao stepped in and told Zhou that he still had some leftover medicine she could use. He reassured the boy's mother that Zhang the badass would be back soon and everything would get better in a heartbeat. Sure enough, the child started feeling better shortly after, which made the mother thank Lao and Zhou for their help. Zhou chimed in, making it clear that she should actually thank Zhang, as even the medicine Lao had was originally taken from him. But right as our heroes started walking away, they heard footsteps running up the stairs. It was Lin, who had completely lost her mind. She was screaming that from now on, she wouldn't let a single child stay alive in the building, and that she was going to make all of them join her grandson. She suddenly stabbed the boy's mother right in the neck with the knife she was holding. Zhou was paying attention and managed to catch the child before he hit the ground. But with the mother dead, Lin threatened Zhou, saying she was going to make her join the mother if she didn't hand over the kid. Zhou fired back, telling her that the boy was the same age as her grandson and that she should be ashamed of herself. But Lin made it clear that her actual goal was to kill every single child who was the age of her grandson. Zhou started running, knowing Lin had completely lost it. But because Zhou was moving slowly while carrying the kid, Lin caught up, grabbed her by the leg, and dragged her down so that Zhou fell onto the stairs with the child. At that point, Lin decided she was going to kill Zhou too, along with the baby, because she let her grandson died just split seconds before the knife could reach Zhou and pierce her. Uncle Lao stepped in and pushed Lin away, blocking the attack with his own arm. Zhou was completely freaked out and asked him if his arm was hurt, but he replied that it was just a scratch and asked if she and the baby were okay. But before she could answer, Lin interrupted and started shouting, cussing out Lao and calling him a coward who was only acting tough now, after being terrified of Chen and Zhang's crew earlier. The sheer noise and commotion drew the rest of the building's residents out to see what was going on. Lao started getting mad at her, reminding her that the badass Zhang had taken out Chen, and that if Chen were still alive, he would have eaten her too. At that point, Zhou had reached her breaking point and had to step in. She told Lin that everyone knew full well that her grandson had died because of her. Even though Zhou had sent her the medicine she needed to treat the boy, she had actually killed him herself and fed on him out of severe hunger, leaving the mother to walk away in disbelief. Two of the residents who had been listening to Zhou's words started calling Lin a liar, saying she had convinced everyone before that her grandson died because of Zhang. Because of this, they figured she had lived long enough. Besides, the cold was unbearable and they hadn't been warm in a very long time, so they decided to set her on fire and use her as a makeshift heater, since her larger frame would keep them warm for a long time. If we check back in with Zhang, we see him finally arriving in front of the military base. He started the bulldozer to clear a path so he could get inside. But unlike the police station where he found the frozen cops when he stepped inside this base, there was absolutely no trace of anyone, whether dead or alive. This caught him completely off guard, and he started wondering where the people and the resources had gone. That was when he put the pieces together and came to a major conclusion. The military had prior knowledge of the apocalypse. That meant the top brass had moved the majority of the resources out of the base and hidden them in a safe place. Obviously, as soon as the blizzards passed and things cooled down, they would reappear and take control of all of China once again. Because of this, Zhang started getting anxious, realizing these guys would be highly trained and extremely difficult to deal with. He knew he had to get prepared, because a massive power struggle could break out at any moment. He kept plowing through the snow and digging deeper near the building until he accidentally stumbled upon the army's armory. He found a massive stash of weapons, though he noticed an even larger amount had been taken. Of course, that didn't matter to him. He was over the moon anyway. The weapons he found were more than enough to build a powerful army under his own command. After that, he hopped on his electric snowmobile to head home. On the way, he told himself that whenever he needed more weapons, all he had to do was track down another military base. When he returned to his building, the residents were waiting for him and were extremely annoyed that he'd come back empty-handed and without any resources. They even started cussing him out, saying they were starving and that he'd been gone for 2 days only to come back looking like a fool. Zhang replied very coldly, "Let me know when you're done cussing me out." He added that they shouldn't forget he was doing all this for them and that they were the ones who asked for his help in the first place. Wrapping up his response, he told them he was done helping them and that from now on, everyone was responsible for finding their own resources. One of the residents quickly stepped in, telling Zhang that they didn't mean to upset him, and that the freezing weather was just getting to them and making them lose their cool. He explained that they really appreciated his hard work and knew he needed to rest after a trip like that. When the news reached the rest of the residents, they were absolutely furious. The guy in the beanie was thinking to himself that they had been doing their best to guard the building all this time, so how could Zhang just come and tell them there were no resources? That was what prompted him to approach Zhang and offer to have a few of them tag along with him in the future to make the resource hunting operation a lot easier. He made it clear that he was suggesting this with good intentions, and that he thought Zhang's snowmobile could easily fit 3 more people. Now the guy in the beanie was talking to Zhang while hiding a knife behind his back, while 2 other guys stepped in and offered to go with him as well. But Zhang reached into his pocket right away because he realized these guys were up to no good. He drew his gun and blew the beanie guy's brains out in the blink of an eye. He then started yelling at the rest of the residents, telling them that if they thought he actually bought their BS, they were crazy. One of them tried to calm him down, asking him what the heck he was doing and telling him to wait. But Zhang didn't even let him finish his sentence before opening fire with pinpoint accuracy, 1 round after another. We see him landing lethal shots on most of the group, taking them down. Even though a few of them managed to escape through the window, Zhang had already sent a clear message to everyone. Shortly after, the madly in love girl came over to check on our hero. But he told her he was fine, just got a scratch, and that nothing had happened. He walked off, saying out loud that he was too nice for his own good because he decided to spare the rest of the residents after they'd treated him so poorly. But it seemed like Chi didn't like what he was saying, thinking to herself that everyone knew full well he only took those guys out to make an example of them. On the other end, Zhang was busy thinking about what to do in the future, knowing he couldn't rely on the building's weak little wannabe tough guys. When Zhang got back to his place, he started asking Zhou about the latest developments in the building while he was away. She replied that Lin had lost it over the death of her grandson. Zhang was busy thinking about what to do in the future, knowing he couldn't rely on the building's weak little wannabe tough guys. When Zhang got back to his place, he started asking Zhou about the latest developments in the building while he was away. She replied that Lin had lost it over the death of her grandson, killed the boy's mother, and even tried to kill Zhou, but some residents stepped in and took Lin down. She added that a woman named Lin Ju from Building 9 wanted to talk to him, but didn't go into the details of their cooperation, saying she'd only discuss it with Zhang in person. Zhang was caught off guard and asked why a woman like Lin Ju would want to talk to him, especially since he already had everything he needed. Joe replied that Lin Ju had been one of her patients before, and that they didn't talk much, but all she knew was that the woman had asked to speak with Zhang by name. Zhang asked Joe to tell him Lin Ju's background and every detail she knew about her. Joe explained that this woman was around 40 years old and had owned a massive cosmetics company before the apocalypse. On top of that, she was currently in total control of Building 9, where only 10 people had died so far. Zhang was impressed when he heard this and said that for a woman to be able to control an entire building in an era where the strong prey on the weak meant she was a genuinely fascinating person. When Joe saw he was intrigued, she asked him if he was planning on teaming up with this woman. He told her he would first see what she had to offer in return. After that, Zhang checked his phone, saying he was going to reach out to her because he wanted to know what the other buildings in their area were thinking. That's when he saw two friend requests, one from Lin Ju and the other from the chief financial officer of all the warehouses in southern China, whom our hero had only met once. The moment Zhang accepted the requests, he received his first message from Lin Ju, introducing herself and saying she wanted to talk. Zhang was surprised because she had been sitting right by her phone, waiting for him to accept the request. He just told her to get straight to the point. She replied that it was too much information to type in a text and that it would be better to discuss it over a phone call. But Zhang told her he didn't have any time to waste and that she'd better wrap it up before he hung up and left. Lin Ju started to get annoyed by his tone, but told herself she had to put up with him. She'd heard all about how he had taken out about half the residents in his own building, Building 25, and that he had a sniper rifle and an electric snowmobile that were absolutely unbeatable. Shaking off her frustration, she told him she'd heard the rumors and knew he had the snowmobile, and that she wanted to team up. Zhang replied very coldly, asking what she was actually bringing to the table for this partnership. She explained that Building 9 was completely under her control, and that she could make all 76 people under her command follow Zhang's orders. This way, he wouldn't even need to go out and look for resources himself. They could take his snowmobile and bring the supplies straight to him. But of course, in return, he had to supply them with food and drinks on a regular basis. Zhang thought to himself, does she think I'm stupid? From his perspective, they were asking for his snowmobile and getting food and drinks handed to them as a bonus. But Lin Ju didn't back down. She kept the pressure on, warning him to be very careful because he was currently a target for thousands of people in the neighborhood. She pointed out that the only reason they hadn't attacked him yet was because they were doing the risk-to-reward calculations. Because of this, she argued that his best move was to partner up with Building 9 and promised she wouldn't make a move against him. Zhang didn't like the tone of her voice and asked if she was threatening him or if she planned to attack if he turned down the deal. She replied that she was sure he wouldn't turn her down since he didn't need any extra enemies. Even if he could take them on, he wouldn't be able to wipe all of them out. Zhang let out a laugh and told her it was the first time he'd seen someone beg with so much nerve. Still, he told her he would think about the offer and get back to her later. After hanging up, he started to get a little anxious, wondering if the entire neighborhood might actually team up against him and launch a massive assault. Even though he wasn't worried about fighting them off one group at a time, he knew that if they all joined forces, they might try to blow up or demolish the entire building all at once. But then he remembered that tearing down a building was next to impossible. The heavy machinery needed for that required a ton of fuel, and no one had any left. Still, he knew that taking out thousands of people would take a long time, and he didn't want the headache. His thoughts were interrupted by another message from the warehouse manager, Li Jin. Li Jin explained that he was now running Building 18, where only 5 elderly people had died so far. He managed to do this by collecting all the residents' resources right when the apocalypse hit and distributing them equally among everyone. He added that they were currently in desperate need of resources, and in exchange, he could provide Zhang with all the manpower he needed and help him manage relationships with the other buildings. Zhang couldn't help but smile, thinking that Li Jin's smooth talk actually fit his executive background perfectly. Zhang turned to Zhou and asked if she knew anything about Building 18. She told him the building's leader was very charismatic and that thanks to him, most of the residents there were still alive. Zhang smiled and said that charisma meant nothing in the apocalypse, only resources determined who survived until the end. He was telling her this while messaging Li Jin back to let him know he would respond to the offer later, since he found the other building leaders blowing up his phone with more friend requests. He decided not to waste his time on them, assuming their offers were all the same. He went back to ask Zhou for her advice, explaining that he had 2 choices, either make peace with all of them or wipe them all out. Even though he didn't want to waste his ammo and kill all those people, Zhou tried to. Our naive girl suggested they abandon the apartment and go live somewhere else if a real war broke out, but he thought to himself that her idea was way too stupid. There was no way he was going to abandon the fortress he'd built for himself and start all over again from square one. The next day we see him having Zhou cut up one of his bulletproof vests so she could make a pair of bulletproof pants out of it. After that, he sent a message in the building's group chat telling everyone that they were going to be attacked soon, because some people had seen him returning with the snowmobile and bringing back food. From then on, these people had been threatening to attack the building if he didn't hand over all the food and the snowmobile. Naturally, the building's group chat started blowing up with messages. Everyone was completely furious, but at the same time they were anxious because there were only about 40 of them, and it would be impossible to stand their ground against the residents of all the other buildings. Zhang replied, making it clear that he only had one snowmobile, and that if they took it away, he wouldn't be able to go out and get food for them anymore, meaning they would all starve anyway. By the end of his message, he noticed that the tension in the chat had faded, and everyone was ready to defend the building even if it cost them their lives. Right then, Zhang was surprised by a group invite on his WeChat. He was confused because he had blocked all strangers, so how could someone add him to another group? WeChat, by the way, is a messaging app similar to WhatsApp or Telegram. Then he realized he had been added by Lin Ju, and the group was called Neighborhood Leaders Summit. When he joined the group, he noticed most of the building leaders were in there, including Wang from the Rabid Wolves gang, even though our hero had wiped out most of his men. After that, Li Jin took charge and laid out 3 demands for Zhang. If Zhang didn't agree, he would become an enemy to the residents of all 29 other buildings. The demands were: first, provide them with enough resources to keep them alive. Second, and most importantly, let all of them take turns using his snowmobile. Third, split all the resources he had collected up to date. When Zhang saw this, he snapped, thinking he needed to find a way to take them all out at once. But once he calmed down, he realized that was impossible because one guy couldn't kill thousands of people. Then a brilliant idea hit him. He decided to try and take out the building leaders instead, since their numbers were relatively small. Sure enough, he agreed to meet them all in person for negotiations. He decided that once they were all gathered in one place, all he'd have to do was drop a bomb on them. If he took them all out, the residents wouldn't have any leaders, and they wouldn't be able to organize themselves to attack Building 25 all at once. At the same time, over in another part of the building, we see Uncle Lao distributing food to the residents, telling them it was all thanks to Zhang. Seconds later, Zhang appeared in front of everyone. They seized the opportunity to ask him if he was really planning on negotiating and not resorting to violence. Zhang replied that if the negotiations succeeded, they would all live safely, and even the food crisis would be solved thanks to the snowmobile, and people would stop eating each other. The residents were moved and started crying at his words, but he warned them before leaving not to let their guard down and to stay sharp. Zhang took the residents with him to use as human shields just in case, and they set off to meet the other building leaders. But as they approached the meeting spot, a massive group of people suddenly confronted them. Zhang snapped, realizing they were planning to double-cross him. Because of this, he called Uncle Lao and told him to get there quickly with the rest of the Building 25 residents, since he hadn't factored in the other leaders bringing all these numbers to the negotiations. Zhang then got down on the ground, ready to provide sniper support from a distance if a fight broke out. As you can see in the picture, Zhang is the guy far in the back, with his men right in front of him. As for the other building leaders and their crew, they make up that massive crowd up front. If we check in with Uncle Lao, we see him reassuring his team and telling them to calm down. He figures that if the building leaders actually wanted to attack, they would have done it already. But the blonde-haired guy was still anxious because their numbers were huge. He pointed out to Lao that even if each of them could take out 10 enemies on their own, it still wouldn't be enough. Lao explained that the building leaders only brought those people to put pressure on Zhang and force him to accept their terms. Besides, they wouldn't gain anything from wiping out Building 25 because Zhang holds all the resources. On the other side, the leaders of the 5 buildings and their men had arrived. Lin Ju was smiling, saying that while Zhang might be terrifying on his own, once he saw this massive crowd, he'd probably lose his cool. Sure enough, Wang started laughing too, saying that Zhang's men were probably peeing their pants at the sight of their sheer numbers. Wang even joked that even though Zhang wasn't there, he was probably the first guy changing his pants out of fear. But Lin Ju stepped in, cut them off, and told them to stop running their mouths and focus on the mission. Wang immediately got annoyed and demanded to meet Zhang, since they came all the way here just to see him. Uncle Lao stepped up and told Wang that Zhang was waiting for them upstairs and that they needed to come up. He asked them why only 5 leaders showed up out of the original 29. Li Jin replied that the rest of the leaders had agreed to let the 5 of them represent all of the buildings. Lao told them that if that was the case, only the 5 of them could go up to meet Zhang, but they would have to be searched for weapons first before getting inside. Lin Ju completely refused this, and Wang warned that they would take out anyone who tried to search them. Meanwhile, Zhang was watching everything go down from a distance and was absolutely boiling with rage. Because of this, he quickly contacted Uncle Lao and told him to pull back 20 meters with the residents. Uncle Lao told the leaders to hold on for a second while he contacted Zhang. To their complete shock, Lao and the Building 25 residents started backing away, and Lao gave Zhang the all-clear. Zhang was positioned right above them. Within seconds, he pulled a grenade and tossed it right toward the enemy. Because the residents of the other buildings were bunched up like idiots, the grenade landed right in the middle of a massive group of them and took out a large number. Tension and panic set in immediately as people started screaming that Zhang had explosives. But Uncle Lao stepped closer to them and let them hear Zhang's voice. Zhang warned them that he still had over 20 crates of grenades and was ready to use them right then and there. Wang immediately backed down, saying they only came to negotiate and that there was no need for all this hostility. Zhang replied, asking why they brought 1,000 people if they just wanted to talk. He added that the time was getting close to 2:30, meaning they only had 5 minutes left before the meeting was called off. Lin Ju and Li Jin stepped in quickly, begging him to wait, and asked which floor they needed to go to. Zhang told them he was waiting for them on the 13th floor and the clock was ticking. He was over the moon, noting that his strike had taken out at least 20 people. Even though he used a grenade to do it, he wasn't bothered at all since he had 20 more crates of them. Seconds later, the building leaders arrived, running up the stairs to make the deadline. Zhang asked them where the rest of the 29 building residents were. Li Jin replied that only the 5 of them represented all 29 buildings in these negotiations. Zhang felt a bit disappointed, as this meant. Realizing he couldn't just execute his original plan, Zhang understood that even if he killed these 5 leaders, the 24 other building leaders would make his life a living hell. The negotiations finally kicked off, with Li Jin explaining that they desperately needed food and drinks or else they would starve. He made it clear that they weren't targeting Zhang personally, they just wanted to survive. All they needed was for Zhang to accept the terms they had discussed in the group chat. Right then, Zhang reached into his storage and pulled out a pistol, handling it like a magic trick in a circus. The leaders completely freaked out and yelled at him to wait and ask what the heck he was doing, asking him to stay calm. Zhang simply replied that the gun had been bothering him in his pocket, so he took it out to get comfortable and told them there was nothing to worry about. Waving the pistol around, he explained that it was impossible to accept their terms since he didn't have nearly enough resources to feed thousands of people. He was also sure that these leaders had stockpiled food themselves, as it was impossible to have no food while expecting someone else to feed your people. Zhang laid down a new deal, telling them they could either take it or declare war on each other. Here is what he proposed. The deal: he would provide resources for only 10 people from each building daily, meaning he would be feeding a total of 300 people across the neighborhood. He couldn't handle anything beyond that. Lin Ju immediately tried to object, pointing out that this was too difficult because she had over 76 people to feed every day, including 20 former employees from her old company. Zhang cut her off and said that if that was the case, there was no deal between them. Then Huang chimed in, telling Lin Ju to speak only for herself, and turned to Zhang. He said that the proposed resource quota was too low. Wang also stepped in, arguing that since they represented all 29 buildings, if they agreed to such a small amount, the rest of the leaders would turn them into French fries. Zhang was surprised. He pointed out that he was offering to feed 300 people, so he didn't understand how they could still complain about the amount. Li Jin asked Zhang to give them time to think about the proposal and share his other ideas. Zhang stated that nothing comes for free and that it had to be a give and take. To survive as long as possible, they needed to start working toward self-sufficiency. He explained that the supplies left in local stores wouldn't last forever. Once they ran out, everyone would starve. The first step toward self-sufficiency, Zhang said, was to plant the wheat seeds he had. Huang got annoyed and asked how they were supposed to plant anything in the snow. Zhang replied that there were plenty of people in the neighborhood who could shovel the snow away to clear a patch of land. Residents could take turns clearing the snow so the crops could grow safely. Zhang added that he would monitor the planting process closely, and as the crops grew, he would provide them with rare luxury resources like cigarettes, alcohol, clothing, and medical supplies. As soon as Huang and Wang heard the word cigarettes, they begged Zhang for a smoke since they were going crazy without them. Our hero pulled a pack from his pocket, telling them to help themselves and not be shy. While they were smoking, Zhang knew this was his perfect opportunity and asked if they agreed to his terms. Li Jin tried to step in and give his opinion, but Wang cut him off and told Zhang that he and Huang were on board, provided they got 2 packs of cigarettes a day. Zhang agreed on the spot, but clarified that he would only give each of them 1 pack per day. When Li Jin saw that Zhang managed to buy them off with just a pack of cigarettes, he almost fell into a depression. Li Jin tried to argue that they couldn't make decisions this fast and had to consult the other building leaders first. But the newly crowned cigarette lovers told Li Jin that they had already agreed on behalf of all the leaders. This meant that all the building residents were forced to go along with it as well. Right then, Zhang looked out the window and noticed some strange movements. He saw the residents from the other buildings swarming toward Building 25 as if they were about to attack. Zhang snapped at the leaders and asked if they had ordered their men to attack during the negotiations. Wang replied that they were all at his mercy now, and that they would have to be complete idiots to try something like that since he would just take them out. Zhang told him that the logic held up, but that they owed him a logical explanation when they found out what triggered the attack. Li Jin quickly stepped in, pointing out that their men probably started attacking because they realized their leaders were taking too long upstairs, and they assumed something bad had happened to them. At that moment, Uncle Lao arrived with the rest of Zhang's crew. Our hero immediately ordered them to tie up all the leaders and prevent them from moving while he handled the attack outside. Without wasting any time, he lined up his sights on the head of the first guy, and the moment he was certain he wouldn't miss, he fired a bullet that blew his brains out in a brutal fashion. He then opened a barrage of gunfire on the rest of the attackers, just like he always does. This sent the remaining guys running in total panic and terror, but Zhang was annoyed and said he wasn't going to let them get away that easily. He kept shooting, picking them off like sitting ducks as they fled. Meanwhile, the captured building leaders were terrified, realizing Zhang might take them out next after finishing off their men. Within moments, Zhang was done hunting down a sufficient number of attackers and asked the leaders what they thought of his deal now. Of course, everyone agreed on the spot without a second thought, having realized they couldn't possibly mess with Zhang given his heavy firepower. Zhang told them they needed to start working from today, and that he would contact them tomorrow to pick up their first batch of supplies. Before he let them go, he warned them that he would be keeping a very close eye on them, and that if anyone tried to double-cross him, he would end them. The negotiations ended, and the building leaders headed down, completely depressed. Once they were gone, Zhang went back upstairs and reassured the residents of Building 25 about the latest developments. They started hyping him up, telling him his shooting skills were absolutely flawless. Zhang replied that it was just an average day's work for him, but told them they needed to focus now. He explained that he had agreed to supply the rest of the neighborhood with enough food for 300 people in exchange for them growing their own crops. This announcement took the residents by surprise. They started complaining that feeding 300 people was way too much and that they were going to starve to death because of it. Zhang fired back, explaining that he knew they were upset, but that if he didn't do this, he would be forced to go to war with the entire neighborhood, which consisted of thousands of people. He added that even though he had an impenetrable fortress, he only agreed to give away the food to protect the residents of Building 25. As the leader of the building, he would never let his people starve. At that point, the residents were deeply moved. They told him they appreciated the immense pressure he was under and were grateful that he was looking out for them. Once they stopped drumming and walked away, Zhang noticed Uncle Lao giving him a strange look and asked him about it. Lao admitted that he never expected Zhang to accept the negotiations so easily. Zhang clarified that this cooperation was only temporary. He had actually intended to gather all the building leaders in one spot and blow them all up, but unfortunately he had to go with Plan B when he saw that only 5 leaders had shown up. Under this new plan, he decided to give them food for only 10 people per building. He knew this would cause internal conflict and chaos inside every single building because of the severe food shortage. When that happened, the residents of each building would start taking each other out, and Zhang wouldn't even have to lift a finger. Lao was completely blown away, telling him it was a brilliant plan, and admitting that even as an ex-army officer, he wouldn't have and come up with a plan like that. Zhang replied that he wasn't a genius at all, but that he was just wielding the power of resources. Aside from that, the people in the opposing buildings were just ordinary folks with crude, basic weapons. If he got taken down by weaklings like them, how was he going to handle the genuinely dangerous people who had weapons just like his? He added that he knew there were clever people among the building leaders, and he was sure that Lin Ju and Lin Jin knew exactly what his plan was about. But of course, they had no choice but to agree to his deal after seeing his heavy firepower. This was in stark contrast to the corrupt idiots Wang and H. Wang, who jumped to accept the deal the second they saw something that benefited them personally, without giving a second thought to their own people. Lao chuckled but asked with a sense of wonder about the real reason behind making them plant wheat in this freezing weather. Zhang explained that he was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. On one hand, it would keep them exhausted from all the physical labor, leaving no energy to rebel. On the other hand, they would actually have a backup food supply in case the cold weather dragged on. Lao told him that his tactics were brilliant, and that because of this, he was ready to follow him as his leader for the rest of his life. Zhang replied that if Lao truly considered him the building's leader, he shouldn't let a single soul know about this conversation. Zhang walked away, reminding himself that he didn't just have to worry about the residents of other buildings. He still had potential backstabbers right inside his own building that he needed to look out for. When Zhang returned home, he found Zhou exercising to pass the time. She asked him how the negotiations went, but he told her to leave all that to him, assuring her that he would never let her down and that she'd live the rest of her life in comfort. The next morning, we see people from different buildings gathered together, looking cheerful and saying they hadn't seen such a peaceful gathering since the world was still normal. While they were working under the supervision of the 2 cigarette-loving fools, Zhang geared up to go look for resources because the pressure was on. The cigarette lovers cheered for him when they saw him, offering to tag along to help carry the supplies. Zhang told them he was taking his snowmobile and wouldn't need any help, as he could load all the supplies directly onto it. He then turned to the crowd of building residents, telling them not to slack off, as he would inspect their work personally upon his return, and no one would get their share unless the results were up to his standards. As Zhang left, Wang was completely baffled by the mystery of the snowmobile, wondering how Zhang hid the vehicle since he'd searched everywhere and found nothing. Time passed and Zhang arrived at a veterinary clinic. Inside, he found a large case filled with medical supplies, including a potent, colorless, and odorless rat poison. Zhang noted that this poison would be impossible to detect if mixed into food. Even though it was incredibly lethal, it didn't need to be used on regular residents. But as he looked at the 300 people he had agreed to feed, he decided he could use a modified approach to keep them weak by causing internal organ failure, ensuring they'd be completely dependent on him, since there was no medical treatment available for it in this condition. He noted that he would have to mix it into the food right before handing it out, as it takes about 15 minutes to take effect. After that, Zhang headed to another location near the clinic and managed to salvage 3 massive bags full of resources. When he returned with all the supplies, his followers were in total shock, asking how he managed to find so much in one trip. Zhang replied that he had to take major risks and travel far into the freezing weather specifically to keep up his end of the bargain with the building leaders. While the residents were hyping him up and acknowledging the danger he'd faced, Zhang pulled out his earpiece, contacted the other leaders, and told them to send their men to pick up the supplies. Moments later, their men arrived at the Building 25 collection point, and when they saw the piles of food, that there were only 29 people, Zhang instantly realized that the other buildings were scared of him, since each leader had only sent one of his guys. Shaking off his thoughts, he announced that he would start distributing the resources to them in order, from Building 1 to Building 30. Once the distribution was finally done, he gave a speech to the whole crowd. He told them that he knew there was tension between the different buildings, but that he would work on it as fast as possible. Even though he was forced to use weapons right now to ensure the safety of his own building's residents, he hoped that everyone could resolve their future conflicts without any violence. After his hype speech, he told everyone to head home because he wanted to get some sleep. He went up to his apartment and asked Joe to get him some food while he took a shower. Right then, he said that his ultimate goal was to take out every single resident in the neighborhood. Only when that happened would he be able to live his life without a headache. If we check in with the other buildings, we see the representative from Building 21 arriving at the leader's spot. The second Wang saw him, he rushed over, took the supplies, and pulled out his precious pack of cigarettes, which he was dying for. Since his entire crew were cigarette lovers, they wanted a piece of it, staring him down and telling him that he had to share and couldn't just keep them all for himself. Wang had to hand some over when he realized they might stage a coup and overthrow him. But he was super annoyed to find that they took almost everything, leaving him with only a single cigarette. Still, he kept his cool and started distributing the food to get through the day. To be safe, he made sure the others ate first to check for any poison. When they ate and nothing happened, he relaxed right away and thought, this is the life. He was getting food and cigarettes handed to him on a silver platter, while his crew and the rest of the people were out working in the freezing cold all day, farming. Things stayed that way for a bit, and the people were initially happy since the leaders promised they'd get food as long as they worked. But by the second day, with less food going around and some people getting nothing at all, shouting matches broke out as people fought over who would get the rations. Despite this, they kept working every day, even though they never knew when they'd get to eat. Until one day, right after Zhang finished distributing the day's share, the noise from the neighboring buildings grew louder. The conflicts escalated to the point where they were throwing each other off the buildings. The fighting continued this way, and the ones who suffered the most were the building leaders, many of whom were killed by their own residents because they were distributing the food unfairly and giving priority to themselves and their inner circles. On the morning of the third day, Zhang came down from his apartment with the residents of Building 25. He looked at the bodies of the people who had died fighting over resources and thought to himself that some had survived the fall from the buildings only to freeze to death. Seeing the blood splattered all across the buildings, he was certain that the previous day's fighting had been absolutely brutal. Right then, Lao interrupted his thoughts, asking him if he was going to make the people work again today. Zhang replied that they had to work every single day without exception. He wasn't going to go out of his way to get them food for free. He pointed at one of the dead bodies and told the crowd that this would be the fate of anyone who slacked off. Naturally, the residents ran off in terror, yelling that they would get back to work immediately. When they were gone, Lao started saying that not a single person from the other buildings came down to work today, and asked Zhang if he wanted him to notify them. Zhang replied that those people were too busy right now and were probably busy slaughtering each other. Since such a large number of the neighborhood residents had died in a single day, Zhang figured all they had to do now was wait for the survivors to wipe each other out. To put even more pressure on them, he pulled out his phone, sent a message to the leaders' group chat, and told them that if the people didn't come down to work, no one would get food, not even the cigarettes. Sure enough, the next day, Zhang saw the residents of the other buildings working again once they realized they would starve to death if they didn't. However, Zhang noticed that the number of workers was only about 2/3 of the original group, and was certain that the rest had died. Uncle Lao was baffled and asked Zhang what would make all these people work even though they knew they might not get any food at all in the end. Zhang replied that they were working during the day to get a fraction of resources, and at night they were killing each other so their numbers would drop enough for everyone to get fed. Aside from that, they were forced to work because it was their last lifeline. Right as he was about to leave, he was surprised to hear Linju calling out to him, saying she wanted to start new negotiations and discuss things right away. Zhang looked at her confused and asked, "What do you want, lady?" She began by saying that if the situation kept going like this, most of the neighborhood's residents would die. Therefore, if he agreed to supply them with just a little more resources, she was willing to help him bring all the neighborhood residents under his control. She added that she would help him expand and build his own kingdom in the apocalypse. Of course, Zhang saw right through her game. He knew her playbook by heart, so he grabbed her by the shoulder and said, "Stop right there, please. I know all the tricks and games people like you use to manipulate people's minds." He added that he was sure she had used this exact method on plenty of people before him, and that they had all ended up dead. He said that if he agreed to her offer, he'd be a fool because he would end up just like them. Zhang pushed her to the ground and told her he didn't give a single cent whether they lived or went to hell. As he walked away, Lin Ju tried to call out to him and tell him to wait, but he didn't give her the time of day. He headed over to Li Jin and his crew, who were working hard. That was when a huge shock hit him. He couldn't believe his eyes when he realized that all the residents in Li Jin's building were still alive. Li Jin noticed Zhang standing nearby and asked him the reason for his visit. Zhang replied with a question, wanting to know how all his men were still alive, even though the residents of the other buildings were slaughtering each other every day. Li Jin answered that he had laid down the results of the negotiations to everyone from the very beginning. Since then, they had been distributing the meager 6-person ration among everyone equally. Zhang let out a laugh and told him that his strategy wouldn't work in the long run. The time would come when people would turn on him from extreme hunger. When Zhang started to leave just as expected, Li Jin called out and asked him to help his followers. Zhang flatly refused, adding that he had expected him to be a bit smarter in managing his building. Li Jin began to blame himself, admitting that he knew Zhang was right, but that he just couldn't abandon his humanity and let the people relying on him die. When Zhang walked away, he ran right into the cigarette lovers, who asked him whether he had collected the day's resources yet. Zhang told them he was just about to head out and would bring them the cigarettes they loved. Naturally, they were over the moon and told Zhang that from this day forward they were his servants, and if he needed anything in the future, all he had to do was give the word and they wouldn't hesitate. Zhang told them that their words and thanks meant absolutely nothing to him, as he considered them like his own brothers. Zhang went and collected the day's resources and returned to distribute them to everyone. Right then, he noticed that some of the other building leaders had found out about the cigarette situation. They were whining and complaining, saying it was unfair to favor one group over another. Zhang put on his nice guy persona and promised to sort everything out starting the next day. But this move made Zhang's right-hand man and his crew really mad, as they felt those people were just taking advantage of Zhang's kindness. Zhang reassured them not to worry about it, telling them that dealing with the cigarettes was no big deal. But as he walked away, they were completely furious and started saying that Zhang was treating those outsiders better than he was treating them. If we check in with our hero, we see him thinking to himself that he couldn't keep going like this. He knew full well that more than half the neighborhood residents were dead, and that the ones still alive definitely wouldn't need to kill each other anymore since they had enough resources to last. Because of this, he decided to execute his plan and put the poison in the food, because he was sick of being obligated to feed 300 people every day. The next day, we see him gathering a massive amount of resources and putting on a gas mask so he wouldn't accidentally inhale the rat poison. On top of that, he collected some rare supplies and made sure to bring alcohol for everyone so they could enjoy themselves before they died. When he finished spiking the food with poison, he felt a bit uneasy because the process had been way too easy. He started getting paranoid, wondering if the leaders had come up with a plan together and were planning to double-cross him. These thoughts started giving him severe anxiety, but he managed to shake it off by reassuring himself that no one could hurt him as long as he had his fortress and his weapons. When he returned and got ready to distribute the food, he met up with Uncle Lao and the rest of his crew, who were guarding him while he handed out the supplies. Seconds later, the residents of the other buildings came down. Zhang put on his nice guy persona and welcomed them, knowing full well that today would be the last day he'd ever see them like this, so he didn't mind being nice to them one last time. But when it was the turn of Building 21, Wang's building, we see one of his men standing right behind our hero with a look of pure hatred and malice. Without any warning, the guy pulled a gun from his pocket and fired a hail of bullets directly at Zhang. Right then, Uncle Lao jumped in front of him and used his own body to shield Zhang from the barrage. Lao collapsed right into our hero's arms. Zhang was in a state of panic, not knowing what to do. Then Zhang's right-hand man and his crew decided to betray him and tried to take him out. But what they didn't know was that Zhang had already completely lost his cool. He pulled out his machine gun and said that starting today, he wouldn't be giving anyone a second chance. Within seconds, he opened fire on the whole crowd with pinpoint accuracy, without stopping. We see them dropping dead one after the other. Everyone else started running in total panic, yelling that they hadn't expected him to have a machine gun on top of everything else. But Zhang didn't stop shooting, gunning down everyone he could reach. Even when his machine gun ran out of ammo, he pulled out 2 pistols and said that today he was going to avenge Uncle Lao and wipe them all out. When the cigarette lovers saw that his weapons never ran out, they tried to beg him to spare them, but Zhang was in a state of blind rage and took them out without a second thought. He then turned to Lin Ju, who tried to explain that she had nothing to do with it. While she was begging for her life so she could go back to the daughter waiting for her at home, Zhang cut her off with a bullet right between the eyes. He said that he wasn't foolish enough to let her escape and promised himself that from now on, he wouldn't give anyone a second chance. Seconds later, he began his journey back to his building, his heart heavy with grief. But right then, a joyful surprise awaited him as he heard the voice of Zhang. Ran over to him as fast as he could and tried to talk and communicate with him, but there was no response. He quickly pulled out his phone and contacted Zhou to help him with first aid. She told him to use a specific injection as soon as possible until she could get there. Once Zhang did that, he called on 2 residents from his building who had been hiding and had them carry Uncle Lao. He ordered them to take him to his apartment as fast as possible. On their way there, the treacherous Qi saw him. She was worried and started squeezing out some crocodile tears, asking Zhang about her husband's health. Our hero reassured her, promising that he and Zhou would do everything they could to save him. Qi used this moment to play the victim, telling Zhang she would end her own life if Lao died, but she wanted him to take her daughter in and raise her. Zhang was caught off guard and told her not to jinx it, reminding her that Lao was still alive. Qi kept up the crying act and said she would love Lao for the rest of his life. When they got to Zhang's apartment, Zhang told her to go to her own place so she wouldn't get in the way of Lao's treatment. But she wouldn't let go, insisting that Lao would need someone to look after him, and that she was the closest person to him and the best one for the job. Since Zhang wanted Uncle Lao to be comfortable and recover quickly, he finally let the treacherous Qi and her daughter into his apartment, even though he was a bit hesitant. As soon as she stepped inside, she started crying, saying she hadn't been in a warm place like this in months. She started getting carried away, forgetting about Lao, and went straight into the kitchen without warning, helping herself to Zhang's warm water. When the crybaby finished drinking, she turned to Zhang and asked if he had any powdered milk for her baby girl. That was when Zhang reached his breaking point and told her to push her luck if she dared. She replied that she wasn't being pushy, just shameless, and that she only wanted powdered milk for the baby because Lao would be happy about it. Zhang snapped, warning her that if she said one more word, he would throw her out, and made it clear that she was only there to take care of Lao and nothing else. Zhang quickly pulled a medical bed out of his storage dimension for Lao. Qi saw him do this and asked him how he pulled off that magic trick. Zhang ignored her and told Zhou to ask for whatever medical supplies she needed, and he would provide them. A few seconds later, Zhou finally examined Uncle Lao's wounds and told the anxious Zhang that his condition was pretty critical, but that she could treat him as long as the bullets hadn't hit any internal organs. While Zhang was completely stressed out, Qi started crying, saying, "What are we going to do without you, Lao, my master?" This made Zhang lose his temper and warn her that if she made Lao's condition worse with her whining, he would throw both her and her daughter off the balcony for getting on his nerves. She used the opportunity to say she would go wait outside so she wouldn't bother them. In reality, she was thinking to herself that she needed to hurry up and enjoy the food and hot water before Lao died and Zhang kicked her out. Zhang told her that if he caught her leaving Lao's room without his permission, he'd turn her into French fries and told her to keep quiet. To avoid getting any more annoyed, he told her he was heading out now, but would get the full report from Zhou when he got back. When he went downstairs, he met the rest of the building's residents. They started apologizing to him, pledging their loyalty and swearing they had no idea about the betrayal that had just taken place. Zhang replied that the building leader's treachery had resulted in Uncle Lao getting hurt. Because of this, if they wanted to prove their loyalty, they would have to help him get his revenge by joining him in a counterattack. Across all the buildings that took part in the betrayal, naturally, the residents started getting worried, asking how they were supposed to pull that off with their small numbers, and began wondering if our badass Zhang still had a few tricks up his sleeve that he hadn't used yet. Right then, Zhang stepped in and told them he had enough fuel to burn the buildings down, and that he wouldn't need anything from them except to take out anyone who managed to escape. Since the only exit for these people would be jumping from the balconies, all the residents of Building 25 had to do was stand below and finish off anyone who jumped. Within moments they arrived in front of Building 21, the first target, and Zhang ordered his crew to surround it from all sides. When the residents of that building saw our hero, they were terrified. Ever since they found out about his heavy firepower, they had been completely terrified of him. But the remaining members of Wang's gang insisted they weren't scared at all, claiming they could just take Zhang out while he was walking up the stairs. If we check back in with Zhang, we see him heading toward one of the windows on the ground floor of the building and climbing inside. When he didn't find anyone on that floor, he relaxed and said he could get right to work without any distractions. He quickly pulled out some wood and gasoline to build a fire big enough to engulf the entire building. While he was setting Building 21 on fire, one of the residents was trembling in fear, having no idea what Zhang was doing down below. Our hero had laid out a long trail of gasoline so he could light it and escape without getting hurt. He tossed his lighter onto the gas, muttering that he was just trying to warm up the residents since it was freezing outside. When he stepped out of the building, everyone noticed the fire catching on quickly. Zhang told them to get ready because people would start jumping out any second. As expected, the flames grew intense, and the residents started throwing themselves from the upper floors when they realized there was no other escape from the fire. Zhang's followers were completely shocked by this brutal method of execution. Meanwhile, the rest of the residents threw themselves from the balconies just like the others. That's when Zhang's men stepped in, without hesitating for a single second, and took out anyone who survived the fall. If we look back at Zhang, we see him standing back and admiring the fire, calling it a work of art. Meanwhile, the residents of Building 26 were watching Building 21 burn. One of them said that their turn would definitely come soon because of their leader's betrayal. His friend replied that they had nothing to do with the betrayal, and that all the trouble was caused by the building leaders alone. But their conversation was cut short by Zhang's voice calling out, "Let's move to the next building, boys." The residents panicked and tried to explain that the attack was the cigarette lover's fault, and that if Zhang took them out, he'd be killing innocent people. "Let's move to the next building, boys." The residents panicked and tried to explain that the attack was the cigarette lover's fault, and that if Zhang took them out, he'd be killing innocent people. Zhang let out a laugh and told them that not a single one of them was innocent, and that every person in the building had taken out at least 5 others. He added that he didn't care whether they were good or bad, viewing them as nothing more than walking dead. Sure enough, Zhang kept moving from building to building, burning them down and wiping out their residents completely. News began to spread that he had taken care of the 5 buildings whose leaders had participated in the assassination attempt. At that point, Zhang grabbed a megaphone to make an important announcement, mentioning that he would spare the remaining buildings for now. Speaking into the megaphone, he declared at the top of his lungs that he would never harm innocent people, and that he had taken his revenge on the ones who tried to take him out. Naturally, this brought immense relief to the residents of the other buildings. They began to convince themselves that Zhang was actually a good guy, and that he'd only been forced to eliminate the residents of the 5 treacherous buildings. He acted that way simply because he was afraid they might try to take him out later. As our hero walked away, we see 2 of his men warming themselves by the fire, tossing human bodies into it and using them as fuel. Meanwhile, near Building 25, Zhang is watching the traitors and muttering that he can't understand why they betrayed him, especially since he had been treating them better than anyone else. That prompted him to search their phones, hoping to find something useful. The moment he opened their latest messages, it all made sense. He realized what was going on, though he didn't mention what it actually was. After that, Zhang went up to his apartment to check on Uncle Lao. He was thrilled to find that Lao's condition had finally stabilized. He thanked Zhou and told her that he didn't know how he would have saved Lao without her. Right then, the treacherous Qi jumped into the conversation as usual, telling Zhang that she and her daughter needed to eat since they hadn't eaten all day. To her surprise, Zhang pulled out a pack of instant noodles from his storage and tossed it on the floor. But right as he was about to leave, she called out to him and asked if there was anything else to eat, pointing out that she had seen eggs in the kitchen and chicken bones in the trash. That was when Zhang reached his breaking point and snapped that there was no food left except the instant noodles. Qi finally fell silent. Zhang went with Zhou to their room. He asked Zhou about Lao's condition and how much time he would need to recover. Zhou replied that his condition had been critical and that it should have been impossible to treat him. But suddenly, strange changes were taking place in his body. He was getting much stronger than before, and the wounds were closing and healing at a bizarre speed. Zhang couldn't believe his ears, but he understood the reason perfectly. Back when the apocalypse hit, due to the intense gamma radiation that spread across the planet, Zhang had unlocked his storage dimension. Since Uncle Lao now had a superpower of his own, it meant that there were likely others out there with different abilities just like Zhang's storage. But what could be the reason why Uncle Lao acquired a superpower while others didn't? That was the question Zhang asked himself. That was when he realized that these abilities only activate when a person is on the verge of death. That was the only thing the 2 of them had in common, with the only difference being that Zhang had come back from the dead, while Lao was saved by our hero just before he died. Once Zhang finished his analysis, he told Zhou to give Lao a dose of sedatives every day until he said otherwise. Zhou, surprised, asked if it had anything to do with the superpower. Zhang replied that he was sure Lao had gained a superpower, but he was afraid Lao might turn into the Incredible Hulk and smash up the apartment. After Zhou promised to do as he asked, he got ready to leave. But she called out and asked him if he was really going to let Qi look after Lao. Zhang replied that Qi was an annoying woman, but she had to take care of Lao because she knew full well that if anything happened to him, she would die too. Zhang went out and called for Qi, telling her she could live in Lao's room as long as she took care of him and fed him instant noodles. After that, Zhang decided to go after the mastermind behind the whole betrayal. He went down a few floors in the same building, armed with his riot shield and pistol, ready for action. Without wasting any time, he fired at the door lock, and within seconds, he burst into the room in a fit of rage. Right then, to his surprise, Yu rushed at him with a knife, trying to take him out. But Zhang was ready for her and blocked the attack with his shield. From the sheer impact, she dropped the knife and fell to the floor. That's when Zhang noticed that she had managed to survive all this time by feeding on her friend. Could easily betray him as well. And Yu started shouting, saying that she thought he was going to die, and that she had no idea all the people she had sent could fail in taking out just one guy. Zhang replied that he already knew she was the one behind the betrayal of the building leaders and his own men, which was exactly why he came to take her out. With her usual audacity, she told him she wouldn't have done it if he hadn't replaced her with a low-class woman like Zhou. But Zhang made it clear that he didn't come to chat, he came to kill her. Right then, he broke her leg with his baton and dragged her by her hair toward the window amidst her screams and desperate pleas to be spared. Zhang ignored her screams, lifted her up by the hair, and told her that she brought this on herself. He then let her fall from the window while she was screaming, commenting that her screaming was like music to his ears. Even though Zhang had officially finished off Yu for good, he felt that this death was way too easy for her after all the disasters she had caused. When he went back up to his apartment, he saw that Zhou had already started giving Uncle Lao his sedatives. Furthermore, Qi asked Zhang to go downstairs and get the charger and baby diapers from her apartment, because Zhang knew that a patient could hear even while in a coma, and to avoid having a negative impact on Lao's condition, he played it cool and told her that he would take care of some important things first and then get her what she needed. But as he left the room, he said to himself that he knew full well she was just afraid to go down and get her stuff herself, because she knew that if she left, he wouldn't let her back into his apartment. After Zhang found the names of all the building leaders involved in the betrayal on the traitors' phones, he went down to finish burning down the rest of the buildings to eliminate any remaining threats in the neighborhood. While he was enjoying the sight of the fire, his thoughts were interrupted by Xiao's voice as he approached and called out to him. Moments later, Xiao started cheering up and told Zhang that he had some major, mind-blowing news for him. Our hero was confused by this and said that he was almost done taking out everyone in the neighborhood, so what could possibly be that important? Then Xiao started asking him if he had heard about the shelter owned by Wang Ximing, the son of the richest man in the city, whose father had built an entire village-sized compound as a shelter when the apocalypse hit. When Zhang asked him if he knew where the bunker was, Xiao replied that they needed to go somewhere quieter so they could talk without anyone overhearing. When they reached a quiet spot, Xiao started telling him everything he knew. He explained that the bunker was located in Yanqi City and had cost around $250 million to build. Xiao made it clear that he was only sharing this info because he needed Zhang's help to break into the bunker and take it over. Zhang let out a laugh, telling Xiao that he wasn't stupid enough to fall for this story. If there was a place that incredible, he surely wouldn't have told Zhang about it. Xiao answered that the security there was incredibly high, which was why he wouldn't dare pull off an operation like this on his own. On top of that, he revealed that Ximing had heard about Zhang a while ago and contacted Xiao, asking for help in taking Zhang down because he wanted Zhang's snowmobile. At that point, Zhang completely lost his temper, unable to hold back his anger, and told him that he was clearly lying to try and convince him to attack Ximing. That made him draw his pistol and tell Xiao that he was starting to suspect this was a setup to walk him straight into a trap, where they would finish him off and take his snowmobile and all his gear. Xiao quickly began to beg him not to jump to conclusions and to trust him just this once, but Zhang fired a bullet right next to him to scare him, forcing him to drop to the floor in pure terror. Xiao started speaking with a shaking voice, swearing that he would never lie about something like that. Zhang asked him for proof that his words were true and that he wasn't setting a trap for him, alongside Ximing. That's when Xiao started to explain that he believed his own chances of survival were much higher with Zhang than with Ximing, who he had bullied Xiao his entire life, and at one point, he even took his girlfriend away right in front of his eyes without Xiao being able to object. Since then, Xiao had become the laughingstock of all the wealthy elites in Tianhai City, and he swore that he would get his revenge on Ximing at the first chance he got. At that point, Zhang started to be somewhat convinced, but asked him what he could bring to the table if they teamed up. Xiao replied that he could easily act like he was still working for Ximing, which would make it easy for him to open the shelter's doors, allowing Zhang to take him out. Zhang then asked about the type of security used in the bunker, the number of guards, and the weapons they had. Xiao refused to tell him anything until they agreed to an alliance, promising that he would provide him with a steady supply of resources in the future. Right then, our hero drew his pistol and threatened to take him out if he didn't speak. But Xiao told him that he wouldn't open his mouth, even if it cost him his life, because he knew very well that Zhang would end him the moment he got the information anyway. Zhang lowered his gun, acknowledging that Xiao was making sense. However, before he agreed to the alliance, he laid out 3 conditions. First, tell him everything about the shelter, from the security systems to the number of guards and weapons. Second, help him take out a specific target to prove his loyalty. Third, Zhang handed him a mysterious black bag, telling him that the final condition would be revealed once they got to the destination. Looking at the black bag, Xiao commented that it looked exactly like the bags used by assassins and detectives. Zhang then told him a shocking truth. He had to confess that he was actually a professional assassin. Xiao bought the story on the spot, especially after having seen Zhang's advanced level of marksmanship and sniping skills firsthand. Just as Xiao was getting excited, thinking that teaming up with Zhang was the best decision he'd ever made, Zhang pulled out a syringe and told him that he'd always used it to extract information from prisoners. Xiao started screaming, asking what the heck he was doing. Zhang replied that it was a toxin used on prisoners and that its effect would kick in after exactly 1 week, killing anyone injected with it unless they got the antidote. Zhang quickly tied Xiao up, injected him with the substance, and told him that they were now in the same boat since he was the only one holding the antidote. Once he let Xiao go, Zhang told him that the remaining step was the assassination task, and that he would send him the details shortly. Xiao replied that he would wait for the message and would contact Ximing in the meantime to get the plan in motion. After Xiao left, Zhang couldn't help but laugh, thinking about how easily Xiao had fallen for the trick. That syringe contained nothing but regular, harmless saline, not poison or anything lethal. However, Zhang knew it would cause mild, flu-like symptoms that mimicked the onset of a toxin, and that Xiao would never know the truth. Because of this, Zhang felt completely reassured that Xiao wouldn't dare betray him as long as he believed the poisoning bluff. Zhang returned to his apartment and was pleasantly surprised to find that Uncle Lao had finally woken up. Zhang went over to greet him and asked how he was feeling. Lao replied that he was doing well, and that if it weren't for Zhang and Zhou, he would be dead. Qi then chimed in, thanking Zhang and saying that their 3-person family would remain grateful to him for the rest of their lives. To her surprise, Zhang replied that he had decided to look after her and her daughter for the rest of his life. Right then, Qi's eyes lit up like a sniper's. She told him that a real man never goes back on his word. Once Zhang made it clear that he always keeps his promises, she left the little girl with him, saying she was going down to her apartment to grab her phone charger herself. But as she walked out the door, she thought to herself that she didn't really trust his word, though as long as he had her daughter, she'd be safe. Zhang pulled out his phone and sent a message to Xiao telling him that the person he was going to take out was Qi, and that she was currently heading down to her apartment to get some stuff. Zhang thought about how he had wanted to solve the Qi and daughter problem once and for all, but he just couldn't bring himself to finish off a little girl. Still, he decided that as soon as he had the chance, he'd find someone to adopt her. Meanwhile, Qi was standing outside her apartment, shivering from the cold, imagining herself sitting by the heater inside Zhang's apartment. But the moment she opened her door to grab her things, she was shocked to find Xiao standing there, knife in hand, ready to take her out. Before she could even process what was happening or figure out what Xiao was doing in her apartment, he plunged the knife deep into her chest to end her life once and for all. Coldly, he told her that she had brought this on herself with her actions. He kept stabbing her repeatedly to make sure the job was done, right before messaging Zhang to let him know the mission was accomplished and to ask for some supplies. Zhang didn't waste any time. He went back to Uncle Lao and told him that he had decided to let him, Qi, and her daughter live in his apartment. Lao was surprised and said that he didn't want to be a burden or have Zhang waste his resources any faster. But Zhang cut him off, saying, "The decision is made, Lao," and told him all he had to do was rest, clear his mind, and not worry about a thing until he recovered. Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by the little girl bursting into tears. Zhang paced around the room with her, trying to quiet her down, but all his efforts failed. He quickly ran over, handed the baby to Zhou, and told her to figure out how to keep her quiet. Even though Zhou tried to remind him that she had never raised kids before, Zhang brushed it off, handed her some diapers, and walked out. He went back to Uncle Lao and asked if he felt any physical changes in his body. Lao replied that he simply felt completely unable to use any power and that the area around his wound was itching intensely. Lao then asked Zhang to check on Qi because she was taking a while. Zhang called Zhou to keep an eye on Lao and told her he was going down to look for Qi and would be right back. Before heading out, he geared up completely, putting on his protective gear as if he were going into battle. He messaged the building residents group chat, telling them to gather in apartment 1301 so he could distribute the resources. He also sent a message to Xiao, telling him not to attend the meeting unless he wanted to end up dead. Meanwhile, people were gathering in apartment 1301, saying that thanks to Zhang, they had finally taken control of all the neighborhood buildings and would be getting all the resources. But little did they know, Zhang was already standing outside the apartment, laughing at their chatter and thinking to himself that they were about to meet their end. In a split second, he pulled grenades from his pocket and tossed them straight into the room where the residents were gathered. Even though the residents saw the explosives coming, they didn't have enough time to react. The grenades went off, wiping out the vast majority of them and leaving others severely wounded. Once the smoke cleared, Zhang walked in to make sure everyone was dead, but he found one survivor, barely clinging to life, who asked him why he killed them after they had helped him all this time. Zhang replied that he never needed them in the first place, and that they should actually be thanking him for letting them live this long. Zhang then finished off the final survivor. After that, Zhang walked away from the scene, feeling overjoyed. He had finally gotten his revenge and wiped out everyone who had a part in his death in his past life. Now, he could finally live peacefully in his neighborhood without any anxiety or stress. When he returned to his home, Zhang made a sad face and told Lao that he had searched everywhere for Kai, but unfortunately, found out she was dead. He looked deeper into the matter and discovered that the building's residents were trying to betray him, which is why they targeted Kai since she belonged to him. Lao burst into tears out of pure grief, blaming himself and saying that all of this happened because he was weak and couldn't protect her. He squeezed his hand so hard in the hospital bed that he nearly broke it. Zhang stepped in to calm him down, making sure he didn't snap or do anything crazy. He told him it was their fault because the neighbors were just after his resources. Zhang thought to himself that he was now absolutely sure Lao had gained superhuman physical abilities. Zhang continued talking to Lao, telling him not to worry about anything from now on because he took care of all the traitors in the building and got revenge for Kai. Lao immediately believed him, saying that they all deserved to die. With this, Zhang killed 2 birds with 1 stone. He got rid of the neighbors and Kai, while making Lao think Zhang was the victim in the situation. A few moments later, Zhou arrived. She was struggling to calm the baby down, no matter what she tried, and told Zhang that the baby started crying again after quieting down the first time and just wouldn't stop. Zhang replied that the baby must be hungry and pointed to a can to feed her. Zhou explained that this wouldn't work because the baby's mother wasn't pregnant and couldn't produce milk. Zhang said he didn't know that and joked that they looked like a total failure of a family. Because of that, he decided he would find her a family that actually knew how to take care of a baby. He added that he was going to find a good family right now, offering to give them enough resources for both them and the baby if they agreed to take her. Zhang went downstairs, taking the baby and his gun with him. He started firing shots into the air and calling out to Jin, telling him to come down immediately. Without wasting any time, Jin came down and asked what Zhang wanted. Surprised, Zhang asked, "How did you come down so fast, knowing I could kill you?" Jin replied that he knew Zhang could, but even if he hid, Zhang could just burn the building down just like he did with the others. Besides, seeing him hold a baby put Jin at ease, because he was sure Zhang wouldn't kill anyone while holding a child. Zhang admitted that Jin was right and that it was exactly what you'd expect from a smart guy like him. Zhang explained that he just came by to drop off the baby and promised in return that he'd never mess with his building, no matter what happened. Zhang also brought out a bag containing food, diapers, and baby formula, assuring Jin that he would keep providing resources for both of them regularly. He warned Jin that he'd drop by to check on them from time to time, and if anything happened to the baby, the whole building would pay the price. Jin promised to take great care of the baby, taking her in the bag and then returned to Zhang. Zhang asked Jin how many people currently lived in his building. Jin answered 67, including himself. Zhang was surprised, saying that was too many people and they wouldn't be able to survive, especially since Zhang wouldn't be giving food to anyone else from now on besides Jin and the baby. Jin replied that they would find a way to survive together or die together. Zhang suggested a simple solution to their food problem for the next few months, pointing to the burned-out buildings and saying they could use the bodies as food for months. However, Jin completely rejected the idea, saying there was no way they would ever do that. Despite life getting harder day by day, they would rather die with their dignity and humanity intact than live like monsters. Zhang was impressed by Jin's words, saying he never expected anyone to keep their humanity after going through such hardships. This pulled him out of his thoughts, and he told Jin that he really admired his character and the way he thought. Jin thanked him but replied that honestly he admired Zhang even more because he saw him as a strong, capable guy who provided resources and protection for everyone around him. This was in contrast to Jin himself, who felt he had failed in his role as the leader of the building. With a serious look on his face, Jin said he wanted to ask Zhang a favor, but Zhang told him not to bother because he already knew what he wanted. Jin asked anyway if Zhang could provide them with at least a quarter of the resources he used to give them every day. Zhang refused to listen to any of it and started walking toward his home. While walking, he explained to Jin that he was just a weak human and couldn't save all these people. Even if he kept providing resources constantly and kept them alive for now, he definitely couldn't do it forever. Besides, he was afraid that if he fed them now, they would betray him later. After all, it was a treacherous post-apocalyptic world where tables turn quickly. Even so, Zhang didn't let Jin leave empty-handed. He gave him some wheat seeds to plant if he wanted, explaining that this was sadly all he could do for him right now. But he added that if they could actually manage to grow these seeds and survive for a while, it would restore his hope in humanity, and he would definitely agree to help them. Zhang walked away, saying that these seeds could either be planted or eaten, so they either had to try to grow them to survive forever, or eat them now to satisfy their hunger and die of starvation once they ran out. After Zhang left, Professor Jai, a professor of agricultural engineering, stepped in and told them they had to try to plant the seeds, even if their chances were almost non-existent in this cold weather. If we shift our focus back to Zhang, we see him saying that the arc of this neighborhood has come to an end, and it's time to look for the beginning of the shelter arc of the rich man's son, Simming. The next morning, while Zhang was enjoying a great drink, he was surprised by a message from Ziyuhao telling him that everything with Simming was perfectly set and they could go whenever they wanted. Zhang told him to come to his house because he wanted to talk. When Ziyuhao arrived, he was enjoying the warm atmosphere of Zhang's home. Our protagonist welcomed him and told him to have a seat, but he pointed to the floor. Ziyuhao sat down on the floor and told Zhang he was going to tell him about the whole conversation he had with Simming. Zhang replied that he wanted to see the chat himself, as it would be better and easier. Ziyuhao was startled and asked if Zhang meant he wanted his phone. Zhang replied, "Are you an idiot man? How am I supposed to see the chat without taking the phone?" Ziyuhao, looking scared, said that if Zhang was taking his phone, he had to consider something important first. Before he could finish, Zhang put the gun to his head and said, "What, are you trying to play games with me, man?" Ziyuhao replied, "That's not what I meant, boss." He explained that he might have cursed at Zhang in his messages with Simming, but he didn't actually mean those insults. Zhang snatched the phone from him, saying he would find out everything for himself right then. Looking at Ziyuhao's messages, Zhang noticed that Ziyuhao had indeed been cursing him out, calling him just an arrogant kid with a gun who went around killing people because he thought he was tough. This made Zhang turn to Ziyuhao and tell him to explain exactly what he meant by those words. Ziyuhao replied that he was only doing it to trick Simming, and that it was impossible for him to betray Zhang, because he knew very well he would die without the antidote to the poison he had taken. Zhang started getting lost in his thoughts and said to himself that Ziyuhao hadn't told Simming anything except about the gun and the dumplings, which meant Simming didn't know anything about the other types of weapons Zhang had, nor about his other tricks. Because of this, he was confident that taking over Simming's shelter would be super easy. Pulling himself out of his thoughts, Zhang asked Ziyuhao to tell him everything he knew about the shelter, especially the types of weapons, defenses, and secret passages, if any existed. Ziyuhao replied that the shelter's walls and doors were all made from the same metal used for spaceships. This meant it was impossible for anyone to break into the place unless they dropped a nuke on it or used thousands of missiles. Inside the base itself, there were no heavy weapons, but there were lots of traps, such as sleeping gas systems filling the entire shelter and flamethrowers at every entrance. Based on this info, Zhang started cooking up a genius plan in his head. Since Simming was only after his dumplings, it meant that even if Zhang got caught, Simming wouldn't kill him until he found out where the dumplings were hidden. After figuring this out, Zhang asked Ziyuhao if there were any other defensive systems in the shelter besides those. Ziyuhao replied that there was nothing else as far as he knew. Zhang then explained that all they had to do now was go there and pretend they fell into the sleeping gas trap. Once that happened, he would step in himself and kill Simming. Zhang thought to himself that the sleeping gas wouldn't affect him thanks to his gas mask, but he decided not to mention this to Ziyuhao so he could test his loyalty and see his true colors when they got there. After that, Zhang sat by himself, brainstorming a better solution to deal with the gas and flamethrowers. Then a brilliant idea hit him. He could try to use his storage dimension to block these attacks. Why shouldn't he be able to use his storage dimension for defense and offense just like other superpowers? But before he finished thinking it through, he told Ziyuhao to go home and that he would call him in a few days so they could go together to take over Simming's shelter. Ziyuhao grabbed Zhang by the leg, begging him and saying he couldn't wait because he was going to die in about a week. Zhang replied that he wouldn't make him wait that long and that he would contact him in less than 3 days. After Ziyuhao left, Zhang sat by himself for a bit and decided he needed to test storing fire inside his dimension. He gathered some wood, lit it, and made a relatively large fire, saying he would face the flamethrowers and try to absorb their fire into his dimension. Within seconds of starting the storage process, Zhang succeeded in storing it completely, and it had no negative effect on him at all. Then, he tried to focus on the fire and release it from his dimension in a very specific direction, as if he were shooting fireballs right out of his palms. After seeing this happen, Zhang realized that his ability was way more explosive and powerful than he had imagined. This meant he could not only block incoming attacks, but he could actually fire the same attacks back at the attacker. Zhang was also confident that if he practiced using it heavily, it wouldn't be long before he could block long-range attacks like bullets, missiles, and more. However, Zhang had another thing on his mind that was still bothering him. He wanted to know the effect of his storage dimension on living humans. He decided to send a message to all the neighbors, asking them to send someone they didn't need because he wanted to test something on him. They didn't waste any time and sent over a miserable guy no one wanted. Zhang told the guy that he would ask him to do a task, and if he succeeded, he would give him a bag of instant noodles. He threw him a stick and told him to try to hit Zhang with it as hard as he could, and if he managed to strike him with the stick, he would get the noodles. Instantly, the miserable guy lunged forward and tried to attack with all his might, but Zhang started absorbing the guy's stick directly into his storage dimension. The guy tried to run away, but Zhang told him that there was no way he could do that, and began pulling the guy in along with his stick. Inside the storage dimension, he found the guy frozen in his last attack pose. Zhang tried to pull the stick away or move him, but he couldn't get him to budge even an inch. At that moment, he realized that the man's pulse and breathing had completely stopped inside the dimension. Still, he wanted to find out what would happen to him once he was pulled out. As soon as the miserable guy came out of the storage dimension, he seemed startled, saying he thought he was dead and asking how he was still alive. From this, Zhang concluded that if he had left the guy inside the storage dimension for a few seconds longer, he would actually be dead by now. Zhang asked him how he felt while he was in that strange place just moments ago. The guy replied that all he remembered was being in a vast, empty world packed with tons of resources, but he also felt like he had been stuck there for a full century. It was terrifying. At that point, Zhang started to understand why food didn't rot. It was because time inside the storage dimension passed thousands of times slower than in the real world. That's why if he trapped any living human inside, they would go crazy and die, since years inside feel like mere seconds outside. Plus, Zhang noticed he could only keep the guy in the storage dimension for a few moments. But the question on his mind was whether human body parts could be stored for long periods like the resources, or if they would pop out on their own after a short while too. Without a second thought, he chopped off 2 of the guy's fingers to experiment, and through that, he confirmed that he could indeed store human body parts inside his dimension for a long time. After running a few more tests using the miserable guy, our hero reached several conclusions. As the guy was enjoying his meal, which he got from Zhang after all that sweating, our hero said he was now absolutely sure that he couldn't store living humans in his dimension, which meant there was a possibility he couldn't store certain other things either. But the important thing now was that he could use the dimension to block attacks and fire them back, which meant he could easily raid Simings's shelter and take it over. Once Zhang wrapped up his analysis, he thanked the guy for his help. But right as the guy was saying, "You're welcome, boss," Zhang suddenly slashed his throat and killed him on the spot. Strangely enough, when the guy died, he actually looked happy, saying he couldn't believe he was finally leaving this terrifying world where everyone was eating each other. On the other side, Zhang said he needed to run tests on a few more people from the neighborhood to make sure of what he had discovered. 3 days after all these tests, we see Zhang meeting up with Ziyuhao again, telling him he was finally ready to go. Ziyuhao, looking exhausted, said he felt like he was dying. Zhang knew very well that Ziyuhao had been eating well, and that his feeling was definitely just because he was terrified of the poison. This made Zhang explain to him that he could give him a temporary shot to ease the symptoms until they finished raiding the shelter, and then he'd give him the real antidote. Ziyuhao couldn't believe his ears and begged, "Give me the shot quickly, please, I need the dose." Zhang grabbed some tap water, gave him the shot, and told him it was just a painkiller, and that his time of death was still exactly the same. Ziyuhao replied that Zhang didn't need to warn him because he'd never betray him, and he wasn't an idiot who would sacrifice his life for Siming, who used to bully him. Siming then called to let Zhang know that they were already on their way. As Zhang spoke on the phone, he shot a dark, evil look his way. Time flew by and we see Zhang getting ready to leave. After putting on his gear, he said goodbye to Zhou, telling her he would explain everything when the time was right. But right before he walked out the door, she rushed over, hugged him tightly, expressed her concern, and told him to come back safe. Zhang promised her that nothing would happen to him, and told her that he had left her and Zhou with enough resources to last for half a month, just in case he got delayed. After that, Zhang went down to meet up with Ziyuhao to start their trip, but he pulled out a rope and told Ziyuhao that he would tie his hands before they set off. Ziyuhao tried to change his mind and convince him that he was already on his side, but Zhang explained that he wasn't doing this because he didn't trust him. It was just to make their act convincing in front of his friend Siming. Ziyuhao gave in and went along with it, even though he was sure the real reason was that Zhang didn't trust him at all. Finally, they hit the road on the ice sled. After traveling for a while, they arrived at Yanchi City, where the shelter was located. Zhang was amazed by what he saw, noting that this part of the city was a natural fortress, protected by a river in the front and mountains in the back. He also realized that not all the houses there were fortified, but everyone living there was comfortable and had electricity. He mentioned out loud that he thought all people would be equal at the end of the world, not knowing that the rich would still live happier lives than the poor. Because he said this a bit too loudly, Ziyuhao told him that no one was rich compared to Zhang the badass. Zhang told him to drop the flattery and get off because they had to walk the rest of the way. Ziyuhao was surprised and asked how they could just leave the sled in the middle of the snow, and why they were walking when they could just ride it to Siming. Zhang replied that if he asked any more questions, he would finish him off right there. Meanwhile, a woman was watching them from a window, saying that they probably had a lot of resources since they had a sled and were playing around with it like that. We learned from her thoughts that her own resources were almost gone, as they'd been running low for about 3 days, and her power generators would run out in a few hours. Because she was in the same situation as everyone else in that place except Siming, she thought her best chance at survival was to catch the guy with the sled she had just seen. Moving back to our protagonist, he finally arrived with Ziyuhao in front of Siming's house. Zhang pulled out his gun, playing the part of a kidnapper holding Ziyuhao, and told him to go open the door right away or he'd kill him. Ziyuhao ran to the door and started calling out to Siming, telling him to open up quickly. At that moment, Siming was keeping an eye on every angle of his fortified mansion. Seeing Ziyuhao, he was surprised because he had agreed with him to bring Zhang tomorrow, not today, and he was annoyed because he didn't see the sled anywhere. On the other side, Zhang started shouting at Ziyuhao, saying that if the door didn't open, he would blow his brains out on the spot. Seeing what was happening, Siming said he would open the door but threatened to kill Zhang if he tried to pull any fast ones. Our hero then stepped inside with Ziyuhao while pointing the gun at his head, eventually reaching the corridors, which Zhang knew were full of traps. Siming knew they had arrived by watching the cameras and decided to use the sleeping gas on them without giving them a chance to get closer to his room. Suddenly, small panels in the ceiling opened, much to Zhang's feigned surprise, and a massive amount of sleeping gas poured out of the openings all at once. During all this, Siming was watching from his cameras, listening to Zhang putting on a show of yelling at Ziyuhao and demanding that he get Siming to open the door or else he would kill him. A few minutes went by, and as soon as Siming noticed that the two men had finally passed out, he decided to go out and tie them up. Meanwhile, after noticing that Ziyuhao had fainted. Realizing this, Zhang understood that he could now absorb the gas into his storage dimension. After all, Siming probably wasn't standing by the cameras anymore because he was heading their way to tie them up before they woke up. Sure enough, just seconds later, the door opened. Zhang knew he had to play dead quickly, but then he noticed that the person coming to get them wasn't Siming. It was someone else entirely. Zhang was annoyed, thinking he didn't know there were other people in this shelter, and if there were many people around, things could get dangerous for him. When the guy approached to tie them up and take them to Siming, Zhang recognized him as the famous actor Lin. Zhang thought to himself that he should have known a rich guy like Siming would have important friends like him. Within moments, they reached Siming's place. Zhang and Ziyuhao were dumped on the floor. Lin told Siming that Zhang coming in completely unguarded like this just proved he was a total fool. They started talking among themselves and deciding what to do with the sled once they took it from Zhang. Little did they know, Zhang had already started releasing the gas from his storage dimension, letting it spread rapidly through the room. Because Zhang could control the direction of the gas as it surged out, he aimed it straight at Lin, whom Siming thought was just shivering with excitement over the sled. Lin replied that he wasn't shivering. Suddenly, he felt as though Siming had turned into 6 people. At that moment, our hero pulled out a knife, sliced the rope with ease, and stood up as soon as he noticed that both his enemies had passed out. He tied them both up and took their weapons, saying they looked cool but were actually pretty weak. Since Siming was going to take a while to wake up, Zhang decided to take a quick tour of the mansion. He was truly amazed by the massive living room, saying it was truly fit for the son of the richest man. He kept walking through the mansion and, moments later, discovered an entire room dedicated to growing various crops. After finishing his inspection of the first floor, he decided to check out the second floor. Up there, he noticed a room for almost everything, from a wine cellar to a gaming room, a home theater, and much more. But the thing that caught his attention the most was the control room itself, which was filled with devices and buttons he didn't understand at all. He even wished he were a computer engineer so he could deal with such equipment. Even so, when he randomly pressed a couple of buttons, he discovered that there were basketball and shooting courts in the place, and he was thrilled because he loved shooting practice like crazy. But when he went to go check out the courts, he got a shock, realizing that he couldn't access any of these places unless he got the password from Siming. He decided that right now he needed to focus on one thing: how to get the password from the Siming kid. Zhang went back and doused the 2 men with buckets of water to wake them up. He started taunting Siming, saying, "Wake up, your mom made sandwiches." When Siming opened his eyes in a panic, he started asking Zhang, "How did you pull that off, you sly dog?" Our hero replied that Siming was an idiot to think he could catch him so easily, and made it clear that he wasn't his friend to just sit around and chat with him. Zhang pointed the gun at his head, telling him to focus now because his life was on the line. Zhang added that he might let him live under one condition: that Siming cooperate with him and not try to resist. Siming replied that he would do whatever Zhang wanted, even if he wanted him to kill his friend Lin, as long as Zhang let him live, because his own life was more important than anyone else's. Zhang explained that all he wanted was a safe place to live until the blizzards passed, so he wanted Siming to let him stay in his heavily fortified mansion. Zhang promised that if he agreed, he wouldn't hurt him. Siming looked at him in surprise and said, "Do you think I'm a fool, man? You could just kill me right now and take the mansion for yourself, and no one would say a word." Zhang replied that he wasn't stupid enough to kill the son of the city's richest man. He knew very well that the blizzards would be over soon, so he wanted to use this opportunity to become friends with Siming. That way, once this disaster was over, he could live the rest of his life comfortably since his friend would be a billionaire. Siming seemed to be buying into his words and told Zhang that he had liked him since the first time they met. But Zhang didn't stop there. He decided to keep talking to make sure Siming was fully convinced. He told Siming that he was sure this disaster would end soon, just like any crisis before it, and then the world would go back to the way it was. The rich would live comfortably, while the poor would starve to death. Since Zhang had been poor his whole life, he preferred being rich, even if it was just for once. At that point, Siming got excited and said that not only would Zhang be rich if he teamed up with him, but he was also ready to make Zhang a manager at one of his father's companies. Siming started thinking to himself that Zhang was probably afraid of his status in society and definitely wouldn't dare to kill him. Pushing these thoughts aside, Simming asked Zhang exactly what his demands were in order to cooperate. Our protagonist replied that all he wanted was the password that opened everything in the mansion so he could move around freely. Simming told him that his request was reasonable, but he had to promise not to kill him first. Zhang swore that he would let him live since he was an atheist anyway, and added that he would never kill his future friend. Simming felt immense pressure and found it hard to trust Zhang, but he had to accept the deal because he didn't have any other option. A few moments later, we see them going to the control room and Simming starts giving him the password. Once Zhang entered it, he declared that he was now officially the owner of this badass fortress. Then Simming called out to him, asking him to untie him since he had given him what he wanted. Zhang replied, "I'm at your service, man. Give me just 1 second to grab the knife." But as soon as he brought the knife, he slashed Simming's throat, saying, "That'll teach you to trust an atheist again." As Simming was dying, Zhang kept talking to him, telling him to breathe slowly so the dying part wouldn't be as painful. Simming was taking his last breath, looking confused, and asked why Zhang betrayed and killed him after he gave him everything he asked for. Zhang replied as if he was reading his mind, telling him it was impossible to keep him alive when he had absolutely no use for him. After taking care of him, Zhang went and took care of his friend Lin too. Zhang thought to himself that he had gotten rid of the 2 important targets, and now only Ziyuhao was left. A few seconds later, Ziyuhao opened his eyes, started looking around, and asked, "Who am I and where am I?" He saw Zhang mopping the floor and asked if he had successfully taken care of Simming. When he found out what happened, he was amazed and said he couldn't believe Zhang took them down that easily. Zhang replied that this Simming kid was just a total lightweight and getting rid of him was a piece of cake. But it looked like Ziyuhao wasn't paying attention to his words and was too busy kicking Simming's body to get back at him for the bullying he endured in the past. Zhang called out to him, stopping his thoughts, and told him to take the resources inside the bag as a reward. Ziyuhao was over the moon when he opened the bag and saw the massive amount of supplies inside. He thanked Zhang and said that from now on, he was at his service and would do whatever he asked. Zhang replied that sadly, their journey together ended right here because the resources and energy left in the mansion were running low. He told Ziyuhao to take his stuff and the resources he just gave him and leave, since the electricity was barely enough for Zhang himself. Hearing this, Ziyuhao lost it, claiming that Zhang was definitely lying to keep all the resources for himself, and started getting angrier and angrier. Ziyuhao told him that if it weren't for him, he would never have found this mansion, so he wouldn't let Zhang kick him out and take everything for himself. Zhang replied with an Egyptian proverb, meaning he shouldn't push his luck before Zhang even finished speaking, only to be surprised when Ziyuhao actually pushed his luck, bringing in his donkey and horse. Ziyuhao told him that if Zhang kicked him out of the house, he would tell everyone where he was and expose his superpowers too. Zhang just stood there baffled and thought to himself, did this punk forget that I have a gun and could blow his brains out right now? But since Ziyuhao just kept running his mouth and complaining, Zhang pulled out his gun and blew his brains out to shut him up. Ziyuhao dropped dead on the floor because he didn't know when to keep his mouth shut. Zhang said he had actually planned to let him live, but Ziyuhao forced his hand. After that, our protagonist went to the home theater and sat by himself to think things through. He realized he had taken over the place, and all he had to do now was go and bring Joe over. As for his old building, he would leave it to Uncle Lao. This way, he would pay him back for all his past favors and for saving his life, and he'd have someone he trusted to guard the Building 25 shelter while he was away. Even so, he still had to find a nice girl for Uncle Lao to keep him company and liven up the place as soon as possible. Then Zhang turned on the TV to see what was happening in the apocalypse. He was shocked to see that the TV was broadcasting European channels. Zhang couldn't believe his eyes since the signal was supposed to be weak. How could Simming's TV have all the channels in the entire world? When he went to look for the source of this strong signal, he discovered some incredibly powerful devices broadcasting these channels and providing super-fast internet to the mansion. Zhang was over the moon, saying he could finally browse the web and play League of Legends. Browse the web and check the latest news on the blizzards. He immediately rushed over to the computers and found out from them that only 25% of the world's population was still alive, and everyone else was dead. From this, Zhang made a genius Sherlock-level deduction. If things kept going like this, less than 5% of the population would survive the disaster. But his thoughts were interrupted when he realized there was something even more important: the spread of mutated humans all around the world. He was now certain that his theories about superpowers were absolutely right. The problem was that the powers some of them gained made them lose their human form and turn into monsters. Even though the number of superpowered individuals worldwide wasn't that big yet, he was sure that many of them were hiding their powers just like he was. Because of this, Zhang decided he really needed to stay hidden with his ability, as the military might start hunting down people with powers in the future to run tests on them. Once he finally pulled himself out of his thoughts, he took the sled and headed toward Building 25 to bring Joe back. But on his way, he heard a woman calling out to him. He quickly spun around to see who it was and raised his gun at her. The girl was startled and told him to wait a second and just listen to what she had to say. Zhang couldn't believe his eyes when he realized it was the famous actress Mai, and asked her just to make sure. She confirmed it and explained that she hadn't eaten anything in 3 whole days, and if things went on like this, she would die of hunger. Zhang didn't believe her at first, then told her that everything came with a price in these tough times. She replied that she was ready to agree to any condition as long as she got to eat, and gave him the puppy dog eyes so he couldn't refuse. And just like that, Zhang couldn't say no because she was his celebrity crush, and told her to come with him since he decided to help her out. Without wasting any time, he said, "That's it." Zhang took Mai to Siming's mansion. When she asked him how he had the key to the place, he told her that he was the new owner of the house and told her not to ask too many questions. But once she got inside the mansion, she asked him again if he was Siming's friend or something. At that point, Zhang changed the subject and asked her if she had any kind of relationship with Siming. Mai quickly changed her tone when she realized that Zhang might kill her too if she turned out to be one of Siming's enemies. She began to say that she only knew him casually, and that whenever she saw him, they would just say hello. Zhang replied that if her relationship with him was truly casual, she needed to stop asking about him. All she needed to know right now was that he was the current owner of the mansion. Mai thought to herself that she needed to stop getting involved in his business and focus right now on making him like her, so she could live comfortably until the disaster was over. She went and took a shower, since hot water was a rare thing in this day and age. When she came out, she started executing her plan and asked Zhang to let her live with him. To convince him, she started putting on a cute act, giving him puppy dog eyes and saying she just wanted to stay with him until the disaster ended. Zhang laughed and told her that this disaster wasn't going to end anytime soon, and even after the blizzards passed, the world would never go back to the way it was. So as long as she was staying in the mansion, she would do whatever she wanted, wherever she wanted. I mean, seriously, bro, please tell me this story isn't turning into a harem like the rest of the Chinese web novels. After they finished drinking their milk tea together, Zhang gave her a dress he pulled out from his storage dimension. The girl was amazed and asked him how he did that, but he just laughed and told her he used to be a magician when he was a kid. Then they started eating, and Zhang filled the entire table in front of her with food before making it clear that if she was going to live with him from now on, all she had to do was follow his orders to the letter, and there was no such thing as saying no. She replied that he didn't need to worry, as she was an actress and knew very well that to get anything, she had to give something in return. Even so, she had a few conditions before she could accept Zhang's offer. First, their relationship would only last until the end of the blizzards, and after that, he couldn't tell anyone what happened between them so her reputation as a famous actress wouldn't be ruined. Zhang told her that was super simple, and that he had no problem with it. She felt encouraged and said her second condition was that he shouldn't try to pull any weird, perverted stunts without her permission. Zhang walked up to her, got close, and said, "What did you say, girl? Weren't you the one hitting on me first anyway?" But despite the comment, he reassured her and made it clear that he wasn't a creep, and that she would just be his backup girlfriend. The next morning, after they finished their second cup of milk tea, Zhang told her that he was going out for a while and would be back soon. Mai looked worried in case someone attacked the house and asked when he would be back. Zhang said he was just going to pick someone up and wouldn't be gone long. He asked her if she knew any famous or rich people living nearby. Mai answered that almost everyone living in that area had a net worth of at least 1 billion yuan. Zhang explained to her that he needed a nice girl for his friend since his wife had passed away and he was in a bad place. Since Mai was a celebrity, she definitely knew a lot of eligible ladies. Mai answered nervously, saying she only knew women who were a bit older, mostly out of fear that if she suggested women around her own age, Zhang might replace her with them. But Zhang reassured her and clarified that his friend was in his 40s and wanted someone mature. So she told him she had the perfect match for him, Hai Yan, the famous veteran actress. Zhang had a crush on her too when he was younger, so he agreed and told Mai to call her immediately to come over so he could pick her up. She made the call right away, and Hai Yan arrived. Once Hai Yan arrived at the mansion, Zhang seemed like he was going to go back on his word and keep her for himself. But then he pulled out some resources and told her that these were hers, and promised to keep providing her and Lao with supplies regularly if she accepted his offer. Hai Yan immediately agreed without even knowing the details. Zhang said he expected that response since he knew rich people like her were smart. However, he warned her that if he found out she leaked the secrets of his superpowers, or the fact that he had a massive amount of resources, she could consider herself dead. Or rather, both of them could consider themselves dead. Meanwhile, near the city of Yanxi, we see a group of people digging through the ice. They pull out their heavy-duty drilling machine, which is connected to 5 small sleds, each pulled by 2 dogs. One of the men makes the dogs run as fast as they can, explaining that they are using the kinetic energy generated by the dogs to power the drill. Within moments, the drill successfully breaks through the ice, revealing a large number of fish beneath it that are either already dead or about to freeze to death from the cold. When they finish, one of the guys calls his uncle to say that the people in the city must be freezing to death. His uncle replies that the city folks are fools who don't even know how to grow crops, so he's sure that the last people to survive the end of the world will be farmers like them. After all, they've always been used to eating from the sweat of their own hands, and no matter how tough life gets, they can survive as long as they can work. But their thoughts are interrupted when the young guy hears what sounds like a vehicle coming from the city. Looking closely, he's shocked to see an ice sled, and right behind it is Hai Yan, the wife-to-be of Mr. Lao. Zhang also noticed them and couldn't believe that these fishermen and farmers had managed to adapt to the freezing temperatures. but his thoughts were cut short when he saw the sled being chased by some villagers. Zhang realized their target was his ice sled, so he told Hai Yan to hold on tight because he was about to speed up. When one of the villagers noticed that Zhang was pulling away, he fired a harpoon from his ice drilling rig, warning Zhang that he'd shoot to kill if he didn't stop. He didn't even wait for Zhang to react and opened fire, but luckily, Zhang managed to dodge the harpoon at the last second. However, because of the sudden swerving to dodge the shot, Hai Yan lost her balance and fell right off the sled. Zhang was forced to stop and face the villagers, as he couldn't just leave Lao's future wife behind and run off. At that moment, the villagers stopped too and told him to hand over the sled and the woman if he wanted to live. Zhang pulled his gun on them, telling them he didn't want any trouble and that if they left him alone, he would just leave and they wouldn't get hurt. But sadly, the villagers were blinded by greed after seeing the famous actress and the ice sled. One of them stepped forward and told Zhang that since he was passing through their village territory, he had to pay a toll to cross safely, and the price would be either the ice sled or the woman. Zhang replied with total confidence that he had a gun and wasn't forced to listen to them. But one villager pointed out that there were too many of them, and Zhang wouldn't be able to take them all down. Zhang realized that if this dragged on, their backup would arrive and things would get much worse. So he decided to pull out a second gun from his storage dimension and started raining down a barrage of bullets from both guns to give them no chance to attack. Suddenly, one of them freaked out, realizing that Zhang wasn't messing around, and he took out a large number of them. He ordered the dogs to quickly attack Zhang before he could finish them all. But what the old guy didn't know was that Zhang had a powerful superpower, which he quickly used to absorb all the dogs into his storage dimension. This left Hai Yan terrified, as she didn't understand the source of Zhang's power and was afraid she might get hit too. Within seconds, Zhang finished locking them up. Hai Yan got back on the sled, and they sped away from the scene. As they traveled, Zhang thought to himself that he could keep the dogs in the storage dimension for a little longer since they were much smaller than humans. Even though he knew they would still die within minutes just like the humans, he wanted to know exactly how long they would last. This was because if he figured that out, he might be able to calculate the time dilation difference between the real world and his storage dimension. Meanwhile, another group of villagers reached the scene of the bodies. They were baffled, looking all over the surrounding area, but couldn't find any trace of their dogs. They started getting worried because they knew the dogs were raised in their Wujia village and would never just run away. But the uncle stepped in, telling them to focus on what mattered. They had to avenge the men who were killed. Plus, he suspected that this guy possessed a superpower, just like Chun in their village, and they needed to report what happened to the village chief as soon as possible to find a solution. If we shift over to Wujia village, we see a massive medieval-style castle. Inside, we find Chun asleep, hugging a picture of Snow White after separating her from the 7 dwarfs. The village chief walks in, having learned what Zhang did to his men, but finds Chun asleep with the picture. This makes the chief lose his temper, yelling at him to wake up. When Chun doesn't respond, the chief pulls the blanket off him and tells him to stop being a creep. The chief adds that all the women in the village would fall for him because he has a superpower, yet he rejects them all just for Snow White. After a good scolding, Chun, the miserable guy whom no one leaves alone, wakes up and asks the chief what he wants. The chief points to a guy named Hai and tells him to explain what he saw to the weirdo Chun. Hai wastes no time and starts explaining that today, while they were fishing, they ran into a badass kid who wiped out 4 of their men all by himself. Annoyed, Chun says they just signed peace treaties with all the neighboring villages, so who the hell killed their men? Hai replies that the attacker was from a completely different city, not a neighboring village. Pausing for a moment, the village chief stands up and says that this guy killed 4 men and 8 dogs by himself, meaning there's a high probability he has a superpower just like Chun. Chun, living in his own anime world, replies that it's very possible, as he thinks he's the chosen, badass protagonist of the story, and therefore must have a strong enemy, like a demon king. Even though all the village elders are dying of laughter, they try to hold it in so Chun doesn't get upset and refuse to help them. The village chief decides to play along with Chun's game, telling him that he is the only one who can help them defeat the demon king, Zhang. The rest of the elders start buttering him up, telling Chun he's the badass hero and must help them. Let's leave them fawning over him and go back to Zhang and Hai Yan as they arrive in front of building 25. Zhang tells her that her new place will be on the 24th floor. Hai Yan feels a bit disappointed, thinking she never imagined she would sell herself out just to survive. When they enter the house, Joe greets them, welcoming him back with great enthusiasm, even though Hai Yan saw Joe, she didn't say a word and instead asked Zhang if he wanted something to eat or drink. Zhang then turned his attention to Hai Yan, telling her to wait for him while he went to check on Lao. On the way there, Joe started saying that she didn't know he was into mature women. Trust me, I'm dying to use the word that rhymes with chick to describe her, but I'll keep it clean as requested, boss. Zhang replied that Hai Yan was just a temporary guest, but he really did like mature women because they are sensible and level-headed. Hey man, we're mixing things up using words like girls, women, and chicks to keep the vocabulary fresh, so don't get annoyed with us. After that, Zhang asked Joe about Lao's physical condition. She told him that his recovery speed was so high that he had completely healed, even though his injury was supposed to take 3 months to return to normal. She added that she kept giving him painkillers as requested, and while she was able to control his power at first, it started getting out of hand as his power kept growing. Zhang began to worry and asked Joe if any physical changes had happened to Uncle Lao. Ever since he saw how abilities were turning people into monsters, he was afraid he might turn into the Hulk. But Joe stepped in and reassured him that Lao was still the same, just with increased power. When Uncle Lao came in, Zhang told him about what happened and how he took control of Simink's mansion. Lao was amazed and said that rich people really do live their whole lives like kings. Zhang replied that the only people who could survive this disaster were the rich, who had built themselves shelters and mansions to protect themselves from the end of the world. Zhang then changed the subject and asked Lao about the changes in his body. Lao, acting like a total badass, lifted his shirt and showed Zhang that he had an amazing six-pack and that the bullet wounds had healed completely. He felt way stronger than before, but the problem was that this strength made him feel like a monster. Zhang stepped in and clarified that he had gained a superpower too, and that it was a good thing, not a bad one. Zhang then showed him his own power, the storage dimension, explaining that many people had gained abilities. Lao was amazed and said that now he finally understood why Zhang always had a never-ending supply of resources. But unfortunately, while he was talking, he got so excited that he slapped his hands hard on the hospital bed, which caused it to break under his massive strength, sending him crashing to the floor. Seeing what happened, Zhang told him to go easy on himself, man, and warned him that he would get used to the power over time. Meanwhile, Zhang thought to himself that the stronger Lao got, the safer he would be, even after the appearance of other superpowered individuals. While Zhou and Haiyan were getting to know each other, they heard Zhang's voice telling Lao that he had found him a bride he would like. When Lao came out and saw that the bride was none other than the famous actress Haiyan, he couldn't believe his eyes. Still, he tried to act casual, although he was nervous and kept nodding his head like a total creep. After they were introduced, Zhang stepped in and played the part of a matchmaker, declaring Lao and Haiyan husband and wife for better or worse, all while Lao was still looking a bit creepy. Once Zhang finished his speech, he told Lao that the building was theirs from now on, and that he would take Zhou and leave. Lao replied that there was no way he could accept that, since the place was the result of Zhang's hard work alone. But our protagonist explained that he had found a better place, as he had mentioned before, and wanted to leave him the house rather than leave it completely empty. Zhang then turned to Zhou and told her to pack up. Zhang told him that the gifts weren't over yet. When they went outside, Zhang explained that he would give him this sled as a gift so he could easily gather resources whenever he wanted. But Lao tried to argue that he couldn't accept all these gifts at once, and if he gave him the sled, Zhang wouldn't have anything to ride to his own mansion. Without a word, Zhang pulled out an even larger ice sled and told him, "Don't worry about it, Uncle Lao, you take this one." Zhang and Zhou then immediately hit the road toward the new mansion. On the way, Zhou kept asking about the mansion's appearance and design. Zhang replied that it was like a fancy, luxury mansion belonging to a top celebrity, and that she would be amazed when they arrived. Zhou told him that now she finally understood why he was so willing to give his old building to Lao. However, Zhang clarified that he only let Lao borrow the place, he didn't give it to him completely. He added that if they needed it at any time in the future, they could take it back. Then he told her that another woman would be living with them in the new mansion. At that moment, Zhou got furious and asked him if he was already sick of her. Zhang replied that she was overreacting, and that she could just consider the girl as someone who would help with chores so she wouldn't feel overwhelmed. Then he flipped into romantic hero mode, promising that he would never forget the one who stood by his side and helped him, and that she was the only one in his heart, while the rest were just background characters. Just to keep things family-friendly, let's keep it cool, boss. While they were sitting in the sled, sharing romantic moments, Zhou noticed that the blizzards had suddenly intensified out of nowhere. Zhang looked to the side and realized it wasn't a blizzard at all. It was an attack launched by someone with a superpower just like his. Even though the impact almost flipped the sled, Zhang used his power in the nick of time to absorb the attack. Right after that, they were surprised by an even larger ice tornado hurtling toward them at lightning speed. Zhang was sure this was another attack by someone with abilities, but he kept his cool and said that no one could hurt him as long as he stayed focused and absorbed the attacks at the right time. Since the previous attack was aimed at him with high precision, Zhang was certain that the attacker was hiding nearby. To get an edge, he spun the sled around and prepared to absorb the ice tornado attack as it came from behind. Nearby, we see Chun, who was baffled by what he just witnessed. He was sure his attack had hit Zhang, but it had vanished in an instant. Since the tornado attack consumed a large portion of his energy, Chun decided to retreat for now, telling the villagers that Zhang had a power just like his, and that they should leave and attack again only after gathering more information about his ability. On the other side, Zhang pulled out his trusty machine gun and said that since the attacks had stopped, this was his chance to check the area. He put on his thermal vision goggles, allowing him to spot any living creatures nearby. With them, he noticed 3 people hiding behind a small ice ridge. Zhang stepped out of the sled, fully prepared to engage them, and started raining a barrage of bullets without warning. Because of Zhang's sharp aim, one of the villagers took a bullet to the leg. Despite the serious injury, he was a tough guy and warned the others not to step in because Zhang had a heavy machine gun. Chun poked his head out to check out the machine gun, looking confused because he couldn't figure out how Zhang had pinpointed their location just by using the gun. At the same time, Zhang said they looked like they would probably keep hiding like rats. To flush them out, Zhang decided to fire back the tornado he had absorbed earlier. At that moment, Chun was in a state of shock, panic, and total denial at what he was seeing. Even so, he quickly snapped out of it and rushed out, countering Zhang's tornado with one of his own. Since the two attacks were equal in power, they completely canceled each other out, giving Chun the chance to scurry away like a scared rat. Seeing him running off, Zhang said he had no choice but to let him get away this time because chasing him could get a bit risky, especially since Joe was in the sled and he couldn't leave her alone. Even so, he raised his voice and told the villagers that he would be waiting for them if they wanted revenge for their fallen men. But he warned them that if they came to his home, he would take them all down because he'd be fully prepared. After wrapping up the fight, our hero got back in the sled with Joe. On the way, he thought to himself that he needed to get used to fighting other superpowered individuals like Chun, as he was sure he'd be getting into a lot more fights like this in the future. But his thoughts were interrupted by Joe, who said she was worried that the people who fled might come back for revenge. Zhang reassured her, telling her they'd think twice, make that 1,000 times, before trying anything, especially after seeing his power in action. Still, Joe couldn't calm down and said that since Chun could control ice and wind, she was afraid he might attack the mansion and bury them underneath it. Zhang replied that she would change her mind once she saw the mansion, and even if it got buried underground, nothing would happen to them, and their lives inside wouldn't be affected at all. Plus, Zhang was confident his ability was way stronger than Chun's. Time flew by and Zhang finally reached the mansion. He went to Mai's room and found her still awake. He told her to get up because he wanted to introduce her to someone. Mai panicked and was about to say that she wasn't into that kind of thing, but Zhang caught the expression on her face, started laughing, and reassured her that the person he brought was a woman, not a man. Once Mai heard that, she put on her best outfit, got dressed up, and told herself that she would be the girl of everyone's dreams. She figured that if she tried hard enough, Zhang might pick her over his other girlfriend. She grabbed her makeup and started getting ready for the ultimate showdown with Joe over Zhang's heart. On the other side, when Zhang went downstairs to check on Joe, he found her putting on makeup and getting completely glammed up too. He realized what was going on and thought to himself that this competition would definitely work to his advantage. But the weird thing was that when Mai came down, they realized that she and Joe already knew each other. Joe marched toward Mai looking furious as if she were about to hit her. Zhang stepped in to break up the tension, asking Joe if they knew each other or were related. Joe replied, looking annoyed, "She's my cousin." Zhang was surprised and asked why Joe wanted to strangle Mai if they were cousins. Joe explained that there was a family feud between them, which is why she didn't like her. Meanwhile, Mai started whispering to Zhang, asking him not to say anything about the deal they had made in front of Joe. When Zhang asked her why, she explained that her family, the Joe family, was famous for its massive achievements in science and medicine, and that ever since she decided to enter the world of entertainment and acting, her family wanted to disown her. Before she could finish her sentence, Joe started yelling at the top of her lungs, saying that Mai had caused them huge problems, and because of her, the Joe family had become a laughingstock among all the other high-class families. Zhang stood there listening to the whole argument, thinking to himself, why did I get myself mixed up in this mess? Man, the day I got promoted and became a small warehouse manager, I was insanely happy. And now you guys come at me talking about rich families and high class and all that nonsense. Anyway, he decided to step in just to keep things chill and avoid a headache. He said he actually likes acting and actors, and he doesn't see them as bad people. Joe replied that she doesn't have any issue with actors who got famous because they're actually good, but her acting is trash, and people only watch her movies to check out her body. At that moment, we see Zhang looking at Mai, trying hard not to laugh, saying Joe kinda has a point, but he can't take her side or things might escalate. So he snapped out of it and told Juno he doesn't want to hear anything about this topic again. From now on, they're just two distant relatives from some unknown family with unclear jobs. Then he added that they need to take care of this mansion from now on, especially the crop growing room, since it's gonna play a huge role in their survival. After that, he asked Joe to go fix up the room on the second floor because she'll be sleeping there. When Joe left, Mai started thanking Zhang for not exposing their deal in front of her. She also asked him not to mention what happened between them, or that whole milk tea thing in front of Joe. Zhang put on his nice guy face and told her he respects her decisions and will keep her secret, but deep down, he knew very well that there are only 3 people in that mansion. Sooner or later, his relationship with Mai is definitely gonna come out, whether he says anything or not. After that, Mai said she'd go cook something since Joe was busy, but when she got to the kitchen, she found no supplies at all. She was confused because she clearly remembered seeing a lot of resources there before. What she didn't know is that Zhang never leaves supplies out after storing them. He doesn't want either her or Joe to betray him or anything. He wants them to stay dependent on him. A few moments later, Zheng showed up and started pulling out a bunch of ingredients from storage, telling her she could cook all of that. And after a while, Mai finished cooking and called them to eat. That's when Zheng told Zhou to get ready to try a famous actress's cooking. But the moment Zhou took her first bite, she was like, "Damn, this is nasty," and asked Mai why she added so much salt. But the moment Zhou took her first bite, she was like, "Damn, this is nasty," and asked Mai why she added so much salt. Of course, Mai knew Zheng was the one who messed with her while she was cooking, but she stayed quiet because she didn't want Zhou to find out about their situation. Meanwhile, Zheng was bored out of his mind and had nothing to do, so he decided to stir things up between the two girls for entertainment. That's why he called Zhou over and told her to try the shrimp, saying it's actually good, unlike the rice. Zhou immediately switched her tone and said even bad food tastes good when it's made by him. Meanwhile, Mai was sitting there burning with anger but pretending she didn't care. Things kept going like that, Zheng ignoring her and treating Zhou nicely, until they finished eating and the day ended like that. Days passed quickly, and we see Zheng in the shooting room practicing and messing around a bit. Suddenly his phone rings. It's an unknown number. What's weird is that it's calling his regular line, not WeChat or anything like that. Zheng thinks it might be some relative or something, but then remembers he doesn't really care about anyone but himself. So he blocks the number once and for all, but then it calls again. That makes him doubt himself, thinking maybe he pressed something wrong and didn't actually block it. Even after confirming 100% that he blocked the number, it calls again. That's when he starts thinking this person must be a hacker, so he finally answers just to see what they want. The first thing the caller asks him is why Zheng has been blocking him multiple times. Then Zheng asked him another question, trying to find out who he was. But the guy on the other end started listing everything about Zheng. His name, that he used to live in Building 25 in Tianhai City, and even that he's now living in the Simming Mansion. At that point, Zheng started getting a little nervous. He asked the guy who he was and what he wanted. The stranger said he was actually someone living near Zheng in the city he's in right now, and made it clear that he'd spread all this information everywhere unless Zheng gave him a share of his resources. As usual, Zheng replied calmly, saying he wasn't scared at all. Even if all his information got exposed, nobody would care enough to look for him. He's just an ordinary guy. The stranger laughed and said he knows everything about him, and he's even sure Zheng is the one who took all the supplies from the Schengen warehouse. Zheng fired back, saying that's nonsense. There's no way he could steal a warehouse that big. Obviously, the manager is the one who stole everything, just like the investigation says. The stranger laughed again and said he's 100% sure about his info because he's Fanda. Zheng froze. He knew that name very well. It belongs to the head of one of the biggest private investigation and intelligence companies. That explains how Fanda managed to hack his phone and call him even after being blocked. The scarier part, this hacker might even be able to break into the security systems of the Simming Mansion. Still, Zheng forced himself to calm down. He thought about it and realized that doesn't make sense. If Fanda could really hack the mansion's security, he would have threatened him with that instead of using personal information. So he snapped out of it and told Fanda he's always admired his company. Fanda immediately told him to cut the act and stop changing the subject. He made it clear that he knows Zheng has been steadily providing resources for the two girls, so adding a third person wouldn't be a problem for him. Zheng tried to play dumb, saying he's just a supervisor at a small warehouse and there's no way he has that kind of resources. But Fanda calmly replied that he never says anything unless he's sure. He even told him straight up that he hacked his phone and read his messages, which confirmed he has things like rice and other supplies. While Fanda was talking, Zheng was boiling with anger, thinking he has to kill this guy no matter what it takes. Still, he tried to lie, saying he sold most of his supplies a long time ago because he didn't have space to store them. Fanda didn't care. He said he doesn't need excuses. If Zheng doesn't give him what he asked for, he'll expose the warehouse theft and completely ruin his life. And once that news spreads, people with abilities will definitely come after his mansion. There's no way Zheng could handle that many enemies at once. After hearing that, Zheng finally said he agrees to the deal, but if even a single piece of his information leaks, it's over. Fanda replied that he's not stupid enough to lose a free supply source like that. Then he listed what he wants: food, alcohol, clothes, boxers, and a bunch of other stuff. He also told Zheng to personally bring everything to Villa 302, warning him that if he senses any betrayal, he'll release all the information immediately. Zheng reassured him, saying he's living comfortably right now and doesn't mind letting him live comfortably too, as long as his information stays safe. But the moment he hung up, Zheng was furious. He hates being threatened, and he swore he's going to kill that guy, Fanda, at the first chance he gets. Right after that, he headed to the living room where Zhou was. He tried to calm himself down a bit, then told Zhou he needed to talk to her about something important and get her opinion real quick. When she asked what it was, he told her there's a hacker who found out about their resources and is threatening to expose everything if they don't give him a share. Zhou told him she knows this type of people very well. Even though they might be really smart, most of the time they're actually cowards and pretty weak. Zheng replied that he knows that too, and he even wants to kill the guy, but he's worried the hacker might have a backup plan or someone ready to release the info if anything happens to him. Still, Zheng said his pride won't let him just sit there and be threatened like that. For once, Joe actually said something useful. She explained that most hackers, when they blackmail someone and feel their life could be in danger, upload the data to a server and set it up so it gets released automatically if they die or go missing. Zheng nodded and said he's heard about that too. Basically, the server can detect if the hacker is gone, like if he doesn't log in for a certain period, maybe a day or whatever time he sets. Because of that, Zheng realized he has no choice but to let Fanda keep threatening him for now, at least until he finds a way out of this mess. At that moment, Mai walked in and noticed he looked stressed. She asked what was wrong, so he told her to sit down and explained everything from start to finish, hoping she might have some insight. After hearing the whole story, Mai said situations like this are actually very common in the entertainment industry. Rumors spread fast and people believe them instantly, but proving they're false later takes a long time. That's when Zheng got a dangerous idea. Since the information Fanda has about his resources isn't backed by solid proof, Zheng could easily turn it into just rumors and make people treat it like gossip instead of facts. After that, the conversation ended and Zheng went back to the control room. There he called Fanda, who immediately asked why he was taking so long with the resources. Zheng told him he's still preparing everything since he didn't have it all ready, and even admitted he would have killed him already if it wasn't for the information he's holding over him. Fanda laughed and told him to forget any thoughts about betrayal. He said he already set up a program that will send messages containing Zheng's information to every resident in Tianhai City within 24 hours of his death. That's when Zheng realized something important. Fanda probably set the timer based on their last call, meaning the system is counting from now. So Zheng told him he's on his way right now and will bring everything he asked for. After hanging up, Zheng said it's time to start spreading rumors. He went on to the most popular forums and started posting about the missing supplies from the Schengen warehouse. In those posts, he mentioned different people, saying authorities suspect them of stealing the goods. His goal was simple: flood everything with rumors so no one knows who actually did it. That way, when Fanda's message comes out and includes Zheng's name, people won't really care or take it seriously. I mean, nobody's gonna go hunting for those supplies in the middle of storms anyway. Still, even with all that, there's one problem: the threat from Tianhai residents once they receive the messages directly from Fanda's phone. But Zheng wasn't worried. He said he'd rather fight multiple battles than let someone blackmail him like that. After that, he grabbed a bag full of supplies and headed out to meet Fanda, saying he won't come back unless he kills him and makes an example out of him. And sure enough, after a while, he arrived in front of Fanda's house, placed the bag of supplies at the entrance, and left it there. Then he moved away and decided to watch from a distance with a sniper rifle, planning to take Fanda out the moment he stepped outside to grab the bag. After putting enough distance between them, Zheng took position with the sniper somewhere Fanda couldn't possibly spot him. He sent him a message saying the stuff he asked for was right in front of his house, and waited. Zheng stayed there for over half an hour, but it looked like Fanda had no intention of coming out. Zheng started getting annoyed and thought about texting him again to ask why he hadn't taken the supplies yet. But luckily he caught himself. That would have been a stupid move. If he sent that message, it would basically confirm he's outside waiting, and the only reason someone would wait outside like that is if they were planning to kill him. So Zheng decided to stay put and wait it out, no matter how long it takes. After a few hours, the door finally opened. Fanda stepped out holding his gun. Once he made sure no one was near the bag, he reached out to grab it, and that gave Zheng the perfect shot. Zheng fired clean hit straight to the middle of his head, dropped him instantly. Zheng was over the moon. He was already sick of holding that sniper position. He rushed over to the house and unloaded more bullets into Fanda's body just to make sure he was dead for good. Then he went straight for the laptop to deal with the whole message problem. At first, he thought about destroying it immediately to stop the program from sending out his information. But then he changed his mind and stored it away instead. He's sure it contains valuable data about other people too. Plus, he's confident the laptop won't be able to send anything while it's in storage. At that point, Zheng had done everything he could to prevent his info from spreading. Still, he knew Fanda might have already uploaded some data online that could get released later. So Zheng decided to take it a step further. He started sending messages himself to the people of Tianhai, trying to confuse them. He flooded them with names of different suspects in the warehouse theft so no one could figure out who the real culprit was. Time passed and Zheng finally returned to the mansion. He was about to sit down and eat, but first he asked Joe and Mai if either of them had received any messages in the past few hours. Mai said yeah, she got a bunch of messages but didn't understand any of them. Joe added that the sheer number of messages left her completely confused. Zheng explained that he was the one behind it. He did all that to bury the real messages containing his information, which might still get sent out. On top of that, he spammed forums and the internet with fake info, accusing well-known people of stealing the warehouse supplies. The idea is simple. When people receive over 100 different messages, they won't even bother reading them. And even if they do, they'll never figure out he's the one who actually stole the warehouse. The two girls were confused, though. They pointed out that a lot of people didn't even know about the warehouse theft in the first place. Now, because of what he did, everyone in Tianhai will know. Zheng replied that he was just a supervisor at a small branch warehouse, so no one would suspect him. People will assume the thief must be someone important from a powerful family. Mai jumped in, impressed, saying his plan is genius. She said this kind of thing happens all the time in the entertainment industry. If a rumor hits a small or unknown actor, people forget about it the moment a bigger rumor about a more famous actor shows up. But then Joe cut in and pointed out something important. He sent those messages using the system inside the mansion. Anyone with decent tech knowledge could trace the IP address and find his location. The moment she said that, you could see the frustration hit Zheng. Mai realized she might have messed up, so she quickly tried to backtrack and told Zheng she didn't mean to underestimate him. She added that, realistically, the number of people who can actually trace where those messages came from is very small. Zheng calmly replied that she's right. He knows he can't completely hide the traces of the messages no matter what he does. But still, he's confident that what he did will significantly reduce the number of enemies they'll face. Most of their future problems will likely come from people working at major telecom companies. Basically, the ones who really know their way around the internet. Then he told them straight up he already killed Fanda. He made it clear he'd never allow anyone to threaten him. He reassured them that the mansion they're in is heavily fortified, and no one could break in unless they have insanely advanced weapons. After that, he said he'll need their help to set traps around the mansion. Even though the outer defenses are strong, the internal defenses are weak and need serious work. The two girls got excited immediately and told him to just say what needs to be done. They'll handle it. Zheng didn't waste a second. He stood up and told them they can start right away. He pulled out some tools from storage and called them over to explain the plan. He told them all the traps will be placed in the area between the mansion and the outer wall. They'll hide nails under the snow so anyone who manages to get past the wall steps right onto them. He warned them to memorize the trap locations carefully, or they might fall into them themselves. The nails will be embedded in wooden boards and buried under the snow, making them completely invisible. Then Zheng brought out animal traps and told them these are some of the best. Anyone who gets caught in one will have their bones crushed, won't be able to move, and the cold will finish them off. He showed them exactly how to set them up and told them to focus on placing those two types of traps around the mansion, while he'll take care of the rest. Looking out the window, Zheng pointed out there are two main roads leading to the mansion. So he decided to plant mines there, making sure any vehicle passing through would blow up. Still, he reminded himself to be extremely careful and memorize where he placed them. If he accidentally runs over one with his snowmobile, he's dead on the spot. After thinking things through, he went to check on Joe and Mai and found that they had already made a large number of traps. That impressed him, so he took them outside the mansion to show them exactly where to place everything. Once he finished guiding them, he went on to dig and plant the mines himself to secure the area against vehicles. Even though the mines were placed shallow under the snow, he was confident the snowfall would eventually cover any traces. Then he realized something else. He needs a way to protect the regular traps too. If someone experienced attacks them, they could easily disable those traps and either escape or break into the mansion. So he came up with another idea. He connected the traps together with a triggering system, so if anyone tries to remove one randomly, they all go off at once. With that, Zheng completed the defensive line around the mansion. And if anyone somehow manages to get through all that, and also survive the sleeping gas and flamethrowers inside, then Zheng himself will step in and fight using his special abilities. Strangely enough, when they went back inside, Mai was super excited. She kept asking Zheng when enemies would attack because she wanted to see them fall into the traps. Zheng looked at her like, wait, you actually want people to attack us or what? Zheng then told her there's no way anyone's attacking them anytime soon. The ice apocalypse has been going on for a while now, and anyone still alive is probably smart enough not to attack a heavily fortified mansion like this. The only reason someone would even try is if they're desperate and can't find resources anywhere else. Even after that, Mai couldn't stop thinking about it. She still wanted to see people fall into the traps so all her effort wouldn't go to waste, but her weird thoughts got interrupted when she heard a noise nearby. She looked over and saw Zheng installing metal latches on all the room doors. She asked him why he's doing that when the doors are already made of solid metal and hard to break. Zheng explained that everything in the mansion is connected to a central computer system, so if someone hacks it, they could unlock all the doors easily. but by adding manual locks and latches, it becomes much harder to break in. A few minutes later, Zhang finished reinforcing the doors and told the girls everything is now fully secured. They can live in this mansion safely for the rest of their lives. Mai stood there smiling, saying she made the right choice this time. Zheng is cautious, and he'll definitely be one of the few who survive the end of the world. Meanwhile, Zheng was thinking that the only thing left now is cybersecurity. And since he said it out loud, Mai heard him and mentioned they have a relative named Shen Shen who's really good with that kind of stuff. Zhou reacted immediately, saying Shen Shen was studying at a university in Tianhai, so there's a high chance she's already dead. Then she explained to Zheng that Shen Shen is one of the craziest hackers out there. She won every international competition she entered under her university's name. Even though she lost the ability to walk when she was young and became paralyzed, she worked insanely hard to reach that level in hacking and cybersecurity. When Zheng heard that, he got really interested and asked Mai if she knows where Shen Shen is or if she can contact her. Mai said Shen Shen never replied to her, even before the disaster, and after it happened, she still couldn't reach her. Zheng then said that someone with Shen Shen's skills can contact anyone anytime she wants. So if she hasn't reached out, it probably means she just doesn't respect Mai and thinks she's not worth it. Mai's face instantly turned red, and she asked him if he's basically saying the same thing Zhou said earlier. Zheng replied that a genius like Shen Shen would never go ask an actress for help if she needed anything. That completely pissed Mai off, and she snapped at him like, "You're such a jerk." Meanwhile, Zheng was thinking to himself that he needs to recruit Shen Shen to his team. She'd be extremely useful. Plus, she wouldn't be much of a threat to him since she's paralyzed, and on top of that, she's probably pretty, just like Mai and Zhou. In his head, he's already imagining building himself a whole harem at the end of the world. Time passed quickly, and we see Zheng standing in some kind of training ground. He says that Fanda's message got completely buried under the flood of messages he sent out himself. Plus, the info Fanda had was only surface level. He didn't even know about Zheng's storage ability. Because of that, Zheng is confident that normal people won't come after him. Just like he said before, the only ones who might reach him are hackers who could trace the source of the messages. He then continued his training, saying he managed to improve his storage ability. Now he can use it to increase both the speed and accuracy of his arrows. So when he fires an arrow, you can see it's way faster than usual, and on top of that, it hits the exact same spot as the previous arrow, to the point where it actually shatters the old arrow. At that point, Zhang decides to call this technique the super aiming technique, since he can use it with bows or any other weapon. On top of that, he discovers he can wrap his entire body in void energy. When he does that, his speed doubles and he becomes even stronger. Naturally, this has Zhang super hyped, especially since all these upgrades happened in just half a month. Also, since he found out his storage space has so many other uses, he decides to rename it the Void Space to better describe his ability. But as with all power, there's a price. Zhang mentions that using his ability continuously drains a ton of energy. This means he has to be well fed before any battle to keep using his ability for as long as possible. Looking at it, he figures other ability users probably need to eat a lot just like him, which actually makes him super happy. He says he has a huge advantage over everyone else because of how many resources he has on hand. After putting all these crazy 4D chess thoughts together, he feels like there's no way he could lose a 1v1, no matter how strong the opponent's ability is. After that, we cut to an underground base where Shanshan, the leader of the organization, is stressing out over the base's energy problems. Suddenly, a woman in a military uniform walks in and tells him they've finished investigating all the messages that were sent out. Turns out, they all came from the exact same source, Villa 101. As you might have guessed, my friend, that's where Zhang lives. The secretary continues, noting that only one out of all those messages came from a different source. Specifically, Feng, who lives in Villa 302 and happens to be the head of one of the biggest telecommunication companies. When Shanshan sees this message, he asks if they have any info on this Zhang guy. The secretary replies that Zhang is just a small-time warehouse manager for one of Shanshan's branches, adding that there is absolutely no connection between him and Feng. Shanshan is skeptical, saying there is no way a tiny manager like that could have stolen all the resources. Because of that, he's convinced that at most, Zhang only took a small portion of the stuff, which explains why a guy like Zhang is still breathing right now. Naturally, the secretary starts to butter him up, calling his analysis flawless. Shanshan continues his train of thought, speculating that the warehouse owners themselves knew about the whole disaster before it happened, pulled all their resources out, and tried to frame some poor working-class managers so no one would investigate them and cause trouble down the line. The secretary, still sucking up to him, says his logic makes perfect sense. Shanshan then asks if they should send someone to investigate Zhang, agrees with his own suggestion, and tells her to send a small squad to Yanqi City. That way, they can look into Zhang while also searching for resources there, since the city is full of rich people. If we head back to Wujia village, where the tornado guy Chum is chilling, We see him lying down and complaining about losing his last fight against Zhang. With everything that's happened, he's starting to feel like he's not the chosen protagonist anymore, just a side character in this new world. But as he's venting his frustrations, he starts checking the messages blowing up his phone. Since he's a total hacker god, he decides to track down the source of the messages because they look pretty suspicious. In just a few hours, he manages to pinpoint the source and realizes they all came from the same person, except for one. And of course, that's the message accusing Zhang of robbing the biggest warehouse in China. Chum is totally baffled, wondering how a single person could have stolen over $10 billion worth of goods without. Then it hits him, he remembers that in this new era, people have superpowers. If someone has a storage or spatial ability, they could definitely do something like that. Keep in mind, Chum is an otaku who actually has a PhD in anime and sci-fi. Because of that, he gets lost in thought, realizing that whenever he attacked Zhang, his attacks suddenly vanished and Zhang reappeared out of nowhere, almost like he was stored in a completely different dimension. From this line of thought, Chum concludes that Zhang must have the ability to teleport things into a void dimension, which also explains how a poor warehouse manager managed to get his hands on such an expensive sled. Still, he goes back to crying to Feng, asking why Zhang got a much better ability than his. After calming down a bit, he says he's convinced Zhang is the true protagonist of the story, while he's just a mini-boss whose role is to die by Zhang's hand just to boost Zhang's level. After all, his own ice and snow control ability doesn't even come close to Zhang's overpowered abilities. That's what makes him decide that from now on, he'll never try to be Zhang's enemy. In fact, he needs to get on his good side and become his friend. He runs off, shouting that he has to warn the whole village not to get close to Zhang or mess with him. Naturally, the most important person to tell is the village chief. Chum runs over, calling out to him, only to find the chief sipping a hot drink. The chief is surprised, since this is the first time Chum has left his room without anyone forcing him. Chum completely ignores the teasing and tells him he needs to talk about something incredibly important. When the chief asks what it is, Chum starts telling the whole story at 4 times the normal speed. When he finishes, he's out of breath, drinks some water, and explains to the chief that they must never go near Zhang or bother him, and that they even need to change their hunting routes so they don't get anywhere near Yanshi City. However, the old man's eyes light up like a fox. He asks Chum if he's absolutely sure that Zhang has all those resources from the Shanshan warehouse. Chum replies that he's 100% sure because whoever stole them must have a supernatural ability, and a spatial or void-related one at that. The old man starts spacing out, thinking out loud and saying that if they take those resources, they'll be able to live comfortably for years. Hearing that, Chum steps in and tells him to drop the idea entirely. But the old man tells him not to worry, pointing out that there are over 100 of them in Wujia village, and if they team up with the other villages in Chang City, their numbers will exceed 1,000. Because of that, the chief is confident that if they all go and attack together, they'll definitely be able to kill Zhang and take his stuff. Chum replies, completely terrified, saying he doesn't have a good feeling about Zhang, and feels like his ability has a lot of hidden aspects they know nothing about. The old man tells Chum that he's become a coward just because he lost to Zhang once, and reassures him that the villagers are used to fighting because they were in a constant state of war with neighboring villages when they were young. Because of this, he's confident that all the young men in the village are ready to step into a life-or-death battle just to guarantee a future for their women and children. Cutting back to Zhang's place, we see him eating, focusing entirely on the weather as usual. It seems Mei has already gotten used to it, saying the most important thing to her is finding someone who will provide free food and drinks just like Zhang is doing right now. But her thoughts are interrupted by the sound of people coming from outside the estate. Zhang quickly gets up to see what's going on. Being the badass that he is, he tells the others to keep eating while he handles the intruders himself. He climbs out the window, grabs his binoculars to check the number of thieves, and realizes there are a lot of them. But he's confident they aren't carrying firearms, since their clothes look like those of villagers, and he's sure they are. From the Wujia village crowd, Zhang pulls out his trusty sniper rifle, confident that regular folks like them can't possibly breach the estate. He decides to let them walk straight into the traps while he scans the crowd for Chum. After all, if Chum is with them and gets too close to the estate, his ice abilities could actually pose a threat. As the villagers approach the mansion, hyped up about what they're going to find inside, one of them stupidly steps into a trap and starts screaming in agony. His buddy rushes over, asking what happened, and Abu Wardi, the guy in pink, tells him his foot got pierced by a trap hidden under the snow. Abu Labni, the guy in white, yells at everyone to get the guy treated immediately, and warns the rest of the villagers that there are tons of traps buried under the snow. The chief steps up and tells everyone to watch their step, though he tries to brush it off, claiming these weak traps won't stop them for long. To figure out where the traps are, the old man suggests they use sticks and branches to probe the ground before walking. Wasting no time, the villagers start following his lead, and they actually manage to spot some of the wooden traps, getting super hyped that the old man's plan is working. But Zhang is just watching through his scope. He knew this would happen, which is why he prepared and planted explosives as a second line of defense in case they made it past the spiked traps. Seconds later, while one of the villagers is trying to clear out a trap, his foot catches a tripwire connected to the bombs. It triggers a massive explosion in the middle of the crowd, taking out a huge number of them. Even though some of the villagers manage to escape unscathed, others get hit by shrapnel. We see one guy writhing in pain on the ground, and because of his frantic thrashing, he accidentally triggers another rope, setting off a second massive explosion that wipes out even more villagers. Seeing this, the rest of the thieves start fleeing the estate, saying they don't even care about the resources anymore. They just want to stay alive. Unfortunately, a few of them end up triggering more traps while running away and suffer serious injuries. At this point, Abu Labni starts panicking for the remaining young men, admitting he had no idea Zhang was this dangerous. He turns to the old man and says they are still over 100 meters away from the estate and won't be able to advance even a single step further without Chum's help. The villagers start putting pressure on the chief, telling him to call in Chum, because without him, they're all going to die before they even reach Zhang. Meanwhile, the old man thinks to himself that there's no way he's going to ask Chum for help, after he already bragged that they could take the estate without the help of a coward like him. On the other side, Zhang is watching through his scope, waiting for Chum to show up. Up until now, he hasn't been willing to kill anyone just yet to make sure they don't run off before he takes out Chum. On top of that, Zhang plans to wipe out the villagers if they try to retreat, figuring they're only 200 meters away, making them easy targets. His rifle has an effective range of 2,000 meters. That's 10 times the distance they are right now. Back with the old man, he's still fuming and refusing to swallow his pride, saying he absolutely won't beg his grandson Chum for help. He snaps at the villagers, telling them they can't rely on Chum for everything and that they need to stop acting like scared mice. He steps to the front and explains that all they need to do is move step by step and clear out the traps. Then, pointing at Zhang's estate,